it was like this sort of hallowed ground. This wasn't just another movie. This was another Star Wars movie. This was like
Mhm.
an event.
The
Yeah.
boring end of the traumatizing spectrum for me.
Yeah.
This one was dead on arrival. It really didn't have a chance. The trailer was terrible. As soon as Palpatine is like laughing and back, you just oh my god. I mean,
That's actually not only my favorite scene in this movie. If we're just talking films, that's actually my favorite scene out of the entire saga.
if you're guilty of this sin, I don't know. It's fine, I guess. But you're what I'm talking about. I don't get it. Can you explain it to me?
Every motion, though, I mean, we talk about every scene being iconic from A New Hope. Every motion of that film is perfectly executed. Like, there's no wasted
Yeah.
movement. Everything, all the sound cues, the music build-ups. I mean, the music.
Yeah,
Every scene he's in is perfect in this movie.
Yeah,
Every
it is.
single scene.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis, Star Wars. I'm Callan, this is Matt,
Welcome, everybody.
and this is Evan.
hello everyone.
Today, we are ranking the Star Wars films. It's probably a long-awaited thing for us, considering
It only took
we
us
talk about them every now and
10,
then.
15 years to actually talk about our rankings for these films.
I mean,
Yeah,
we've
but we
talked
took
about
like
it
8 years off,
loosely in the
right?
past, right? This has definitely come
Oh,
up
yeah.
in informal form at some point.
Sure.
But yeah, we can actually dive into it in a little bit more detail, because I think the list is going to be predictable but somewhat interesting at points. Matt, you mentioned yours are a bit all over the place in terms of your enjoyment.
Yeah, I mean, I can I
I
can I
think,
can
yeah,
justify my selections to a point.
Hmm.
There might be the occasional apology I have to issue, but that's okay.
you'll have it.
Um,
You're going to be taking point on the listing for this, aren't you? So we'll be
Yeah.
working off your
we should set the
placements.
ground rules.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're looking at the 11 theatrically released live action films. So there's no Clone Wars movie. There's no like what are they called? Just like the series, the Disney series is
Mm.
the they call them like legacy series. I don't know. Whatever the new canon is doing, that we're not talking about like the Christmas special or the Ewoks cartoons or any of those random things. We're not talking about the great micro series from Gendy Tartakovsky and his team that aired on Cartoon Network. Actually, we've already talked about that, so
We
you're
have,
not
yeah.
missing that
Yeah,
anyway. You can find that somewhere else. But and we're not talking about any books today for once. I mean, they might come up just by accident because it's us, but we're going to try to keep it mostly on topic. Stay on topic, right? Like, yeah.
Stay on
exactly.
target. Yeah, indeed.
There you go.
Mhm. And
So,
I think we should also stress too that this list is based off of our personal enjoyment.
Very
So,
key.
you know,
Very
obviously,
key. Not
yeah,
objective quality, which can obviously be a little bit
right.
debatable anyway, but yeah, pure enjoyment.
yeah, yeah.
But
All lists are this really anyway,
Yeah,
but yeah, that's all
exactly.
we're going for, and it'll be quickly clear that that's the case with me. I run into some questionable ideas.
I
I
mean, your
question
favorite's The
myself
Last
on some
Jedi,
of
right?
this.
Definitely top of the list for you.
That's the best
Of
movie. Yeah.
course, yeah.
I mean, that's the second best. You're forgetting the best one. But yeah, no. But anyway,
controversy.
so just to we did a little bit of a dice roll to see who would kick things off, and I won the toss, so I'll be kicking things off. We'll give our rankings as we move through, but we'll discuss them in depth in the order in which I bring up each film. So
Working in reverse order as well, so starting with worst to best,
Mhm.
correct?
yeah, we're starting with the best, i.e., the worst. So
If you
are you
weren't confused
confused yet?
before.
You
Yeah.
are now.
Anyway, all right.
God, just before we say anything else, right, because it is relevant to all the films, of course, it is relevant to all the films. That music, I mean, it's obviously the classic thing that brings us into all of the main series films, but it cannot be overstated how much of Star Wars is carried by John Williams' track for me.
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
it's all
that's
great
like
by
half my
itself
notes.
anyway. Don't get
Half
me
my
wrong,
notes are
but it
that. Yeah.
is the like peak. I mean, we'll
Yeah.
get into it, I'm sure, particularly with things like the prequels.
I
But
wrote my
yeah,
notes and like
it's
that's pretty much I bring that up.
it makes Star Wars, and Star Wars. I'm convinced Star Wars wouldn't be half as popular as it is if it wasn't for the John Williams music. It's something about it
Have you
strikes up.
guys
But
watched
yeah,
the documentary they did about him yet?
no, I've not got around to that.
Mm,
Need to
I
do it.
think I think I've seen an ad for it, but I haven't watched it now.
Okay. I haven't watched it either. I was hoping one of them was going to say yes. I was hoping somebody was going to say, yeah, it's
Sorry about
amazing.
that.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Exactly.
That died. But okay, well, so we're all frauds. We all need to stop what we're doing and watch that. So we'll do that at some point. Maybe that'll get its own Fanalysis someday. Maybe it's that good.
Maybe.
I
That would
mean,
be
But yeah,
it's
interesting,
John
yeah.
Williams, you know.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail, but
But
yeah, that's the first thing we have to talk about. John Williams is Star Wars for me. So
oh
yeah,
yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
cue
he is the
credit
lifeblood.
roll.
I mean,
Yep.
it's
We're
quite
opening now.
literally like the first thing you're introduced to when you watch any of these, in addition
Mm,
to the opening crawl, of course.
yeah. So yeah, Matt,
Right. All
your
right.
best worsts number 11, please.
Coming in at number 11 for me. This will be a big shock, I'm sure, to everybody. Bottom of the list for me is episode 8, The Last Jedi. Now,
Who could have seen it coming?
are
Right.
we, do we disagree on this?
Oh
What are
no.
your guys' rankings for
Oh
bottom
no.
of the list
That
here?
is also my number 11 is
Okay,
the last.
so we're
Yeah.
starting in unanimity or unanimity. Is that the
Yes,
word?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unanimity.
It's a tough one, isn't it? And I've been drinking a little in my defense. I don't know what his problem is, but but that's I was going to bring that up.
I just sound drunk all the
This
time.
film it turned me into a day drinker. The Last Jedi. I mean, it's terrible, right?
It,
It's
we
I mean
talked about it
At
at the
everything.
night,
time,
so I
obviously, in
have to drink during
depth.
the day.
Yeah, what can we
Yeah.
really say about this that hasn't been said before in terms of quality? I mean, from the
So
structure to the presentation to the directorial style
The
to the
character
I have
just
assassination of Luke
baffling,
Skywalker, one of the most beloved
yeah, the
characters in
baffling decisions
film.
made by characters for characters. It's like literally every
I,
misstep
I
that
will
this movie can make, it makes it.
I will say this because I wrote one note and I'll get to I'll summate my point on the note. I'm not sure that this is objectively and arguably indisputably the worst film on this list because Rise of Skywalker also
It did
exists.
happen, yeah.
Um, but this one here, the reason why it's bottom of the list for me, and the one note I wrote is that for me, it's the single most depressing film in the entire franchise. I feel shitty just thinking about it, and I've
Mm,
only seen it one time, and I feel like it's burnt into my memory because I can
yeah,
remember it pretty well. You know what I mean? I haven't forgotten it, and it just makes me feel like lousy when I think like that's the story you did. And
yeah.
it's also baffling because Ryan Johnson, I really like his work when he's not doing this. Like pretty much everything else of his that I've seen, I've enjoyed. I've not seen his entire catalog, but I kind of wanted to hate him when I saw him like Knives Out because he had already done this, and I loved Knives Out. So
Mm. I don't know what was
it'll never
happening.
make sense to me
I don't know
why
what
this
was happening.
happened.
This one in
I'll never
particular,
understand.
I mean, it's a terrible, terrible film by itself, but it's also really depressing, like you say. It also had the character assassination of Luke Skywalker, which is unforgivable. And one of the things that I think turned so many about it, a lot of people liked Force Awakens when I hated it, and I think everyone I know personally went from love to hate just on that alone, just on the fact that they ruined Luke. And not just to like, oh, he's not the Luke we knew. It was the counter opposite. Like they could not have made a worse decision for Luke Skywalker than they chose in that. And I mean, we've talked about it before. It's known to death. But on
Yeah.
top of
I
that,
almost
it's really boring.
It,
Like the whole film
yeah,
is
it's
really
just
boring. Like the setting,
see. I
the
didn't.
framing of it, the stuff,
I
what they do within the world. That it does not feel like it cares about its own universe. For me,
but it
my
but it
my
tries to
take
come
on
off
that
like it's doing so much more than it's actually doing. That's also really bad
that's
because
the annoying
mm,
thing.
it
Like
treats it as though
that is
it
it.
treats it as though this is literally like the most universe shattering of all the saga. And
mm,
yet when you break it down objectively, how much actually happens in the grand scheme of things? Even like disregarding EU, disregarding like even like if you look at all the films up until this point, how can you say just from a narrative standpoint that more happens in this than what's come previously? I mean, say what you want about the prequels and how much happens, but in terms of like overall impact, like this doesn't even come close to that. And but it tries to sell it as though like this is the one that you have to watch, but it just doesn't come off that way, and it just leads to this ridiculous tone. And that's the biggest thing, like we've been saying, like the tone of this is just all over the place, not just from a character
Tone is
perspective. Everything.
tone is
It's so
my
bad.
big issue. Tone has been my big issue with every film except for Rogue One since Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the
mm.
Sith we'll get into later, but
Yeah.
tone tone is often that in like very often in that film.
Mm.
But tone, yeah, the tone in this one, I did not find this one boring. Speaking just for myself, I was fascinated by what they made, like for all the wrong reasons. I also will use the word boring a lot in places that will offend lovers of certain films. Sorry about that. But also but it's okay because people think that what I love is boring. So, what comes around goes around, or whatever.
Mm.
I said that backwards, right? What goes around comes around. But anyway, this movie, um, it came out at such a strange time too, because like Carrie Fisher had just passed away, like right
Mm.
before it came out. So that didn't. It was kind of weird and depressing
The Mary
anyway.
Poppins moment
And
felt
then
particularly odd,
Yeah.
having with that having been the
It
yeah,
case.
just
and
yeah, and
the
I think
irony of her being the one of the main cast that they
Mm.
wrote as living through that movie, like and she was gone, in real life, and you still had Mark Hamill, but I don't know, like I mean, I'm almost less depressed by what they turned Luke into than what they did to Mark Hamill on set.
Oh
Like, I
yeah,
mean,
I mean
he
everyone's
just
seen
he
that
just
video. Everyone has seen
like
that video. That was angering in
oh my
it's
god,
kind of it's a
that's like
more
beyond
extreme version of
disrespectful.
like
That's
it's
just
like when you see Ian McKellen breaking down with all the green screen
yeah,
when he was doing the
exactly
Hobbit movies.
that. Yeah.
It's
yeah.
you just feel that this person is like an actor and like deeply cares about their role and wants an experience like what they had back in the day
Yeah,
the first
that's
time
the
they
key
did
part, the
this.
contrast, the high that
Mm-hmm.
they had originally, both with
Yeah.
McKellen and with Hamill. They came from like peak cinema, the absolute best of the best that you see from their own respective genres, and then this is what they're given in the modern era. It
Yeah.
was really depressing, and for, in Hamill's case, angering for me. It was just
Yeah,
wrong.
I mean
They made
it's
all of the wrong calls,
Infuriating.
and this film is
Yeah.
the outcome of it.
and I understand, sometimes the actor's wrong, and sometimes the script is right, and some people
Hmm.
it's like a dueling egos thing. Some people, I mean, like William Shatner, like I mean, there's certain people that just because they originated the role and they're an iconic person who's been around since the dawn of like the franchise or television, really in his case, almost. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to like bend the knee and kowtow to their every demand.
Hmm.
But like when Mark Hamill tells you, I fundamentally disagree with everything that you've done with this character. And when he's openly just talking shit, when he's supposed to be promoting the film, it and he's such an affable, lovely guy, it seems to. Like
Mm.
I've never heard a bad word about him from anybody. I've never heard anybody about, oh, Mark Hamill, he's difficult. I hate working with him. He's a hack. Like whatever. I've never heard that. And he's got like a long, illustrious voice acting career. Everybody speaks the world of him. Uh, I just can't imagine that it's a case of like where the actor was just wrong. I,
Hmm.
I don't get it. And also the story. Again, certain things I don't love anyway. I was never going to love him being killed off if you were going to do it, but there's a way you could do it, I guess. There are certain ways in which you could do that. You're going to do it like that.
Mm.
You're going to have his reason for being like in hiding in the Jedi Order be collapsed because he tried to murder his nephew for
No fucking reason.
almost no
He had a
reason.
bad
Like,
dream. The guy who redeemed Darth Vader, the guy who
yeah,
issued in the Return of the Jedi. The next thing we see from him, going purely by the films, is oh well, Jedi needed to die.
see,
What?
Yeah.
I'm also okay with the Jedi being in the wrong. I'm totally
Yeah, for
receptive
sure.
to that.
Sure. Like
But
that's not
If
the
it's done
issue. The
right.
but
issue is how it goes about it and who it's being projected from. Standing over your nephew's bed with a lightsaber ignited.
well,
Like,
they made Luke in the wrong. Like Luke is the villain of that movie. I'm sorry. Like Luke is wrong. Like I mean, Luke sucks and does nothing, and then he dies.
yeah.
So it's like, okay,
Not our
You
Luke,
great.
basically.
unironically see where Kylo Ren is coming from. Like,
Mm.
And
yeah,
then there was like the madness of like uh, getting Andy Serkis to be this Snoke character who wasn't a character anyway. He wasn't really a character. You had Benicio del Toro show up as like a fake out kind of navigator who knew the way to some MacGuffin at some point. You had
Oh yeah, that was the other part. This MacGuffin
uh,
Central. Jesus, yeah.
yeah, well the next movie was even
so
Even worse, yeah, of
more
course.
worse
But
so.
than
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But this movie was like it wasn't boring. I can remember it all these years later,
Mm.
having only seen it the one time,
But
and it's
that's the
burned
thing.
into my memory. But
That's
it's
true of me
offensive.
as well. That's
It's
true of me as well. But
Yeah,
and I agree. But
yeah,
for
but
me,
boring is not the word.
I don't know. But it was
no,
like all of
but
the
it's
aspects of making it memorable, all of the
memorable in the
aspects that
worst.
make
I'll
it
tell you.
engaging. It wasn't engaging in like I'm enjoying myself or this is interesting or this is fun. It was just this is so bad that all my synapses are firing and I can't stop it. So I guess
Yeah,
boring is
that's not
technically the
boring
wrong
though.
word.
That's like,
But
it's you were in a state of shock.
It's
Is what you were in. It's not
it's
boredom.
it's traumatizing. Is what it
traumatizing,
is.
yeah, I guess
Yeah,
is probably the
yeah.
boring end of the traumatizing spectrum for me.
Yeah. And it's like, they keep trying, and also like the constant rug pulls, like, oh, we're gonna subvert expectations just for the sake of it to
Oh
be
god.
edgy, but that's not how filmmaking works. Yes, you can subvert expectations. Yes, you can be shocking, but shock value just for the sake of it, which this film does so much of, it's like it just comes off as hollow because it doesn't have any real impact because you're not building up to it. Like, oh, this character betrays this character. Oh, this decision's made. Oh, this flashbacks actually meant to represent this instead of this. It's like, oh, now this character's dead. Didn't see that coming. It's like, well, like, what's this mean? Like, what does any of this matter if you haven't given us time to really breathe and understand these
Well,
situations? It just doesn't mean
so
anything.
at the time, I remember there were people were like, I don't know, the internet uses the word cope now for everything. People were like experiencing cope at the time. So people were telling themselves, I think, that it was good because they spent their money to go see it with their friends like 5 times. And there was like this bizarre thing where you had to watch the movie several times to understand how deep it was. That was like something people were saying.
Nope.
And I was like,
Exactly.
no,
Once
I
and never
mean,
again.
yeah, it's not one of those movies, folks. Like I'm not going to say movies like that don't exist. Although
They're definitely
I can't
rarer
really
than some
come
people say, I think that's for
Mm,
sure.
there are movies that benefit from a second viewing, or movies that maybe work even better upon a second viewing for many different reasons. This is not one of those situations. There was this bizarre notion, and I don't know if this is just what people were saying or if it's in fact true, like what the mission statement was. In other words, I don't know if this is just what happens or if this is what they wanted to do from the start, where we're gonna kind of like recreate the way that the first ones didn't have like an overall through line at the beginning. They just kind of came together film by film. Star Wars was a major success before it was A New Hope. Just Star Wars. Well, we got to make more of these. Empire Strikes Back. What do we do next? And then you have like Return of the Jedi. You have a different director each time. You have
Mm.
people arguing about whether or not to kill off Luke or Han or one of the mains or somebody. Harrison Ford wanted to die. It's like you had these, and then Richard Marquand died, I think, before Return of the Jedi was completed. So Lucas completed it. But this, I think that people were saying, let's go back to that and have a different team do each one. And again, I don't know if that's actually what happened or just what people said they were going for as kind of like a loose explanation for what we got. But the bottom line is it was terrible and
yeah. And that is
terrible,
why,
just
yeah.
terrible.
I can't think of a single redeeming quality about this film outside of things, service level
I
stuff like
think
special
the shots were
effects
in focus.
and yeah,
Yeah, no, no,
exactly.
I can. The
It's
shots were no, no. So
Yeah.
the shots were in focus. The actual actors were good. The script
mm,
was terrible, and everybody did like the moment where purple hair
yeah,
blew her
blows up.
ship
Yeah,
through the other
exactly.
ship.
That's what I'm about to say. The special
So
effect aspect of it, the surface kind of aesthetic vibe, all that stuff, that was
yeah,
done really well. I mean, that was fantastic. And that moment in particular, I said at the time, and I'll say it now, was breathtaking. Like that's one of those moments in the cinema where it's like, wow, that was handled perfectly. But it was in a
yeah.
dogshit story where nothing matters and everything's stupid. So, so who cares?
But yeah, I feel terrible just like kind of thinking about it. That's why it's at the bottom of the list.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
uh
That was
yeah,
number
so we were
11.
all in agreement on that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now moving on to number 10. This is where I think we might stumble a bit. This is where I've put Solo.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm getting a
What
feeling
did you
this is
guys
coming
put?
down to the whole
I
bad films are good, elevating some other pieces
yeah.
for you.
So,
Possibly.
Well, we'll
yeah.
talk about that. Yeah.
Mm.
Solo's
What did
number 8 for me.
Solo was also
Okay.
number 8 for me. Yes.
Okay, great. So Solo is here because it's the single most forgettable. That's all I have to say. What do I remember about Solo? Um, this isn't sorry, that wasn't a
That
gag.
wasn't a free.
Oh, it's great
That
though.
felt
No.
like a gag. It worked as one. That is about the same for
Mhm.
me, though. I found it
Yeah, it's
extremely
Okay.
boring, but not
This is
but
boring.
inoffensive. Yeah,
This movie was boring.
but
The
it was
last movie I
inoffensive.
was
That was the difference. It got
mesmerized by.
that's
it
Yeah.
messed up some of the world building stuff. The setting didn't feel realistic or believable, or like they understood how the world is supposed to be realized and feel like it's been lived in. All that stuff was falling flat for me, and it made it boring. But it wasn't doing anything like it wasn't just taking a giant dump on everything that had come
Like
before it.
li
in the
Yeah.
same way.
Legitimately, like, is there a snarky like female voiced droid in this movie, or did I make that up?
There is.
Did
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah, Lando's
Why is
droid.
it there? Lando's droid. Okay, I was gonna say I don't remember why it's there, but okay. Daenerys Targaryen is in league with Darth Maul at the end. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And there's kind of a train heist thing going on. And there's a scene where the only scene I remember liking is like they're like on a beach or something, and like they're like, "Come up, Han, we got you." And he's
Oh
like, "I
yeah.
got backup coming," and then Lando takes off in the Falcon, and that was the
Mm.
only scene that I liked. Like I remember that and go, "That was funny." I don't remember anything else about this fucking movie. So I in good conscience, I mean, there was a time when I had this dead last, and I said I can't do that. It's got to be Last Jedi's
Yeah.
worse. But I remember
Mhm.
Last Jedi. I would consider Last Jedi possibly better filmmaking. Just I could remember it. It's a complete movie. I'm sorry to say
Yeah,
that.
on a formulaic building block structural level, correct. But in terms of everything to do with substance, I think this one still takes the edge for me, even
Yeah.
though it's
Yeah,
boring substance. At least it doesn't
yeah.
offend. You can at least see where they're going with it. It wasn't making every wrong choice possible. It was just
Yeah, it's inoffensive enough to where like you can at least, even if you're not like necessarily as entertained by it, you could at least see what they were kind of attempting to do. And again, that's how I'm pretty much in deadlock step with
Yeah,
Callan. When it's
yeah.
not it's not as offensive, not necessarily because it's good, just because it's just not doing as much wrong. And I will say to this, the one bright spot I do kind of like about this movie is some of the casting. I thought what's his name, Alan like Einrich or something.
I
I
don't know.
actually like. I
I,
actually thought his
I
portrayal of Han was pretty decent. I
yeah.
thought
I
he
think they
actually
did a
did
good job.
I can't
With
remember
what
a
they were
single
given. With
thing
what
he
they were
said or
given, they
did.
did an all right
I
job. I
can't
think.
remember anything, and that's not his fault. I can't
Mm.
remember anything in
Right.
this. Like it's I don't even remember why. I don't remember why anything happens. Not one thing. I
Well, because it
nothing.
has, yeah, it has very little consequence in the grand scheme of things. It's just for me, it's more a case of like, you know what? If you took these actors and actually gave them a competent script, I could maybe see this going somewhere. But the problem with that is it's like it just doesn't, and it's so kind of disjointed. And that's the thing too. It's like I'm not asking every movie to have like some sort of crazy galaxy-wide like story impact. You could do a small story in Star Wars. I'm totally cool with that. I think we all agree with that too.
I
But at the
asked for
same time,
that till I was blue
you
in
have
the
to at
face. I
least make
never
it,
get that, and I've given up.
yeah,
But
you have
yeah,
to at least make it entertaining to
my
be
guiding
worth it.
my guiding principle with things is I prefer entertainingly bad to boring every time. Boring, like just forgettable, I think is the worst crime. If I can remember it, that's better somehow, unless it's something like Last Jedi where it's actively like
Repugnant.
kind of like on the offensive point, like
Yeah.
uh this is what I like I said, it was going to be debatable. We're debating it. I'm standing by it.
Mm.
Solo, I don't remember you. I can't in good conscience put you further on the list. You didn't leave a mark, and I kind of saw it like one and a half times. So it's really bad that I don't remember anything,
Mm.
I don't remember it having a point of view or a point or a purpose. And it very much in my memory, the only thing it feels like is that it wanted to be a bridging point for another story that I don't think ever got made because this
Mm.
this did
Yeah,
very poorly.
I think they were planning on making at least another one of these, but it just never
I think
materialized.
it's
As an added spin, it
possibly the
also made
lowest
the
box
mistake.
office of everything here. I think
Possibly,
it's
I
the
can't
lowest box
recall. I would
office.
hazard a
Possibly,
guess that was the
I don't
case
know
based on
about
the
that
others we've
off the
got.
top of my,
Um,
yeah.
the other thing that
I
it
could
did,
believe it.
just as an added spin to it, was trying to fill in gaps that didn't need filling in from the originals as well. Like the whole, not even
Right,
gaps, the wrong word, but the stories that were alluded to and mentioned as
right.
the Kessel Run and when they got Millennium Falcon from all that stuff. They didn't need that storytelling. They just went,
Yeah.
let's connect it to the original. All of those little mentions will now have a relevant connection. It's like, yeah, but if this is what it's connecting to,
Well,
it doesn't enhance.
Yeah,
It dampens the original
but
story.
yeah. Or like Han,
on that,
or like Chewie's nickname or
Yeah.
Han's last name. Like we did not need either of those
Any
things
of it. It's just
whatsoever.
absolutely
but
unnecessary, and some people don't seem to grasp that when they're doing these storytelling
I
concepts.
when can we sidebar and say, what do you mean when you say some people don't seem to grasp that? Who are you talking about primarily? Are you talking about the filmmakers, or are you talking about the fans as
Film,
well?
a bit of both, I guess. I mean, the people who are making movies
Yeah,
and
because
having it,
it's a both ways
audience
thing, right?
asks for it. audience asks for it, and that's probably why the
Yeah,
filmmakers
like
deliver it. But they should know better. I
Yeah.
think we don't need to know what happened when Yoda was
yeah,
a
I
kid,
put
for example. We don't.
Yeah.
Lucas himself, sorry, makes that clear that we don't need to know about Yoda's
You
backstory. It
just see
kills the
everything,
mystique.
yeah.
And that's true on a lesser level of all the other things, like where we found the Falcon and what the deal was that lost it for him. All that stuff. It
Yeah.
doesn't need
you know,
to be explained.
Lucas
One,
is very strange, and the things that he thinks you do and don't need to know don't make any sense when
Yeah,
you
he's
listen
very
to him
inconsistent.
talk.
He's absolutely inconsistent. People are kind of. We'll talk about that in a bit. I think when we get more to the prequels. But yeah, there's a.
Yeah.
I personally feel a misunderstanding of what he represents and his place in the Star Wars history by fans at the moment, partially in reaction to the sequel hatred, kind of
Right.
having been built over the last few years.
And
Yeah, but
I will.
so the only reason I brought this up, sorry, go ahead. I interrupted. What are you saying,
Oh, sure.
Evan?
Sure. I was just gonna say a minor thing, like not to be like the EU purist here or anything like that, but like, the idea, like, because I remember some people were saying like, oh, Han's not a character that could headline his own film. It's like I disagree with that. Like there are books or comics centered around Han that I think do very much work, and so I think the character in and of himself can headline his own story. You just need, well, a good story, which this was not, you know.
I
So I
mean,
just wanted to bring that up because I
yeah,
disagree with the notion that like Han and you can't do a Han and Chewie centric story because you can, because they've done it and it has worked, you know.
Han kind of breathed life into the originals. If you took him
Mm.
out, you'd be lacking more than a third of like
Yeah.
what is fun about the original films. I mean, like I think that there were generally two kind of, I won't say every fan, but like especially, and not to stereotype everybody, but you think especially little boys. I think some liked Luke and some were more like Han. You know what I mean? And there's kind of a difference between the two, and some of it's like these are the really broad, categories that you can dump him into, but it's sort of the attitude of Han,
Archetypes, that
and
kind
just
of
like
thing.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's less to do with the things they do in the story and just more like what they represent, and that sort of general attitude of the irreverence for everything. Where'd you dig up that old fossil? Hokey
Mm.
religions are no match for a good blaster. I'm going to shoot your ass. I don't have time for this. I want what's in it for me. He's and Luke's a little.
Han is incredibly quotable. That's for damn
Yeah,
sure.
It's very incredible.
like Luke
Star Wars in
is
general, to be
the
fair.
farm boy. Like, yeah, Luke is literally the farm boy, and so like Luke is just. I won't say that this is like objectively true, but Luke isn't as cool as Han is.
Mm.
But like, at least when you're first meeting him, like Luke is he hasn't done anything with
He
his life.
grows
That's
into it.
why.
Yeah, that's partly why you like his journey, because he is developing and growing with it. Han's more fully formed by that stage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's just as I think it would be ridiculous to say he can't. He's like top billed in the other ones. He's Harrison
Mm.
Ford. Like the other ones
Yeah.
were like kids compared to him. Like at the time, even he had gone on to star as like Indiana Jones, like while they were making these, and kind of got a little big for his britches. Like I don't need this anymore. I don't need to be second banana to Luke Skywalker. Like kill me off. I don't care. I don't like
Mm,
doing these anyway. He's
right.
the best acting of his career is when he came out to promote the sequel trilogy because he didn't really talk shit about those.
Yeah,
And
held
he had already
held
he
the
already
line
knew
there a
what they were.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It's interesting because I've never been. Han was never even close to my favorite character. I always loved every part of his role in the story, but it
you're
was never
very
someone
much
that
not in
appealed
the
to me.
archetype of little boys I was
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
You're very much
exactly.
not.
Not
Yeah,
even fully in the Luke by
it's not an
comparison, but
insult.
more just like
Yeah.
the mystical Jedi side of leaning. I was more
Callan,
interested on the
your
philosophical
favorite
side.
character,
But
I mean, you would be more likely to enjoy Mon Mothma just on
for
the
sure,
basis of a Wikipedia. You know what I mean? Like you're not the person to judge
no, for
anybody else.
sure,
But
for sure.
you're a very unique man.
Absolutely. But going by that, taking that as given anyway, I think he works better in an ensemble cast as a character. But that said, there are
They
stories
all
where
do.
he.
That's the thing.
Oh yeah,
Every single
of
one of
course,
them
for sure.
does.
Yeah,
Right,
but
right.
Han in particular, I
You
feel
don't
like he
want
works
just a
better because
Luke
he
movie, really.
enhances the characters around him. You can have a Jedi focused story with Luke, and he can be interactive with other characters, and it works more as a central kind of through line. When Han does get that, for example, in the Thrawn trilogy, I love where they take him in that, and there are other stories similar where he kind of goes on his own adventure, and he can be interesting in that way. But I understand. I don't agree, but I understand the instinct people have when they say that he can't carry his own film. You have to be very particular in how you craft that story for me, and that is not what they did with Solo. They went back to basics. They went formula. They went, okay, let's just smash out all the beats everyone knows. Let's line the path to make sure it's set up for New Hope and everything that gets referenced there. And it just, to me, that was unnecessary. And as Matt said, it came out very boring.
Yeah.
And but again, that bit there, that specific thing, and this was why I tried to dive into it, the thing of like tying in like every loose end with everything ever. That's
Mm.
a Star Wars curse that everything is making terrible mistakes with. That's not a Solo thing.
Oh no, for
Um,
sure, it is connected to
and
everything. But
and
this
it
is one of the
eh,
story was built around that.
right, but I mean like I don't understand how Star Wars fans' brains work. No offense. Me being one, like okay, so there's an episode of the Clone Wars entitled Heroes on Both Sides. Why is that even something people recognize? It said that at the start of Revenge of the Sith. So it was a dumb line then. What did it even mean in the context of that movie? You watch that movie, it's clones on one side and robots on the other, and Palpatine's in charge of it all. Who's the hero on the other side? What are you talking
Mm.
about? Yeah, it's well, this episode will show you that. So okay, but why was it even why is that needed? Like, why was that ever said? It was dumb to say, just take it out rather than embellish it. And that's just a tiny example. Then you get the Kenobi show. From a certain point of view, what I told you was true. It's like, well, yeah,
Oh
okay. I guess he's just off the hook for all that now. Haven't we just made that far more interesting and enlightened by showing you that, yeah,
Darth Vader
Hayden Christensen
acknowledged it.
told him,
Yeah,
I killed him. You didn't. I killed him. Okay, okay. So
great.
it's profoundly like been robbed
Mm.
down to like the last of the barrel of all of its mystique over the years. So I would never mention it squarely in the context of something like Solo. It's a problem with everything they do now, and has been for a long time. I would argue before Disney acquired the
Oh,
license. But
absolutely.
they've got
Uh,
nothing else to work with. I mean,
Mm.
Ahsoka season 2 or whatever season they're on. I don't watch the show. I see buzz online of people are going, they're bringing back Hayden Christensen to be. How many times have they had a re-up between Ahsoka and Vader, or a past version of Anakin? Or how much nostalgia? That show's almost 20 years old. In 3 years, the 2008 series that will begin turning 20, folks. How many times
Which
do you
makes you
need
feel
the
really
same
old.
Skywalker? How many
Among
times do you need the
everything.
same? You know what I mean? It's like how many times does Gandalf need to come back as a new color? I mean, it's not. It's only special once.
Mm.
Once. This redoing everything and tying in everything. I agree with you. It's a farce in Solo. Although I would agree with you, but I don't remember it. I'm taking your word for it. I don't remember what happens. But
I,
it's a problem with everything they do.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
if you're guilty of this sin, I don't know. It's fine, I guess. But you're what I'm talking about. I don't get it. Can you explain it to me? Um,
Again, for people who
you
get
don't
something
need
out of
to, but I
that,
don't
I'm
understand
glad
it.
you get something out of it. But I do
I'm
personally
not.
agree with Matt on it.
I question it.
I think that the people who are making these stories need to step away from that and start to remember that this is not how the classics were made. You know, the stuff that is the most popular and the most heralded is stuff that takes its time to create something new and invigorating and original and play with concepts that are true to Star Wars as a whole. I mean, Star Wars always has a certain
You
theme
can fall into
behind it, you
rhythms and
know.
archetypes and
Yeah,
themes, yes,
exactly.
but
Yeah, but you
you're
have
not
to
retelling
you
the
also have to
do
same
make
something
sure
the
that
new
you're
each
same
time.
filling up
story.
Andor
telling,
being the
because
prime
then
example within the new material. Andor
yeah.
is Star Wars and is also very different to what we've seen before, and it resonates with people. People recognize that. You know, they need to take the lessons
Can
from
I
that kind of show and play into that.
can
Yeah.
I move us into number
Yeah, yeah. Move
nine
us
now?
on. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Number 9 for me is episode 7 for this reason. Squandered potential, and it didn't tell a new story. And it's above Rise of Skywalker to me because Rise of Skywalker made me laugh my ass off. Like I laughed till I cried watching that movie. That movie is so funny. I've seen it twice. Not when I lied. I have seen it twice because I saw it with my family afterwards. Like I mean, that movie is so bad. So we'll talk about that. But yeah.
Mm.
So episode 7 for me squandered all the potential. I went to bat for it because Callan said when he saw the trailer they're just going to do another
So it's just
Death
going to be
Star, and
another
I
Death
said that's
Star
so
run. It's just
stupid.
going to be another Death
No,
Star
You
run.
were
I said
predicting the
that's
future,
the
buddy.
dumbest thing. I said that's so stupid. No one would ever do that. And it's exactly what they did, and they did it as dumb as you can. They said this one's biggerer, like
Biggerer and
Gigantic. It's
betterer, and it
gigantic.
kills entire systems. And
Yeah,
oh look, that new
that
republic that
was
we've done
literally it.
absolutely nothing to build up is gone. Isn't
That
that
was
big and
literally it.
bad? It's like
Yeah,
what?
and we
They,
have to
they
search for a droid that has this map, and
Now,
oh, it runs into
again,
someone
I
else.
they built that film and they built it from the start from okay, how do we recreate the original, The New Hope? People love the originals, let's do that again. It's like, yeah, but no, because it's been
this is what
30
I've been
years,
complaining
guys.
about
We've
for like
built
the
that
last
Starting off
five
with
again.
minutes.
creative
Yeah.
bankruptcy. Yeah,
This is
but Force
exactly what I'm
Awakens,
complaining about.
yeah,
Just
Force Awakens.
do
Oh yeah,
something
sorry.
new,
Yeah,
please.
For,
Go ahead.
I was just about to say, yeah, Force Awakens is number 9 for me, and
Same for me.
but yeah, it's I mean everything we've set up until this point, it's
Oh wait,
the
so we all
there's
synced
a
up on that?
yeah
So we're
number
all
9.
three on agreement.
Yeah.
That's the one we're
Yeah,
doing. I didn't realize that. Okay, cool. I thought I
yeah,
had to go to bat and defend my decision.
no,
Cool.
for real.
So we
It's
agree on
just
this.
yeah, yeah, but like
I did not expect that.
it goes back to what we were saying before. There's a difference between, certain homages and total creative bankruptcy, and this
Yeah.
is definitely a
I
example of total creative bankruptcy because everything quote unquote new that it does, just what in the world? Why do I keep? This is
Oh,
not how this
virtual
movie makes me
classrooms
feel,
ahead.
by the way.
for listeners, random little visuals of balloons and fireworks and thumbs up keep going up from Evan. It's just funny that this has never happened in any of the last 10 years, and it's now happening all
Yeah,
the time.
seriously. I mean, but like for the record, balloons and fireworks are more entertaining than this movie. Um,
It is like we said. It's doing everything. It's doing everything that what we've just spoken about written large. Like the whole film is designed to be. Let's do A New Hope again. Everyone loves A New Hope. It's like, yeah, but you can't do it again. It's 30 years past this point. The world's bigger.
Yeah.
The franchise is bigger. The setting
just
is
go
more
watch New Hope
developed.
then. Like
Yeah.
that's really all it comes down to. It just fails on so many fronts because not only is it fundamentally misunderstanding what made A New Hope so incredible, but also recognizing, like Callan was saying, it's been like 30 odd years since then. Both the audience and people's expectations have grown. And like I was saying before, homages are one thing, but the fact that they go so far out of its way to just, recreate these things, it just comes off as lazy. And that's really a shame because, you know, is this movie boring? Yes and no to me because it's like it's boring because I've seen it all before. I mean, I guess you could say
it
some
was
of the
it
spectacle
was
being
it was disappointing in my opinion.
yeah,
Like very disappointing. But it wasn't like every frame of the movie that way. I was with it, and my opinion on this hasn't changed since I saw it. I was with it up until you had the Nazi rally, which is right around the point where they shoot like a
The
five
laser,
oh
yeah.
street
yeah,
laser blast that destroys all the planets we've never heard of. Because I've only seen the movie once, right? But in my memory, that Nazi rally is pretty much like your introduction to the First Order. And I'm like, okay, but I need to. I mean, not talking about everything aside from Kylo Ren himself. He's obviously there from the first scene or whatever. But I don't understand the setting that you've put me into. Yeah, it's Star Wars. There's good guys and bad guys. Okay, and the roll and crawl tells you stuff, but it was necessary the first time. Then it became a tradition. Then it became a crutch. You can't just have the roll and crawl say, "Ah, First Order, Jedi are almost gone. Good versus evil again." That's not. You can't go from Return of the Jedi to that without telling me about like how did we get here. And
hmm
I would argue that the first, back when that was the only sequel we had, there was still time to improve on the story. But I would still argue that in that movie, you should have had more of an understanding of who Kylo Ren was as a character. He never worked
Mhm.
as a character for me because I didn't like him and I was confused by him in the first appearance. That's not the case with Darth Vader. You might wonder what's beneath the mask, what's his past. You don't need to know to understand the goings on of that movie, and they tell you enough that you kind of understand anyway. Oh, okay, old Ben trained him. Okay. He hunted down the Jedi. Cool. He's a bad guy. He's badass. He's dangerous. Stay away from him. Got it. I mean, and he's got a goal. He's looking to thwart the rebels, get the plans back, prevent them from destroying this thing that his boss wants that he doesn't even care about. Got it. I get it. I don't know anything about the First Order. And I don't care these days, but it was a very serious problem at the time because in that first half of the movie, things were working well. You meet the little Maz Kanata lady. I can't remember much about her, but the scene where like she's explaining like the lightsaber and the history of everything or whatever, all that stuff was good filmmaking. And
Mm.
that's around the point that it all fell apart. And I realized, oh shit, Callan's right. It's just not only is it another Death Star, it's coming in at like the tail end of this movie, and it just felt like really threadbare. We don't care about the setting. We don't care about advancing the story from like the last place you saw it. This is just a reboot,
That's
basically.
that's the
And
biggest
that was the
crime for
problem
me.
of it.
That's the biggest crime for
Yeah.
me because even considering things like A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back, right? The very first thing in Empire Strikes Back is the setting up of the Hoth base and the scene setting for that story. The world instantly feels more lived in because they've taken the original films, which just was just a film, didn't need to have an expansive world or universal story or richness behind it. You know that came later. But it came. You know, Empire Strikes Back started breathing life into that. What did the world feel to live in? What was all the little details, the technologies, the way they show the military working, all of that kind of stuff. Things that don't matter when you just think about film for its own sake, but matter when you're building a kind of universe and a setting. By the time of Force Awakens comes, we've had 30 years of that. Say what you will about the prequels, and there is much wrong about them. They're at a
We are going to
really
say about
bad, yeah, they're really
As
bad
we
films
will, as we
overall,
will get
guys.
into.
It's pretty much inarguable, but there's a lot to love about them in. I mean, putting aside the obvious of the music, in the setting and the world building and the things that it brings to the table. It expands the world, and much of our favorite stories within Star Wars comes from that expansion. It comes from a respect for the material and for an enhancing of the setting and the world that we're living in. Force Awakens, I mean, obviously it's come off the back of all of that being deleted anyway, but even just going by the films does not do that. It goes straight back to a New Hope mentality where nothing matters. You don't have to build on the backstory. You don't have to build on the world. You don't have to build any of that. We can just reset and do whatever we want, and it won't hurt the enjoyment of the audience. And to me, that was
Mhm.
it was the single biggest crime. What turned me off to it so much because it just deleted everything that we'd had that came before. And it showed a profound misunderstanding of even the originals they were trying to replicate. Because, like I said, the jump in the feeling of the world from New Hope to Empire Strikes Back is gargantuan. I mean, we're reading the Thrawn trilogy in preparation for our discussion of that now. It happens again then. Return of the Jedi to the first Thrawn book. It's massive expansion of the world and the richness and the texture and the way politics works and the characters involved with it. I mean, you mentioned Mon Mothma earlier, but she's a prime example there, Matt. All of that understanding and that expansion and stepping forward into the larger world is just not just ignored, actively removed and insulted with the Force Awakens, and it
Yeah,
only gets
and
worse and worse as
Yeah,
the
and
films
I
go
think,
on.
the
and
thing
to
about the other
yeah,
thing, can I just
Of the three of the sequels,
can
sorry,
I
not things that
yeah,
were
go
can
ahead,
Rogue One.
Mac.
I dig in just my one point before because I keep forgetting to say it. The one thing there were many things that how am I going to say this? The movie had its issues, right? And it was always like after that movie is out and the other ones haven't come out, that movie is already flawed, and there's certain things about that are not going to change.
Mm,
There are certain things that could have gotten better. None of them did, but they could have gotten better, some things,
mm,
right? So there was still some hopes that I had. Like Luke could have gone on to still be a good character.
yeah,
That didn't happen, but he could have still gone on to be a good character. What was killed in The Force Awakens for me, beyond everything you just said, which I agree with was an issue, they killed Han, and that was okay. I'm okay with Han dying, but at the point that they killed him, it was never possible for him to share the screen with Mark Hamill or Carrie Fisher again.
hmm
Um, so that was one thing that was like, okay, that's just never going to happen. That seems like a real blunder. I mean, why are you doing these? There's fan service, and then there's something a little bit higher than that. You know, like fan service. I don't think you should kowtow to that just on principle. I think there should be something more to it. But this would have been a special thing, and it's just awkward
it's a
and
moment in
weird. You
cinema.
never
You know,
get to
it's one of
see.
those moments in cinema if they had done that. It's a
Yeah,
piece of history.
Absolutely, it would, yeah, the ultimate reunion and just the coming together and that true connective tissue.
I mean, you
And
think about the fact the only reason why the three of them have shared lines in a singular film is because they cobbled together what remained of Carrie Fisher's material and then somehow got Harrison Ford to come back as a spirit or whatever, and then forced in Luke's ghost. That's the only reason why in one of these movies, all three of them have a speaking line. You know, together in the
Mm.
same movie.
yeah,
Uh,
speaking line, not collective
not
appearance,
yeah,
speaking line.
not
Mm.
like a scene together, but just
Yeah,
speak in the same movie. Yeah.
which that's something in and of itself. And to your point earlier, Callan, about connective tissue from films. I think what we're all kind of saying at this point is like I'll use the transition from New Hope to Empire that you brought up earlier, Callan, as like an example. Like when you open that movie, when it comes to like dialogue, there's a way of writing that kind of reinforces not only the passage of time, but also what the current, state of this universe is at that point. Like even when we first see Luke in that opening when he's on his tauntaun, he says things like, "Oh, Han, old buddy, do you read me?" And then because okay, old buddy, they've had time to like form this bond. And then later when Han's talking to Leia with the general, he's like, "Oh, you're a good fighter, Solo. We really hate to lose you, lose you at this point." And then Princess Leia is like, "You can't go now. Like we've at this point we can actually do this." And like little things like that not only helps solidify the passage of time, but also the impact that these characters have been able to. So even though you don't see it, you get it from just the way they're speaking. However, in Force Awakens, you really don't get that. Yes, you have these scenes where, like, Han is talking to, like, Rey and Finn and the Falcon, for example, and but that's just a big info dump. It doesn't come off as natural.
Well,
And you have a lot of
can
other
I
scenes like that throughout the movie where you don't get a sense of time passing in this world because the dialogue either
they don't care about
doesn't
it.
can I
reinforce
say
Time
it,
passing is a big
it,
issue in those films. I know
yeah,
it's always a
but
small
it
but
piece
doesn't
of most story
reinforce it in a way that
scenes,
comes
but
off
it's a
as
problem.
natural than it did
yeah,
in past films, and that's why it doesn't feel like as good of a connective tissue to me from a writing
uh,
perspective.
it's also like you're talking about the original movie to the next movie, which is a sequel. And you could argue that, yeah, the first movie ends with a big celebration and the medals and we won and all that.
Mm.
But at no point does it feel like the Empire just doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if they had never made another movie, you'd go, oh, they beat the Empire and everyone lived happily ever after. But as soon as Empire Strikes Back rolls around, your brain automatically goes, this is still going on. You don't
Mhm.
wonder how come this is still happening. It's a much more serious grievance. Like when you're talking about at the end of Return of the Jedi, they beat all the bad guys. Yeah, I know Imperial Remnant and Thrawn and all that. And
But again, that was
they
made
they
to work. It
they threw
made
that out
logical
anyway.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But I mean, they
And
they
they
threw that
deleted
aside
all of it.
anyway,
Yeah.
right? So they can't rely on that. The end of Return of the Jedi. I'm sorry, like without added information, the Empire is done. It's done. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It's gone.
Much, yeah.
Where did the First Order come from? Why, after the last time we saw hopeful, Luke Skywalker seeing the Jedi spirits at his father's funeral pyre, why is he not a Jedi? What's happened? You have to explain those
Why did
things.
you make
They so
those
you like
choices as well? Because they're pretty
Exactly, and
odd
they
yeah,
don't.
choices.
they
Right.
they the choices they made the choice I think because pretty much there's no creativity.
Yeah.
Every era of Star
Originals.
Wars, the Jedi are died off. Every time. You go to KOTOR. Uh, yeah, we got an army of Jedi. KOTOR 2. The Jedi are almost gone. 5 years. Yeah, and they tell a story about how the Sith hunted them all down, but it's the trope. It's
Mm.
there are almost no Jedi left. I mean, it doesn't go deeper than that. And arguably, I'm okay with that because I mean, I don't love that, but
You
I
can
don't
make it
rag on this
work.
one for
It's a
that
bit,
because
yeah,
they
it's a
do
Right.
it
bit of a,
themselves.
yeah,
Like so
it's,
many in the EU, they do it.
you can make it work, but the
Um,
problem with these films, they don't. They just make it, oh, it's one
Yeah,
Last
yeah,
and
Jedi,
it's
no
like
exceptions. It's not like a
yeah,
bunch of
and you
hidden ones every now and then. It's just one, done, the end of the world.
right. And that's the thing too.
and
It's like you can't. We all acknowledge that this was essentially Disney's like jumping off point to start their own universe, but you can't go into it with just a mentality. Oh, this is where it all begins. We're gonna have this line of dialogue lead to this book and this comic and this TV show and this. Like you need more than that, and that's kind of the thing. That's the way this movie comes off. It doesn't come off like a coherent continuation.
they
Like
were
Matt was
trying
saying,
to
it comes off like a reboot meant to set everything up. Problem is, everything
yeah.
is set up
What you're speaking to
horribly.
is they what you're speaking to now with like the attempts to like delete the ODU and start essentially a new one just as a springboard. They're trying to choreograph spontaneity that never works. But you have to do the job one like right the first time, and
Mhm.
then people love it so much they want more of it. So there's a demand for this other story that never needed to happen, aka Thrawn, KOTOR, every other story we love from the classic EU. Those didn't need to happen. Am I glad they happened? Yeah. Would they have happened if you hadn't gotten the actual story of the films correct in the first place? No, because it wouldn't have become something that people wanted more of. People craved more. You have to do that. They tried to skip ahead to we're just gonna, and it's worked to some degree. I mean, they're still they've published 50 books, which I became aware of last
It's
month or a
crazy.
month or two ago, which blows my
Yeah.
mind because I've sampled like three of them because I'm just not interested in what they're doing. But I don't know if it's as successful as they want it to be. I'm sure that it's not on some level because they really
Scaled back. Yeah, they put them out to they hit the attention economy issue and maxed out on it,
and it
so
doesn't feel
pulled
special
back.
anymore, which
It
in
really
some
doesn't.
sense is just, I
It's
mean,
MCU
some things
schlock,
I always argue
and
this.
MCU can be
Yeah.
good. Don't get me wrong, but most of it's schlock
Yeah.
because of the pace they've put it out, and
It
they're
feels
starting to
it feels
realize that with Star
commercial.
Wars,
Things need to go away for you to be able to miss them. You know,
yeah,
if they're
it's
always around,
burnt
you don't,
out.
and also the quality is just so
Yeah,
anyway, but I mean, they're always here.
you could have 20 original trilogy films. If you had them once every year for 20 years, you would get bored. It doesn't matter how good it is, and it's not good
Yeah.
to begin with. But what they're doing right now is
Yeah.
it's basically trying to launch the MCU from Civil War as a starting point.
Yes.
Like, no, you have to have Iron Man, you have to have Thor, you have to have the slow build, burn build to make sure everyone grows to love it. They fall in love with it, and like I say, you can't manufacture spontaneity. It's just
Yeah.
a bad idea, and they've not stopped
Yeah.
trying to do it. And I think the only creator
Yeah.
we've seen out of them that has understood how it's supposed to work is the Greater of Andor. I've not seen
Right.
an exception like it
Well,
since.
on that point, are we ready to advance?
Yeah.
Yeah, next
So
one.
my next film is the
This
other
is number
sequel,
8.
Rise of Skywalker. Huh?
This is your number 8.
This is my number 8. Yeah, which is episode 9 is my
Yes.
number 8.
This
Right.
is where
So
Callan and I
um
had Solo. This is where Callan and I had Solo, obviously.
yeah,
Rise of
so
Skywalker. And this is
I
my 10, by the way. This is my 10.
Likewise, it's my 10 as well. And I think this is,
oh,
as
I
you're
got
about
it
to
wrong from the
explain,
beginning. I thought that's why I said I told you I was going to mess up the numbers. Like so I thought we all agreed on the first entry. That's why I was surprised. That's why I was defending my choice. I thought we were all aligned and
We
we
did all
weren't.
agree on
So
the
you
first entry. Yeah.
we did?
Last
There's
Jedi.
What
Yeah.
did I
11.
say? Oh, gotcha. Right. Day drinker.
We'll put the lists out in the comment section below in the descriptions, guys, so you can track them. But yeah, you get in the general gist of these though.
This is
yeah,
this
so-
is this is our 10. This is your 8.
Yeah, and that mostly comes down from the fact that you enjoy bad films more than us, I think, right?
It's
Right.
funny. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have anything to say in defense of my pick other than I laugh when I watch this. I feel like crying when I watch the other ones. I didn't feel like crying. They're miserable. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the number 7 is really disappointing. The back end of it is just like, that's what you did after all this time. And number 8 is thoroughly miserable. This one was dead on arrival. It really didn't have a chance. The trailer was terrible. As soon as Palpatine is like laughing in back, you just, oh God, oh my God. I mean, this one had no chance.
But
It was
also,
terrible.
right from the opening call,
Terrible.
somehow Palpatine has
It's
returned.
absolutely
It's
terrible.
Somehow that line made it through
It's
editing.
like,
How
what?
did that make it through editing? How did that make
But
it through?
you,
How did that
see,
make
this is
it
the
into
thing. Here's my example, right? Whenever we talk about the Last Airbender movie, Callan, without fail, as many people do, brings up the big Earthbender dance, right? And as like single worst thing
Yeah.
in the movie. And to me, the whole movie is that bad. I can't single out like a single terrible movie or like moment from the movie and be like, that's a transgression. That's a cinematic crime. The movie is. The whole movie is,
Mm.
Rise of Skywalker is like that. There's not a single thing that I thought worked especially well. I thought it was hilarious, like from start to finish. The MacGuffin plot, the fact that they
the
landed on the
knife,
planet.
the
Yeah,
knife
they
where
were
you
on
pull out a thing,
the
hold it
knife.
up.
Oh my God, the
Death
knife.
Star
The
wrench.
knife.
And if you do it in
Like
just such a way, it points to a place
the
inside
amount
the
of
Death Star where you find a way.
yeah, the amount of the amount of
What?
thought that goes into an idea that bad and to create a prop for that
Mm.
purpose. It's a lot of work for something that's just so terrible. It's not as simple as like a phoned in lazy just it's like somebody thinking they're clever and they're like Jar Jar Binks or something. Like I mean it's so bad and I don't really want to talk about it much.
There's not much to talk about. Everything we said about Last Jedi is true here. It's less either by virtue of it
terrible.
being less offensive in its own right, or just the fact that it came second and you've already been burned out by the previous film. This was just
I think it bears
so
mentioning.
universally
Literally,
terrible.
the
But-
only reason I put this above Last Jedi, honestly, is number one, the whole character assassination of Luke thing is just completely unforgivable. And to Matt's point, there are some moments that are just so bad that you could at least laugh at it. So there's
I
that, and
I was
so I
almost
guess you're not.
crying laughing at this. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, like
literally, I like it's so funny to me. Like everything about Palpatine
It,
is unbelievably just terrible, and the fact
I
that they
am
actually got him to
all
come
a
back for it,
it,
you know,
it's like, oh my god.
it's
She
so
has.
bad.
They
And
have
then
the
they had
gall to
the
have her reflect
they
the
had the
line. It's like,
horses.
you're
They
like,
had
are you though?
the
Ooh.
yeah, they had the horses tromping through in space. Like the two ladies were leading like a nature force with like the
Oh
horses.
god.
They had uh Lando had been stuck on the same planet for like 5 years or something like that since he and Luke came here, and then Luke fucked off and just left him there. There was like there was the scene where like Luke's ghost came out and started acting like Yoda, you know, and like he was
Oh,
like in the same position. It was so bad, and I loved it. It was terrible. I didn't love it.
trying to play that Dagobah music to try and invoke it when it
Yeah,
just
yeah.
not.
A moment so
Oh,
lame with like one of the best, most moving pieces of
That's
cinematic
something, by the way, we haven't not
core.
mentioned. We mentioned at the very start how John Williams carries Star Wars on his back
Yeah,
with the music. Even
yeah.
when Star Wars is incredible, he does that. That's something a sin that we haven't talked about with the sequels here. The music is absolute crap. I mean, it just
yeah.
by
Well, I mean,
comparison to
well, no,
Star
it's
Wars
just
a tier. It just can you think of a single
I won't
memorable theme?
None of the
Ray's
original
theme is,
songs
but that's
they
just
make for this.
Hogwarts.
I won't
Kinda,
call
yeah.
it I won't call it crap because I that speaks
It's
to
derogatory. I
him.
I say crap. Obviously, yeah.
He
It
is so
is.
here's the thing. The way that
Crap
the way
relative
that
to other things, I guess.
the way they made these, here's one thing I'll give George. I give George a lot of shit, but
As
it's
you
pretty
should.
clear when you're watching behind the scenes stuff that he sat and like talked with John Williams about everything, you know,
Mm.
and he gave him feedback about. I mean, I remember there's a clip where he was listening to like the Duel of the Fates track, and this was when they would have been making Phantom Menace, and he was talking about how this will work in some of the stuff that'll be in the third entry. So I don't think it's possible given how they worked on these, that anyone told John Williams, "Here's what you're looking for," and he just
Mm.
did.
It has to be that because he's too much of a master of his craft for this to
you
have
know
been
the
his fault.
Abrams
I didn't mean to
JJ.
imply it
Speaking of
was, by the
JJ
way, for the
Abrams,
record.
because he did JJ Abrams made the first or the seventh and ninth entries of these, right? Um, he did the Star Trek movies from like 2009 and onward a bit, but Michael Giacchino did the music for those, and he's a good composer. He's a pretty great composer. He's done things like the Batman recently. He's done like the Incredible score. He's a great composer, but he those movies I can remember that sound of like the bombastic orchestral Star Trek theme he created. Then I'm pretty sure he changed like a couple of notes, and that became the Doctor Strange theme. I think the same thing happened. Like if you watch Doctor Strange, and it'll sound vaguely like Star Trek if your mind is
Mm.
keying into it, and it feels very much like he's like, they'll pay me for my table scraps if I just give them these Star Trek
Mm.
sheets I didn't use, and I'm pretty sure that's what John Williams did, not because he got old, and not because he doesn't care, but because I don't think anyone sat and told him, "Here's what the story is."
Mm.
If he's watching a cut of this, how can he know like what the First Order is? How can you write an iconic
Well, I mean, there's nothing there to
jingle
know.
for
Even if
that?
they had sat down with him, they'd
Yeah,
have had nothing to say. So
that's my
it
point.
was, yeah,
That's
it
exactly my
was,
point.
yeah. And I didn't want to imply that it was his fault at all. Bear in mind, yeah, I was too
Yeah,
derogatory anyway. I shouldn't
it's
have said crap. I mean that relative to the Star Wars standard for one. But even by that,
yeah,
it was. I mean, certainly more music than I could have created.
what
Obviously,
it is like
it's
there's
good,
nothing
but it's just
iconic in it
there's nothing memorable.
because there's yeah.
Yeah.
It's apart from the Ray's theme, which I stand by is just the Hogwarts theme. Like it just plays
That's
exactly
what I'm just saying.
as a theme, like
I'm
you
trying to
say
help you.
from yeah from the table
It's the
scraps.
Doctor Strange Star Trek
Yeah.
thing. You know, it's the same thing.
Um,
Exactly the same thing.
but with that
But
exception, nothing
There's
sticks into mind. It doesn't even reuse for the
I've
most part
asked this.
original trilogy material. Like it doesn't even try and
I know.
harken back for the
I
most
complained
part.
that
Yeah.
about. I complained about that too. I complained about that with Kenobi also. That had
Mm.
no Star Wars music. But I asked this question before a long time ago, when we first saw Rise of Skywalker, and it's a problem with all three of these movies. It's not just Rise of Skywalker, but that was the nail in the coffin. What is this the trilogy of? What
Mm.
is this the story of? Now, we can't answer that having seen them all. There's no way anybody was able to tell John Williams what's the story about. Just do music. You know, so that's why it is what it is. But yeah, it's these movies are terrible.
And the music
I
doesn't
don't
help them as a result.
can't really tell
yeah,
already. Yeah.
they we'll talk about like the sequels. Obviously, we're getting there. Or I mean prequels. But these movies, in my personal opinion, they're not all necessarily far worse in just a sheer technical sense. They look better. Some of that is just by virtue of being made at a later date, obviously,
Mm,
with more advanced technology. But there isn't a point of view behind these. And I disagree pretty thoroughly with the point of view that went into some of the prequels, um, and the way that those were rendered. But there was at least a vision. I just don't agree with the visionary, but
mm.
there was a vision. This was just printing money. And that's why Disney bought it. Of course they did. They just wanted to print the money.
But you
But
can do both.
even
That's
just
the
by
great
accident,
crime. You can reach for
yeah,
the
but
for
just
the stars and land on the moon. You know, you
people
don't
can
have
do better than this
to
by
fail.
accident.
To
This is so terrible. Like it just
Just go
awful.
in it with the intention of wanting to make something good and actually put effort into, crafting a coherent narrative, and people will appreciate that. It's just fundamental writing 101. But when you just do it with, without not only not respecting what came before, but not even putting in the same sort of passion that made the others so memorable, isn't any wonder these turned out the way they did.
So I think that pretty much says it all. We're ready to move on to the next entry. The
Yep.
yes,
sequels were the
yeah,
sequels.
the different
Okay.
era
Number
really now. Yeah.
seven.
If we weren't recording this today, I wouldn't even be thinking about them.
Mm.
I spend very little of my time focused on those. And like the pain is gone, except for when I remember them. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like that. And that I
Exactly.
think is the difference. That is the difference between those and the prequels. I'll never
Mm.
forget the prequels because there was a real desire for the prequels to be great. Um, and by some people's reckoning, they are. But not mine. And all I can, but I'll get into that.
I
But the
think they're
prequels are
helped.
closer to my
Just an
heart.
overall point. I
I
think they're
grew up with
helped
them.
by two things. One, that there was a creative idea behind them. Like you said, we don't agree with it wholesale, but there was passion behind it and care. And two, we were kids, so that does help. We grew up
Yeah.
with them. That's
Yeah.
naturally going to inform our experience of them, of course. Because you can guarantee that, and there were many of them, obviously. People who had grown up
And
with the
this
originals and watched the originals coming to the
Right.
prequels thought they were garbage.
this would be the perfect time for a segue, except that my next film is Rogue One. Is there a
Number.
disagreement here?
No,
Did you
I,
guys
I also have
deviate?
I also have Rogue One as number 7.
Mine is actually Attack of the Clones.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
So we'll come back to
We'll
it.
talk
But
about
yeah,
that.
Rogue One
come back to
first.
that. Yeah.
We'll talk. Yeah.
Yep. I was gonna say kind of struggled with the most in terms of like really narrowing it down, because I remember when I first saw this, I actually, enjoyed it. But this movie's actually gotten worse over time for me.
Yeah.
Although I still consider it far and away the best of the Disney movies. That's really a low bar.
Yeah.
That being said, this movie, like a lot of the hype has really worn off for me for this film, and I've seen it, more than once, and it honestly gets worse each time I watch it.
Can I read my note?
Yeah, go for it.
Rogue One, a decent movie, but the first act is a waste of time. I've seen it 3 times and enjoyed it less with each viewing. The abandoned original plotline probably held more promise. Period. That's my thought on
And it's
Rogue One.
exactly true of me. I've only seen it the once, with a few scenes except being the exception. But I've said at the very start, that entire film was carried by the final third. A fantastic final third, don't get me wrong, but it was all that people cared about in that film.
I saw it with two different groups of friends in the theater, like within the same week. That just didn't happen with any of the others for obvious reasons. In fact, I saw episode 9 in an almost empty theater. That was adding to the misery of
Yeah,
just this is
I did.
terrible.
I did the same.
Yeah,
Funnily enough, just as a fun little fact, I did the same in the cinema that is 2-minute walk from a set that comes up in Andor, which I'll mention when we do that review.
oh, okay.
Oh, interesting.
Just coming to
But
mind.
so Rogue One, I admit I wrestled back and forth between this and my next entry, which is spoiler alert, balance. So Attack
Same.
of the Clones teetered back and forth. Okay,
It was
yeah.
true
I
for
went
me as
back and
well. It's
forth
funny
with
how
that
we had the
too.
I
same
was
experience.
It was
I was
so
like,
difficult because
yeah,
you can say that
because
for
I would argue. I think I would argue that this is probably a better movie than
I think
Attack
it
of the
is, yeah,
Clones, but
indisputably.
I don't enjoy it um as much. Like I don't enjoy Attack of the Clones
This
very
is the
much
thing.
either.
That's why
But
it's such a
but
flip
it's
right.
between the two.
It's
yeah
you
it's
could say that like on a technical level it's better, but it doesn't.
yeah
At the same time, it's not as memorable, and it doesn't really. Again, it doesn't since it is kind of a standalone, it doesn't really advance one way or the other. Like we were saying about Solo, like Solo wasn't a story that needed to be told, and I could argue, like, yes, you could, like, obviously the Death Star plans get given to the rebellion. That's a major story, but again, like, did this really need to be told? Like, if we're being honest,
Yeah.
It didn't. It
like,
didn't.
Yeah.
But having
it
said
really
that, it
didn't.
was told reasonably well. The first 2/3 are kind
Sure.
of and you can hot swap them with whatever you want. And it would still work. But the final third was very well executed. And it was at a time when Star Wars was an all-time low. So it was kind of like, oh
Right.
wow, we've got a bit of
Yeah, well,
energy and vibrance and excitement. And
Yeah,
that's what I was
and
going
the
to say.
classic
Like when
Vader
I
scene
saw
and all
it,
that stuff.
that's what I was coming on with, the attitude I had after the 2 theater viewings, and then when I saw it like 2 or 3 years later, with my dad and my sister, just like a home movie night, when we were watching other things. I think it might have been Halloween. We had like pizza and some, just a night at home together. And I thought, this is not. I mean, I always knew it wasn't perfect. I always kind of hated the first third of it. Everything to do with, what was it called? Planet
Jeddah.
Jet, Jeddah? Yeah.
Jeddah.
Everything there. Absolutely everything about it, aside from the actual just amazing filmmaking of the actual attack on it, which looks great.
Mm.
But I don't care about any of it. And I can't relate to the characters is the thing. We've talked about like the passage of time. That was the movie where I really noticed, okay, we met her as a little girl when like, her dad was like abducted or whatever, or forced conscripted by the Empire or whatever to work on,
Right.
he
The Death
helped
Star.
design the Death Star, right? And
Yeah.
eh, then she grows up off camera. Like I wanted to see some of that stuff, and because the first plot is her having to like reconnect with like her mentor Saw Gerrera or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about him, and he was cuckoo for cocoa puffs or what? Like he was nuts, right? And I'm just like, I can't relate to this character, and she I could have, but we skipped all the stuff that would have been them bonding and being a mentor and a student. So we're cutting to the end of the relationship, and
hmm
it was just a waste of time for me.
it just doesn't come off as like very like natural. Like all the characters in this, like sure they may have aspects of them that might be, kind of interesting. I mean, Saw in particular, obviously he's from, the Clone Wars and all that. And
It's
I
such a
like
nothing episode as well that they chose to draw him
yeah,
from. So why?
it is that is kind of a random reference, but what I will say, I mean, honestly this is a big strength in Andor's thing because I did not really care for Andor just in this
Oh yeah,
movie.
no, like not really, no.
Like
Mm.
the fact that the show actually made me like him is kind of a feat of the show itself. Because in this,
Um,
he just kind
and
of comes off as just kind of there, and that's kind of how I
and
feel about like all the cast. Like,
Mm.
yeah, they have their own quirks, but at the same time, you spend so little time with them,
I like
relatively
uh
speaking, that it doesn't. I don't know. They're not that memorable.
I like I liked the droid,
Mm.
whose name I
Oh
can't
yeah,
remember.
It doesn't
But
help.
designation.
But I'm
yeah.
with you on that.
But
Agreed. It was humor done well. Was that case for me as well?
on the point though, he reminded me of I5YQ, which is the name I submit for, or like in my head for him. But that's Lauren Pavan's partner, not his property, right? Like in Darth Maul Shadowhunter. But similar personality and like also kind of good in like combat, despite not really being designed for it.
Read that book, by
Uh,
the way.
um, yeah, yeah, we're gonna cover it at some point
Mhm.
on the channel. But the you said about Andor, even in Andor, he's not like the reason I love that show.
Yeah, I
He's
was about to
good
say
in
the
it.
same
He's a much
thing.
better
Yeah,
character.
exactly.
But
It's the people around him that
and
you
the
love.
actor is really good. I've seen him in other
Mm.
things. Diego
Oh,
Luna's a
sure, yeah,
talented
it has
actor.
nothing to
It's
do
just
with that,
yeah.
yeah. To
But
to me, it's like like Andor actually made me care about
mhm,
Andor, whereas this movie really does not, and that's kind
yeah.
of like
It's a
and
plot-focused film, right?
to me like the really standout character in this, like the standout original character in this film is ironically director Krennic, even though
Yeah.
Yeah, he was pretty well
he's
done. Yeah.
very he's very
Yeah.
stereotypical. Like he's obviously like the classic like oh I'm the
In
general
over
who's
my
not
head.
as high ranking as like my superiors and I'm jealous and I'm bitter even and and I feel like I deserve more than I have sort of thing. Like it's very stereotypical, but his performance, just like he puts like I don't remember the
Yeah,
actor's name.
Ben Mendelsohn is a talented.
He
I haven't
freaking
seen
puts
him.
so much
I've seen him
energy
in
into it.
bad
You
movies.
can't help
I've
but
seen him in
remember
bad
him.
movies. I've
And
never seen him be bad in a movie. He's really
And
talented.
again, going
Yeah.
back to the time that the film came out, this is a time when every single Imperial or First Order, whatever the hell you want to call it, officer was a cartoon character, like a bad cartoon character on screen. So he brought a bit more life and realism to it, even as intentionally over the top as he was. But the main problem with this film is it's a plot film. It's built on plot. It's not meant to. It's not a character piece. It would work better as a character piece because you could then have all of the plot heavy stuff come as the final third and enhance what is otherwise just a fantastic action set piece. It's not, you're not meant to care about these characters really by the design of the story, and that to me is a flaw, especially because you're supposed to at the very end feel something when they die. I mean, particularly with Andor, now that we have all the fill-in backstory and stuff and the connective tissue with everything that goes on in that fantastic show, I don't care when they die. I mean, it's like, oh, it sucks that they're
Well,
going,
I think I think that's why I have this here as opposed to the next film, Attack of the Clones, because this one just is such a downer, like ending, but it's also like it doesn't hurt enough for me to rate it more highly. Like
it didn't earn the sadness. It was sad because of the context, but it didn't earn it on a character level.
I just don't feel it. You know what I mean? I don't feel it the way that I very easily feel that I could have if we would go in and tweak. I want to go in and fix the movie.
Yeah,
it's got all these
which is
things
to
in
its
it
credit,
that are
really,
just
because you care enough to
not
bother,
correct,
which is not true of the others.
Absolutely, because we know that these characters like have potential. Also,
that is the difference between the prequels and the sequels. But the sequels, I don't care. They're terrible. Delete them. I want to go in and fix the prequels. I want to fix them. You know what I mean? Like that is the difference right there. Yeah.
It's also worth, because like we should definitely bring this up because I feel like people are probably thinking this. Darth Vader's in this movie.
Well, yeah, the walk down the corridor is obviously a fantastic scene that everyone talked about at the time.
A lot of people,
it's really badass and everything, but
cool.
but
it is ultimately just an action piece.
Kind of like
it lacks.
It is. It's just
if
kind
not
of there.
If not for the original trilogy, it would be a great moment. Don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't have the weight that it does. So it's kind of it's a point in the favor of the originals rather than the Rogue One story. But it's a decent film, fantastic final third, lacks the emotion that it could have had if it had built the first 2/3 better. And as Matt just said, we care enough to try and fix it, which is huge. Feather in its cap compared to the rest of the sequels, which we just don't want to even think about, let alone addressing anyway.
It's the only Disney product that like I would honestly want to like retool and slot into the old continuity, because with the right tweaking, I feel like you could easily do that. So I guess that's something.
Just a humorous note. You said this is a story that didn't need to be told, and I agree. But now that it has been, justice for the Bothans. Many Bothans died to bring us the information on the second Death Star. Where's the Rogue One story for them?
No, wait.
Rogue Two.
Yeah, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. This is one that I think everyone got wrong back in the day when this first came out. Isn't the Bothans line in Return of the Jedi?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it's a second Death Star.
So we need a Rogue
2 for the second Death Star plan stealing. Because it was so important to have the first plan stolen.
Rogue 2.
Okay. I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, sorry. Stupid joke.
Yeah.
It was like something they would actually do, funnily enough.
Yeah. It was like it was the day drinking combined with the fact that I'm often bad at being into when you're joking because your voice always sounds like serious. But I thought you were seriously saying, and I was like to the point where, do I know what happened in which movie? I was seriously questioning myself. I wasn't well equipped for that joke. Sorry about that. But anyway,
what we're saying is Rogue 2, a Bothan story. Make it happen.
Yes, exactly.
Bring it.
Don't
make it happen.
Make it better as good, but better than the Rogue story. Anyway, that was my number 6 rather than number 7. My number 7, which is I believe your 2's number 6, is Attack of the Clones, right?
Yeah. So and it was really this could have. I went back and forth like a million times with those two entries. This is the worst of the prequels, and I say that.
It's a pretty. I think nowadays, especially, that's a pretty agreed upon opinion. Like there was definitely a period where everyone was saying, Phantom Menace was the worst, but that's definitely shifted.
I
I
think
feel.
You
I
know
think the
what?
idea of which one was the more boring,
You know why I
the
choose?
boring aspect
You
of
know why I
Phantom Menace
chose this?
dragged it down for some
So,
people,
so
but in
this is
retrospect, that's changed
let's not
around.
get let's not get ahead of things
Yeah.
because we might be counting our chickens too early here. I might have some different
Well,
opinions, but anyway. So the reason why I chose to put this one here rather than putting it where Rogue One sat is because uh, I think I think the concept of this is ambitious and kind of unlike anything else in any of the individual movies. This is sort of like trying to erect the story of the Clone Wars. Um, Having said that, I probably would delete the script and start anew if I was given the opportunity. I was thinking to myself, do I have a favorite scene in this movie? And I think I kind of land on
Sand. It's coarse. It gets everywhere.
no, well, obviously not. That's toward the bottom. But I, I I think if I had to, that's the thing. I don't really have one,
Mm.
which is a sign of something being wrong. But if you
Mhm.
ask me to choose, I'm kind of torn between sort of Obi-Wan meeting the Kaminoans purely because I like the presentation of that race and
Mm.
this in the place where they live. Um, the scenes themselves are not that great, but that or him going through the asteroid belt with Django chasing after him, that's a pretty well done action scene, but it's not the kind it was like me going, do I feel strongly about that? I guess. Like so it's not really, it's not like
Scraping the
oh I
barrel.
loved it or anything, but it's well made compared to all the other, I mean, pod races are infamous for wasting half of a movie that could have been better spent
Mhm.
doing lots of
Well,
other
I think
things, but we'll talk
yeah.
about that.
Well,
Mm.
But
that's the thing. Like so much of this movie is like set up, like very like when you look at like yes, you could argue like oh there's like some sort of mystery element to it, but it's just
can I say
hours of
this was
people just
this
talking.
movie this movie was like um at the time that this had come out, the first Lord of the Rings had been out, and Christopher Lee had been killing it as Saruman,
Mm.
right? And then when
Hmm.
everyone was like, he's going to be the next fifth apprentice, and so I'm like, that's going to be badass. He's in the movie for like 6 minutes, and I,
It's a
I don't.
nothing role. Count Dooku
Uh,
does not exist as a character in these
It's
films.
like
but he's the
yeah,
only
it's like,
reason anything. See, when you watch that movie, which I very rarely do, like, that's the funny thing because we're like seen as like people think of us as some kind of like heightened Star Wars fan, like a transformation, an evolved version of a Star Wars fan. I'm not really thinking about Star Wars every minute of the day, and I very rarely deal with the films. I was always more interested in uh,
The
the,
expanded
the
side.
great works of the EU by
Mm.
this point because that was such high quality. Um, this movie begins with like the attack on Padme, and I think that that happens because they say there's a vote about whether or not to create an army. They don't know anything about a clone army at that point. It's just about creating an army.
Mm.
And you're like, why is that? Because a bunch of people are threatening to secede from the Republic. And it's like,
Which is a crime, apparently.
that's
A crime that the Jedi themselves are going to go to war over.
that's what the opening crawl says. And it just feels like I think the movie you wanted to show was the crawl, actually, not
Mm.
this part. I
right.
think you wanted to show that part.
Yeah. It feels like it's not a very natural continuation because if you go straight from Phantom Menace to this, y- the connective tissue is
You could have also started here. People have
yeah.
argued, and
Mm. It's a
that's
problem
also true.
from the trilogy
I
Yeah.
perspective.
think so.
It's one of those
Yeah.
things about the biggest crime for this for me is that, and it's never been addressed, is that the whole film is supposed to be setting up this mystery and conclusion that one doesn't make sense, but also the conclusion that's drawn by the characters involved, particularly the Jedi, that in particular doesn't make sense. They go, "Oh, there's a secret clone
Can
army
you
that
elaborate on?
someone's built,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
need to oh crap, war, quick, use that clone army someone's built." Like
Yes.
there's no
Well,
logic to
so
any of
so the
that.
Jedi,
Right.
right? So the ship gets hit, Padme's ship in the beginning, right? And she
Mm.
walks into a meeting with Palpatine where the Jedi already are, and they're discussing the broader situation. Palpatine dismisses them because he's expecting the senator and her entourage to come in, and he kind of strides over to the window, which is weird. You would think that it's his office. You'd think the Jedi would leave rather than he gives everybody time to kind of
Mm.
cavort about in his office for his appointment. And he's also like starting to get cheesily like
Oh yeah, super cartoon.
Yeah. Well,
I
he's
couldn't
doing that
possibly
kind of stuff.
comment.
Right.
And I guess he was doing that in the Phantom Menace, but it felt a little bit less
It was
overt
toned
to
down
me.
a
But
bit. Yeah.
Right. Well, like,
I could be hallucinating that, to be honest.
In Phantom Menace, if you could squint and not twig that he's the Emperor, in that you just couldn't do that in these two
but
films.
I never even understood that was supposed to be a mystery. As
Yeah.
a kid, I was so confused. It's like, are we really pretending we don't know that that's Palpatine? Everyone knows that's Palpatine, right? But okay,
yeah.
whatever. But the point is, the reason I'm focusing on this scene, um, is because Padme marches in and says something like, "I think Count Dooku tried to kill me," and the Jedi were like, "No, he couldn't do that. He wouldn't do that." And so the
But you
Jedi
as an
come off
audience
as
are like, who?
silly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Jedi are a little bit naive. I mean, I think it's Mace saying that. That's not a Mace line.
Mm.
Mace should be. He could never. He's a Jedi. Couldn't do that.
Oh,
I mean,
Chiari as well, I think.
that's
he can never.
bizarre.
He can never. Yeah. But like,
They're both doing it, but you
And like
don't
you
then
said,
see Dooku again until an hour and 30 minutes into the movie or something.
yeah.
yeah.
And so he's trying to hit Padme with an assassination. And it's also is her vote the only one that matters also? I
I
don't know
was
if they
going to say the
established
swing
that,
vote
but
out of thousands of planets.
Apparently,
you know, so
like they
I
try
just
and make it so like her poll. They try and set it up like she has more pull in the Senate because of who she is, but it doesn't really come off that well. You
and
know,
then
it's
and
kind
then
of
it's in response to this that Palpatine then suggests that she be placed under the protection of Kenobi and Skywalker. And the Jedi are like, that's a good idea, sure. Am I to understand that Palpatine means for she to stoke Anakin's love, like fire, and like she's going to lead him astray from the Jedi path? Why does he contrive this? Why does he?
like just in the context of the films,
Or
it doesn't make any sense.
or even worse, because and then there's the second attempt, yeah. So the changeling, Zam Wessel, she tries again with like the worms, which is a bizarre way to try to kill somebody. But I mean, she's a changeling. You would think she'd just come in as like Captain Naka, or not him, the replacement because they changed the actor. What was his name? Captain Typho,
Can't remember.
Like that, I
there
think
was
Either
so.
way, go in, sneak, kill him, leave.
whatever.
Whatever.
You would think he would just do that, but or she would do that, but instead she does the worms. And this I always had issues with this, even as a kid. I knew that there was something wrong with the writing here. I knew that this was too convenient. Jango Fett, like while she's being after the whole chase scene and they're like trying to get answers from her, he kills her with the Kaminoan saber dart. Why does he
Why?
use that as opposed to a blaster? Why does he use a weapon that can only be traced to one planet in the entire galaxy? You know what I mean? Like, and it's the planet that's been deleted from the archives. He does that so that Obi-Wan Kenobi can follow this trail and go discover the. Are you telling me Palpatine foresaw that? I mean, okay, with the dark side and the Force and all that. Really though, isn't there an easier way to get to? I mean, the whole plot is just like
It's
it
contrived,
feels
is what it is. Like
it
how
feels
much
very
actually
first
does.
draft. It feels
Mm.
like it was one draft, like more so than the other films. I was like, this feels ham-fisted and strange, and at the same time, I want to like the story that you're telling of like I'm controlling both sides of this
Yeah,
war and I'm
you want to
erecting
like
two
what they're
armies. I
reaching
want to
for,
like
even in
it.
the isolation of its own film. But the choice they made,
Yeah,
the point you made before, Evan, about how there's no real connectivity between this and the Phantom Menace. This, as an example, I'm not saying I wanted this, but Count Dooku, for example, could have been Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon could have survived Phantom Menace, gone through a metamorphosis in his story, and been the villain of the second piece. That gives a through line through the trilogy, right? We don't know Count Dooku hasn't even been mentioned, let alone explored in any depth. Don't know anything about him. He doesn't, like Matt said, he doesn't appear until right at the end of the film, basically, or halfway to the second, in the second third. and he basically does nothing when he's there. He's just there to be the red lightsaber
Right.
person they fight. That's not good
And
enough in a story,
yeah.
any story really, but
No,
particularly a setup to a
it's always
mystery you're
funny.
trying to craft.
An interesting point, because like Callan and I, you and I actually talked about this like a little bit last week when we were formulating some of our like ideas for this video. In terms of like villain portrayal, yes, Dooku is on screen more than Maul was. Yes, he has more dialogue than Maul was. Yes, you find out a little bit more about him than you did about Maul. If you're just looking at the films, all of those things are true. But again, say what you want about Maul just in the Phantom Menace. The guy has presence.
Yeah.
The guy
I mean, it's the
has
iconic.
has a thread. He has a presence. He has a design. He has all of those things are memorable.
At the
If you
time,
just go by
he
the
was reaching
films,
kind of
what
Vader level of
sticks out
iconic
about
for people
Dooku?
in the common.
Yeah, what sticks out about Dooku in the grand scheme of things? He doesn't come up. He doesn't have the same. What do the kids say these days? Aura as
please no.
other. Is that what they say these days?
I don't know. I don't know what the kids are saying. I'm the
yeah.
wrong person to ask. But yeah. Oh, like. But anyway, want to hit the gritty after this or whatever the hip dance is, or like how old are we? But like anyway, the so Dooku. To answer your question, what sticks out about him? The fact that he was a former Jedi, or used to, and we don't get that. That's an interesting story, and that's the thing that Maul didn't require. You get what Maul is when you first see him. Oh, okay, he's an apprentice. He's grown up. He's been raised in the ways of the dark side of the Sith. Okay, cool, got it. Dooku's a fallen Jedi, though. You have to show some of that, and to all three of us, he's a really fascinating character only because of the works that were written and crafted to fill these stories in. And it's always this is the first prequel we're talking about, so this was going to come up eventually. It's always difficult to talk about this because it's sort of like a having it both ways kind of a thing. You kind of love the fact that there were these gaps for other writers to come in and create these wonderful characters, but that was very much a happy accident. And it's never been a sufficient excuse to just have the films be as vague and blasé as to your point earlier, Colin, the whole plot of the Jedi ordered the creation of a clone army and then just assumed control of it, despite knowing they didn't do it. Now, one of them did, or was coerced into doing, or manipulated into doing by Dooku and or Plagueis. Long story, if you don't know.
Cypher is like we've mentioned this. Like as a character, he's such an enigma, and
yeah,
we could do an entire video about that.
Yeah, it's so, and we will talk about that in some way, shape, or form because we have plans to delve into some of that material. But the Attack of the Clones, and then also, we haven't even talked about it. Really, it's a love story, and it's well, what hasn't been said about this already?
D2 story, to be fair, when you really think.
Oh yes,
George.
Yes, yeah. If you listen to explain that, if you listen to the commentary track at some point in an offhanded way, as though this is just perfectly obvious to everyone who saw it, you go, "This is, of course, R2's story," but he doesn't say it like in a jokey way. It'd be funny if he was joking. I don't think he was joking. It's hard to tell with George, but I don't think he was joking.
It's very odd, and yeah, the love, the way they handle the romance is, well, I mean, it's been
between R2 and 3PO. Yeah, I mean, it's a love story, for the ages.
But I mean, even with Anakin, with Anakin Palpatine, it's so bad. It's actually iconic, though. It's reached the point where if you want to reach for a bad example of writing, you reach for that one.
See, it's funny because I've already said
anyway.
I've said like I love bad movies if they're fun. This to me is boring. Like they're in the fields together and they're frolicking. I'm sorry, even to the point of parody. That stuff is just like, really? Who wrote the sand stuff? Like is that? I mean, I guess it was Lucas, but like, why? Like, how did your mind even come up with this?
This sort of sort of dialogue.
Like, how did
and even at the time, like, by the way, we should also
to the point.
We all felt this at the time. This isn't like a hindsight thing,
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because when I don't remember very much of the Clone Wars show. I really didn't watch very much of it. Their entire season's worth of material I skipped over. But they did one where what was his name? Clovis? Was that the name of the guy?
Yeah.
Her old flame.
In this,
I didn't realize she was talking about somebody in the lead up to the sand thing. It was always just at some point he mentions he doesn't like sand in response to something she says, right? And then when you watch the scene, she's talking about this other guy. And I'm just like, She said that? I just don't remember that. Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? I remember things like he cuts a pear for her and uses the Force to give her the pear. You know, just cutesy little things. But so much of what they actually say is in one ear and out the other.
It's
Right.
so
Well,
bland and
because
disparate, but
It's not that
because
it's a romance, by the way. You can do a romance and
yeah,
I'll
for
like it.
sure.
I just this isn't
This isn't it.
the characters
yeah,
don't
because
behave like people, or they don't feel real, they don't feel convincing, they don't feel right for the moment. And
it,
also,
yeah.
I just don't really get why we're choosing. It kind of feels just like Lucas wanted, he thought, I'm doing a romance story, I've got to have like these kind of beatific, tender moment, wonderful Naboo spots. He didn't though. You could have had them in the middle of something else. You
Mm.
could have been having the romance develop amidst the backdrop of a drama. There's no drama when it's just the two of them off together. And then at some point, she decides to help him with his mother. Um,
Hmm.
Which leads into the kind of
uh,
great stain that is so, because the film's so disparate and disconnected and just all over the place. It doesn't even
yeah,
really it doesn't really affect everything else in terms of how bad it is. But it is, in a good story, this would be like the great step away where everything falls apart because what the hell are you doing? But it's just one of the many things in this one. He commits genocide, and she just goes,
yes.
Just goes
to
with.
be angry
To
is
be
to be
angry is to be
human.
human. Yeah.
First of
Um,
all, who talks like that? Second of
for
all,
one,
what the
yes, but
hell?
also who
Gorgeous character.
your supposed prospective love has just come to you and said,
Yes.
"I just slaughtered women and children," and she's like, "Oh, well,
Yes.
it's like,
Yep.
how is that? This film that does not feel like the high point of terrible, and yet really it should be. It's
Bear in mind, in the
so
next bear in
weird.
mind, in the next film, she freaks out because he does the same
Yeah.
thing.
There's a meme. I mean, the whole pretty cool memes thing is obviously non-stop.
Sure,
But one
but
of my
like,
favorites is Kenobi
huh?
turning to him and goes, Padme, this is his second genocide." And she's like saying, "I know
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
like hope for him."
So
Yeah.
that's the thing. I've
It's
never
just
really been like a part of meme culture in general, and really there are some lines in the Star Wars thing, like I said about there are heroes on both sides. Why is that iconic to
Mm.
people? It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. I was like, what is that? What are you guys talking about? I
oh
didn't
yeah.
realize that that's something Palpatine says at the end of Phantom Menace when he's like elected chancellor or whatever.
A-
People remember
around
that? Like,
around 20, the weird thing is
I
it was a time lag. It wasn't straight away. Around 2014ish, I specifically remember it being this point because I took note. It blew up on the internet. Prequel memes
yeah,
became a thing. It was based, and that
and I
made
don't
it
understand that.
evolved to being that every single line of the film pretty much became a meme. I'll be honest, I
Yes,
find a lot
and
of
I
them
don't get
funny,
that.
but the
Weird.
level that some of them take, like just every single band line, like you said, the heroes one is too much. But yeah, but that's
Yeah,
basically
it's
half of what the
absurd.
prequels are these
But
days,
the
just funniness.
Yeah, and also,
and
yeah.
can I just say sorry, but we'll get back to the real topic here. But just to bring it up, the one version of those that I'm engaged with, like the one-upsmanship of, is constantly trying to end the story faster. Um, you know, and I can't remember, like, it's hard to pick a favorite one. I think the one I've seen the most, and this is the one where like they cut to end credits really early because the story could have ended there.
Mm.
There's like one where they just don't go to Tatooine, so like dun, 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 dun. And there's one where at the beginning of this movie when they're talking in Padme's apartment or whatever, Obi-Wan says to Anakin, don't do anything, and then just cuts to Anakin like dun, 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 dun.
It is a good
That's the
one.
end of the story.
There's some
That's
great
a
What
pretty
if
jokes in
good
there.
one.
Anakin didn't do anything?
Yeah,
Part
yeah,
part
Like,
of
so,
yeah.
part of the
But like to
enhancement
your,
of that as well is the
sorry.
humor involved with characters like Obi-Wan played by Ewan McGregor. We've said it before. He for me
the great
is a
performance of
good third
Oh
this
yeah,
of the joy
trilogy.
of the
Like, I mean,
prequels. Yeah, I mean,
he is
I mean,
by far
second
the best.
film onwards anyway.
there's something to be said for just how hammy Ian McDiarmid is allowed to
Yes.
be, and he can get away with a lot, like for some reason. But when you're just talking about a solidly great performance, I mean, Ewan McGregor did an amazing job as a Obi-Wan Kenobi and pretty unimpeachable
Mm.
in that role,
Even at the
Yeah,
time, like
despite
he was one of the
what they
things
had to
that was the
work with.
highlight
yeah.
back then. Even when
Yeah,
everyone was absolutely
Yeah.
crapping on them, he was
Yeah.
always shining through that and the music.
There's a
yeah,
reason a lot of people these days, when you ask them about Obi-Wan, they think of him,
Mm.
over Alec
and
Guinness. Which,
That's
and
pretty. I mean, I don't want to say unprecedented, but it's pretty huge in
Alec
terms of
Guinness
like.
hated Star Wars. Like
No, of course, of
he
course.
Right.
he was
He thought it was
kind of
silly.
yeah, I mean, I think he still did gave a great performance, but he was kind of phoning it in, and when he was asked about it, he was like, why do you want to ask me about that? It's
Hmm.
get a life, really. Pretty much, it's just like,
Which is amazing considering how fantastic and iconic he is in that. I mean,
Yeah, but
it's
yeah.
but he
yeah,
was pretty much supplanted by McGregor.
Until
You know,
can I just say, until Return of the Jedi, they wheeled him in so he could sit on the log and just be, well,
oh yeah,
and
well,
then
yeah,
this
sure.
happened, and he really just couldn't be bothered.
kind of just a bit,
Yeah,
yeah.
did
That
not
scene does
care.
stand out
Yeah,
as a weak point for sure. But yeah, putting that aside, the
yeah,
fact that it was such a huge franchise and such a huge film and part of pop culture in the way it was, I mean, it kind of
Yeah.
it didn't create pop culture, but it certainly blew it up into the way it is at the
Mm.
time, where it was at the time. And to have McGregor come in and somehow take that space and make it his own
Right.
is a huge achievement. And yeah, he's always been a
yeah.
good third of my
Speaking,
enjoyment of the prequels.
yeah. Speaking for myself, I kind of see like they're kind of equal for me, just but like for different reasons as far as like
Yeah,
Obi-Wan
sure.
being like,
Fair, yeah.
different times, like. But yeah, I
I
think
mean,
we all.
Alec Guinness is playing like one of the great portrayals of like the mentor figure from like the hero's
Yeah.
journey archetype,
He's the
and
wizard archetype, isn't he?
Ewan McGregor perfectly steps into the younger shoes of
Right.
that character. You can't really envision another actor doing what he did.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So,
But like,
and again,
yeah.
that's the other reason why the Kenobi show was so hurtful
Oh
because
my
he wasn't
god, yeah,
allowed
that
to
was
be
the
Kenobi.
worst part. That was the biggest
Yeah.
crime.
Horrible.
We did a recording, and maybe if a miracle happens, that will see the light of day at some point. But the big carry through for that was there was not a
We kind
single,
of already talked about in the
maybe
last video.
one line that where Kenobi was Kenobi in that show, and every other second of
Mhm.
the show he was just someone else. And Ewan McGregor
Right.
Yeah.
coming in to play Kenobi but not being Kenobi is unforgivable
And again,
from the writing,
and
not
to
his
your
fault.
point, and exactly, I was just going to say that's the point we're making is it's purely the writing, and that's kind of the way that the world has come to view things. For bringing it back to this for Hayden Christensen, I do
Mm.
not think that this is a somehow a redeemed performance. It's a bad performance, but it's not his
Yeah.
fault. Everyone knows it's not his fault. I mean, one of his lines while he's courting Padme, and I bring this up all the time. I wish I could just wish away my feelings. It, and she's wearing what she's wearing, and they're in like this soap opera room with like a blazing fire in the hearth. It's like beautiful shot, and you have like all the makings of like an actual scene or movie, and that's the dialogue, you know. And then when you see behind the scenes footage, I think it's I can't remember which movie it is. I think it must be this one. Yeah, it's this one where he says like I want more, but I know I shouldn't.
Mm.
And George is acting out the line and turning on his heel and telling him how to turn his body and Hayden's just kind of standing there watching him like absorbing the direction. And I'm sure he copied exactly what he was told to
Yeah.
do. Have you guys listened to George? It's kind of wooden. George isn't the most
He's
emotive
person.
person. He's
That,
a
and on top of
director.
that,
He's
he's not
not
an
an
actor's
actor.
director. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
been
he's not an
renowned
actor's
for not being
director.
someone who can integrate with actors and kind of properly
Yeah.
enhance their performances.
He's
He's flawed that
yeah.
way.
Yeah,
His
so
and when it comes to Lucas, like his biggest strengths has always been, from the technical aspect
Mm-hmm.
and
mhm.
certain parts of the directorial aspect. But when it comes to writing, that has consistently been his biggest hurdle.
when I when I was younger,
And even
when I
he
was
admits it. Like this is
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
yeah,
new,
for sure.
but when I was younger, I used to think, oh, somebody else could have been Anakin and done a good job. Not with this script, I
Mm.
mean, it's like everybody would have been kind of hampered in some way, shape, or form. But
Mhm.
that so I feel bad for Hayden Christensen being in that position, but I also don't really feel for this character for kind of the reasons you already spoke to. He commits genocide at the drop of a hat. He's not. I don't really understand the people who are like have a
He's not
hardcore.
relatable. That's the thing.
He is
He's
to
not.
yeah he is to an awful lot of people. Or at least he has become thought of that way for the generation maybe slightly after our own. And I don't really understand that um at all. But I no longer blame Hayden Christensen for that. It's sort of like a perfect storm of just bad luck.
Right.
It's not a. It's just
Just
it's difficult.
just as a note towards Kenobi, one good thing that has come out of that as well is that the fan reception. He's been getting a lot of praise and celebration for that. And I completely agree with you on everything that he shouldn't be brought back. That the character shouldn't be brought back and rolled out for every re-reference and rehash and recovering. I agree with that entirely.
I
But
was in defense
side
of him.
benefit
People were
of
like,
that were like, he did well.
I hated that. I
out
hated
of it.
that show and everything they did, but when everybody complained that he looked old, I was like, yeah, people get old.
Yeah, he
Like
aged.
happens.
Get over
They're
it. They
actors,
did a pretty good job at
It's his
de-aging him.
time, you can't really
Yeah.
do much about that
It
at
was
the end of the
nice
day.
from the outside looking at that they got to return to their roles and have fun and meet up with each other again. That was all good. I
But
enjoyed
see,
that,
this is
and they
another
seem
thing.
to benefit
That
from it.
that by the way, this is exactly the kind of thing that I've never been on the same bus as other fans. It's like I am old enough to remember the original films. I obviously I wasn't born when they came out. They started in the 70s. I was born in 91. But there was a time when I was first introduced to these where it was before you got the special editions and later
Mm.
versions that Lucas kept on tweaking and tweaking. I like my original Boba Fett voice. I don't want to hear, but it's not Tamora Morrison and he's a clone now. I don't care. Like
Mm.
that's great for you if you want that. I want the voice I grew up listening to. Do you understand that? And you get into arguments with people about that. It's not canon that way. It's closer to Lucas's. I don't care about that. If you want the original, it's like you're not going to get Jabba the Hutt as we know him. You know what I mean? Like you know what I'm saying? It's like there comes a point there are things you do and don't care about. It's like if I wanted to be able to watch a movie or a version of it where the Ewoks don't blink and now they blink, I can do that. I can't as easily find the versions without other
The fact
trifling
that
changes.
you could even say that sentence seriously
Yeah.
is like, I'm sorry, like I'm not making fun. It's
you know,
like
it's
that's a
like so. It's
sentence you
just
could say
I've, I've
unironically.
always I've always been in the camp that I never minded the fact that Lucas changed things. I stand utterly against his refusal to release the original versions or every version basically that he made so people could take their pick.
Right.
Of what they wanted
Blade
to
Runner.
watch. If he wanted to keep, fiddling with it, that's fine. But give people access to what they grew up with, or what they fell in love with or whatever. So that was my issue there. But sorry to take
Yeah.
us on that
On,
tangent.
No,
that's
it's
okay.
fine.
But
But on that note, I think we all kind of come to a consensus that this is like just the
yeah,
most by far the most flawed of
Mm.
all the
it's
prequels.
the one
Like
it's the one that I would in some ways I'm kind of I love the scale of the vision. I feel like I would delete like 95% of the script like rewrite it. Take a
Mm.
lot
mhm,
of the same ideas, but just completely rewrite it.
They all suffer from the same flaws, but this is the one that suffers the most, and it also has the crime
yeah.
of
Yeah.
being a bit boring as a result as well.
Yeah, you
Oh
could
yeah,
even
for
argue
sure.
this has the. You could even debatably argue this has the ingredients of potentially being the biggest out of all the prequels. Because again, it's the
Mm.
start of the Clone Wars. And under different management, that could honestly potentially lead to something truly incredible, even when compared to the others. But yeah, it just falls flat in so many aspects. So I
Including,
think.
by the way, the title. Attack of the Clones is definitely the worst of
It's
all
the
of their
worst.
titles.
Oh gosh, yeah,
I mean, the
Sounds
Phantom
like
Menace is
some
terrible.
70s horror thriller
Yeah,
schlock.
yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
But
But
anyway, sorry, just as a cherry
but
on the
anyway,
Sunday.
so this
it's
is
okay. But I think
number
we've
number five, right? So
Mm.
this is where I'm gonna ruffle some
yeah.
feathers here
Remember?
because mine is Revenge of the Sith.
Interesting.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
That's number 4 for me.
That's also number
yeah.
4 for me.
I expected that,
Mm.
Revenge of
and
the
I'll
Sith.
explain.
Okay.
I'll explain why what is where with our next entry. But for now, sticking with episode three here. Why did I put it? Maybe I'll just read my notes here because I can get lost in my thoughts on this one. Um, so as we've kind of alluded to all throughout, but we haven't said nearly enough. My first note was largely saved by its incredible score. This has a
Mhm.
great score. This has some
Yeah.
of the all-time best songs. It's not my personal favorite score to just listen to, because it's quite bombastic and I mean it's so operatic. You talk about space opera, like this is a space.
Mhm.
I kind of have to be in the right headspace to just listen
Mm.
to it all the way through. But individually, it has my single favorite track, which is Anakin's Dark Deeds from all of Star Wars. That's my favorite one. Um, and there's a great many amazing ones, so
I mean, how do you
it's
pick?
hard to
Yeah,
pick. But
exactly.
yeah,
Mhm.
but I think if the music hadn't been as fantastic as it is, this might have felt like too much action, not enough everything else for me. And
Hmm.
also, I don't get as much out of the action as a great many other people do. So my other notes are, I don't like this one as much as most people. I don't think it stands well on its own. It feels or as well as on its own compared to, you know, the other equals. I mean to say, it feels the least like an actual story to me. The only character who really changes is Anakin, and he's afraid of what he's always been afraid of, the same fear from the beginning of his arc, losing the one he loves. Not a problem. It's the my problem is again that's the only real internal conflict I can think of for the majority of the movie. No characters have internal arcs except for he and arguably Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's is resolved by simply facing Anakin and doing his job as a Jedi. Um, I won't say that's a problem. I won't even criticizing it. I won't even criticize it for being predictable, but it just is kind of had to be there by default, and it's the only other one I can really think of. You could say Padme, but that would hinge on the romance being a successfully worked romance, which we've already kind of talked about that. So the plot then is in some ways, by my judgment, the least mysterious of any of the prequels, and therefore to me the least interesting. The presentation is not as bland as in either of the previous films. Um, so it's not as bad as like Attack of the Clones, because it's more emotionally engaging, despite being entertainingly slash embarrassingly cheesy at times. And it has the occasional good scene or striking piece of imagery, or as I keep saying, fantastic music. But I rarely revisit it because most of what I can see, almost all I can see, are all the little places where I would do things differently if I could. So it's hard for me to divorce what I want the film to be from what it actually is. I'm not so good at meeting this one on its own terms, and I just don't get as much out of it as I think most fans of the movie do. So this one here is kind of like I certainly wouldn't say it's a worse made movie than the Phantom Menace, but to me there's less promise in it, and it's final. You know what I mean? It's a final entry, so it's a capstone to a lot of stuff I disagreed with anyway. That wasn't really its fault, but it's just kind of lesser in the making. And for all that I just said, there's some good stuff in this, but also like some of the dumbest shit I can level up the prequels is in this, you know. Or just some of the most throwaway details. You know, why does Yoda go away from Coruscant? What about the droid attack on the Wookiee? I mean, that's a meme right there, but I mean, it's like literally like, really? Okay. So yeah, that's my spiel. That's why it's here. I won't say that I'm right to put it here or that you're wrong to have it wherever you put it, but it's where I put it. So
I,
I hope that that
I
made sense.
You go
I
first, man.
actually agree with a good portion of what you said. For me, though, what kind of puts it ahead of the other prequels, like you mentioned the mystery aspect.
Hmm.
I don't really view this as a mystery film personally. Like to me, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones were trying to be mystery stories and failed at it spectacularly, whereas this one knows that it's more or less an action movie and a conclusion to the saga, and it never tries to really present it as anything other than that. And I think for me, it's like, okay, you're at least it's not failing on that. It knows what it is, and therefore, to me, it's always come off as the most consistent tonally for the most part out of the all the prequels. Because yes, all the same problems that were in the other ones are still there, but to me, it's like this feels the most. I guess you could even
Consequential?
say competently written in the sense of like, okay, you could see point A to point B to point C, whereas with the other ones, it feels a much more cluttered and muddled. It's like, wait, this happened, but then this, and then it leads to this, so that's a reference to this. It's like, no. So for to me, that consistency, as little as there is what really elevates this above the other prequels for me. Even though I do agree a lot of what you
Yeah,
said and all of the
I
missteps that
agree.
we've come from the previous are here. It's just to me, it's like I could sit down, watch this, and know that I at the bare minimum had a coherent narrative, which makes it a lot more digestible for me personally. It doesn't feel
I
like
agree. I agree with
I
that part.
necessarily
Aside
need to
from
figure
the,
out all these other things together. Also, and I just want to say too that this movie's really been influenced by its novelization for me personally. Like I think
yeah,
this by far has the best novelization out of the entire saga. Like all the saga first of all the saga novels in my opinion are better than the films, but this one by far is the best book out of all of them. And I will acknowledge that my opinion and liking of this is influenced by that. But even taking it on its own merits, again, like I said, it's that level of consistency that I think elevates it for me personally.
I want to let Callan get in on this, but first I would say I agree with you about the narrative cohesion point, but only after we've landed on Coruscant. I think the opening of this film is
Bonkers.
yeah,
Yeah,
bonkers is
that
the
is
word.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I completely agree with both of you on those. For me, and your final point, Evan, that definitely influences mine. The novelization and the expanded universe kind of repair work that was done to make this story kind of land really helped me, because to me, it was Attack of the Clones, Rogue One situation. I was kind of teetering half and half on both of these, because I think that Phantom Menace as a film is a more solid piece in terms of its structure and it's as an independent film, it works better by itself, in my opinion. But it's the concepts that are being reached for in Revenge of the Sith, the kind of the high drama it could have represented, the tragedy of everything involved, all of the ideas that are being played with, I found more enjoyable and more evocative than I did with Phantom Menace. But that being said, I agree with Matt that not one of them was properly landed and executed particularly well. It's
Well,
only with the repair work
it's
and damage control that was done to it that makes it fully function.
when I say things also like it's less mysterious than the other ones, what I mean is, it's not a mystery story, but it's 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 the close of a saga anyway. So this is the point to be answering certain questions. So I'm not dogging on it for lacking all mystery. I just feel like it is the one where you're watching the pieces fall where you know they must. You're just waiting to see exactly how they happen. And in almost every instance where I care about something, I would just do it so very differently. And in the other films, things feel much more open in a way where I'm like, well, I don't like where you went off with this, but I really like that core idea, or I like this location, or I like that setup. This movie, it doesn't have any of those. It has, okay, this is the one where Palpatine wins and the Jedi go away. How does that happen? And as you're watching all the little bits fall into their sort of places, I'm like, yeah, I just want more of everything. I wanted to spend far more time with the Jedi before we got here. You could
Mhm.
argue that you get that with things like the EU or the Clone Wars show. Those should not have been necessary to care about what you're
Exactly,
watching
it
in the
should have been a
movie.
holistic piece. Yeah,
Um,
it should have been
This is yeah.
self-contained.
Another big criticism for me. This movie is too short. This movie is
yeah, I
too
think
short,
so.
Yeah, I can
and
I
agree
mean,
with that for the
like
contents it needed
so
to
much
cover.
happens at such a breakneck pace, and especially it's also pretty shocking when you realize how much things were cut from this movie if you go behind the scenes. And the biggest issue for this me is the pacing. So much happens so quickly. Like you feel
There's no
like
breathing
okay,
room, none at all.
not at all. Like everything happens so quickly all at once. Like I know this movie is supposed to take place over the course. Well, actually, it's been debated how long. Even the EU can't really keep consistent on this. When you see everything that happens, you think to yourself, "Oh, okay, maybe like a couple of weeks or maybe a month." Like everything, but it's packed into it, and the way it's presented, it's almost as if everything happens here in like
Like 3
a
days.
couple days. Yeah, at most, and that's a
all
huge
all,
problem because it
all of
just
the
like
movies are that way.
it's too
Like
much.
that's the
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, all the movies
and
that George made anyway. Yeah.
yeah, and it just like that's a major issue, and so much is cut that are that's honestly pretty important to the plot. That if I were to like narrow down my biggest gripe with this is it's the pacing. Like the pacing in this movie is awful, and it's a real
Considering
shame
what they
because a lot of like honestly the big thing though for me is like these ideas could work if you just gave them more time, but they don't, and that's
yeah, for me,
really that
can
really
I
just bugs me
can
honestly.
I ask you, when you talk about things that were cut, can you mention just a few of them, just in a rattled off kind of way? Just I'm curious.
Sure, for example, the Padme's involvement with the other senators, the delegation
Yes.
of 2000, and the beginning
Mon
of the
Mothma.
Rebel Alliance. With the beginning of the Rebel Alliance, which is kind of important, to
Yeah.
things to come. I
So
mean, that's
so
also
so
not
I
only like
I,
that gives Padme so much more agency in this film and gives
I
her
was
so
I was
much,
hoping you were going to say that,
yeah,
because
so much
even
more grounded.
whether you wanted to elongate the film and make it longer or cut something, I mean, I would argue, considering what they did with him, I would be okay with cutting Grievous from this and spending all that time
Yeah,
on that and just
that's
having
part of it
something
too.
else for
General Grievous
Obi-Wan
is
to do.
Yeah, General Grievous is completely redundant, if we're being honest. Like, let's be real
Yeah,
here. But like, yeah, that's
yeah.
that's a huge part of it. Like, it also makes Anakin's conflict seem more believable because it's like it's not just him and the Chancellor and the Jedi thing. It's like, no, he's feeling this pull with Padme as well. And Padme's not just all gung-ho for everything he does, which, like I said earlier in this video, he destroys the Jedi and she freaks out like he's a freaking monster. But it's like in the previous movie when he did this, where was that reaction? You know?
It's
It
crazy.
just comes
Yeah.
off it just comes off like there's no impact to it, and that's the biggest thing. Like, this movie needed to be longer. And again, this might be a little bit of, like, unrelated, but another issue thing I will say about this movie is that, oh, this might be a bit of a hot take. I think most of the fights in this movie are terrible.
Me
Like,
too.
I'm sorry,
Mm.
no, for real. Like,
Yeah,
Too long.
yeah.
the only good
There's
fights.
no emotional kind of through
Yeah,
line to them in the same way that we've had in previous.
that
It's
I
all
somewhat
flash, no
disagree with.
substance.
That's
I'm
that
trying
I
to think.
somewhat disagree with, but like the only
In the
fights in
choreography
this movie.
specifically, sorry, not the storytelling
Yeah.
involved.
The
The
only
way
fights in this
it's
movie that have anything going for them, in my opinion, is Yoda and Sidious and Anakin and Obi-Wan. The Dooku fight,
The
terrible.
Dooku fight is terrible. Yeah,
The Grievous fight,
yeah.
arguably worse. Like these,
That was
like,
so the Grievous fight. The Grievous fight would just kind of be meh if I hadn't fallen in love with his expanded
yeah,
universe portrayal.
oh yeah,
Now,
that's
and a lot of people
so
had
that
as
was
well. So that was a big
I
like,
can't
wait, what?
pretend. Yeah, I can't pretend that that wasn't a big thing. But even worse
the
than
Mace,
that was
yeah, the
the
Mace and
Mace
Sidious
in
fight.
um
Oh
Yeah,
God.
because that was it looks just terrible. And a lot of people have they've seen like test footage of what it would have been, and even that it's fine. It looks much better than what we got, but that wasn't really the point of it, really, to me. It was when you mentioned the book. The book does so much more interesting things with the
oh my
entire
god,
setup and apparatus of it because beyond the fight itself, it's used to help frame the Jedi for having done an actual observable or at least plausible assassination attempt on the chancellor that he's then able to parlay into his like the rest of the Senate supporting him against the Jedi, which is just such a smarter idea than what we
another
get on
scene that
screen.
should have been longer. The
Um,
Declaration of the Empire. Just saying.
yeah,
Um,
and also I'm sorry, George. I don't mean to dog on you all the time. Yeah, I've heard him in the commentary when Sidious is doing his big speech or whatever, like to the and and yeah, and he's showing that combined with like Order 66 and the Jedi, he compared that to the end of The Godfather, and like don't say that you're doing The Godfather, and like, it's not that what he did was a crap scene, but don't set yourself up. You went to film school with like Opal as like one of your peers growing up. It's kind of like one of your friends when you guys were young made one of the classic movies of all time, and you're now putting this out and saying, so I'm kind of doing like the same thing here. It's sort of like I don't know. You just don't want to do it. You're setting yourself up for failure there. You don't care about these characters as much. Are you telling me the death of Ayla Secura is similar to like Michael Corleone, like in the church? Like, I don't know. I just don't do that. But all of these things are there's like the bones of good stuff here, and you have some really good ideas. And the trailer though, like the moment where Mace and the others walk into, I remember seeing the trailer, and they walk into the chancellor's office, and I just liked the way Ian McDiarmid, the way that they edited it, obviously, because it was a trailer. And he's like, "You're under arrest." He's like, "He's threatening me, Master Jedi." Like the look on his face is like frigid. He's not doing the typical, yeah, yeah. He's just looks pissed off that you're in my office right now. And then it cut to him. He's got a lightsaber, and then he just appeared over the desk. And then you watch the film, and he does that silly corkscrew maneuver, which even in the test footage he does that, and there's a purpose to it, but it's still over the top. I would never have loved that compared to just being over the desk. It's like a less is more kind of a thing.
Mm.
That movie doesn't understand less is more because Obi-Wan and Anakin, I
Oh
like the
God,
opening
nothing but
salvo.
more.
Like the opening salvo is pretty good. And then it gets silly as hell. Like
Lightsaber
it remains
twirling and
silly for
swinging
10
from a
minutes or
from bloody
so
poles flying.
silly.
It's over the top and ridiculous, and ends on high ground. I mean, it's been memed to death, obviously, but the high ground ending is just laughably bad.
oh
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah.
Another area where the book really does heavy lifting. That scene in particular. For
And
real.
you know what else is like when you talk about the book, like I really like how when they're seeing before all that, when they're still in Coruscant, when Obi-Wan and Yoda are looking through the footage and seeing that Anakin did this, I like how they spend time with Obi-Wan having to really absorb the fact that Anakin has done this. You know, it's I don't really I won't say that the movie does nothing with that, but in comparison to the way the scene was structured in the book, I just feel like it was such more powerful. You
Mm.
want to see Ewan McGregor do it because you know he could knock the hell out of
Yeah,
that scene, but it's
but
just not written
his
that way,
his
you know?
stilted performance just makes all the impact. There's no impact to it, or at least very
Yeah.
little. And again, it goes. I mean, same problem with Padme, same problem with Anakin. Like every scene that not every, almost every scene where you're supposed to be like, oh man, I felt that. You don't feel it,
hmm You know,
and that
I just
yeah.
that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is this movie? I think it's indisputably better handled in terms of like um just again, it's a lot of it is about the emotionality. A lot of it is just the fact that it's nowhere near as dull as the movie I'm gonna bring up soon. But it just the Phantom Menace started something, and I wanted it to be a lot more, but it felt more open and possible. And this felt like a little bit like the death of my curiosity. It was like, okay, this is the answer. All right. I really wanted it to be more than this, but I'm glad
Yeah,
I got the music out of
it
it.
does.
That's kind of where I land
Thank
on
you
that one,
for
you
the
know?
music. We have to be grateful for
It
that for the
does.
prequels.
Yeah, it
I did want
does.
to ask you guys.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you because how I kind of flunked my test in the Back of the Clones. I could not really commit to a favorite scene. Do you have a favorite scene for episode 3? Because I expected us to place this in different spots than we did.
Hmm.
I like this. Okay, I'm just sorry. Again, I have to jettison the book
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
moment.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's hard to do, you know. And the
Wait,
book is so
just
great, you know.
as a thing we haven't spoken about, we haven't talked about the. Have you ever heard the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
I was wondering whether that
to me,
might
Talking
be
about a
the answer.
breathing
so
moment that
yeah,
they
to
could have
me
had
it's
more of if they
the opera
had more
scene.
time in
Yeah,
the story.
to me it comes down to two. It's either the opera scene, like you just said, or when Obi-Wan and Anakin say goodbye to each other for the last
That's
time.
okay.
That's
Yeah,
a nice wholesome
yeah.
moment.
Like I
Yeah.
actually that's the one time honestly in this entire trilogy where I felt like these two were actually like that whole
Mhm.
brothers thing. Like
Yeah, that's
that was the
perhaps the
one
biggest single
I
crime
bought
of the
that.
lack of
That
time.
I actually
Yeah.
bought that in that sequence. So for me, it's either that or the Plagueis opera scene for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of pacing and world and plot benefits to having had more time in the entirety of the prequels, but particularly the third film. But yeah, that is perhaps the single greatest loss. The fact that you don't, even Attack of the Clones had some nice camaraderie moments. It was a lot more mentor-student, for obvious reasons, but there was a touch of, okay, you can see how these guys are, they care about each other. You don't get to enjoy that as much in the third film.
No.
Yeah.
Certainly not as much as you should to properly reinforce and set up the tragedy of the finale. It was supposed to be this great. And again, going back to that concepts piece for why this ranked higher for me than Phantom Menace, this was supposed to be the great tragedy in so many ways. Fall of the Jedi, Fall of the Brothers, all of this stuff, setting up the darkness that leads to the need for a new
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah.
But you don't get to enjoy it properly, and until you get the EU enhancements and enrichments of various different scenes and stretching outs of the pacing, it mostly falls flat. It's a shame.
You know the
Could have been so
scene
much
where
more.
I
Yeah.
always fail at this. I don't know what the scene is called, but the one where Anakin and Padme are like really thinking about each other and they're like across the
Yeah.
city from each other and the music is playing. I don't know what you call that scene. That's a really well done scene. That might
Hmm.
be the most technically well done scene in the movie, but I think I kind of prefer the Opera House scene just because it's fun watching Palpatine be Palpatine basically.
And he's actually manipulating Anakin for once, rather than just kind of vaguely bumping into him and sort of giving him a nudge. This is like an active manipulation where you get to see the kind of the start of Vader as well.
Yeah, but another strength of that scene too is like not only is it the world building really on point in that scene, but the fact that it's so I wouldn't say subdued, but like compared to everything else in the movie, it's a lot more
Yeah.
subdued. It's
Particularly for
them
Palpatine
sitting.
as well. That's the big
Yeah,
point
yeah,
of
them
contrast.
sitting
Like
talking.
he is
And
hamming
of
it
course,
up, but in a
yeah,
much more tamped down. I'm trying to
exactly.
achieve something here kind of way.
Yeah,
Um,
and also, I mean, we keep bringing up John Williams, the Darth Plagueis
oh yeah,
theme during that, like when
just the
when they're
setting,
the
just the
opera,
opera
it's just
visuals as well.
it's it's
Well, the kind
that
of a sperm and an egg is what they look like as well. So it's kind of on the nose,
Mm.
but
right.
it's funny because they're talking about being born of the Force or they were creating
Yeah,
life really. But
and I
it
also
works because it is
yeah.
striking imagery. It's like I said,
Mm.
there is some striking imagery in, to be fair, all of the films, but in this one
Mhm.
especially, there's some good stuff that
Yeah.
is arguably on the simpler side. It's just that there's an elegance to it. I was going to say that I think we all came up with some good candidates for favorite scenes. I didn't see Evans coming, but that's a good one where they say goodbye. But for me, because to me, my almost great scene is when I feel is poorly placed. I like Anakin crying on Mustafar. I like that imagery.
Hmm.
I really feel I wish he had killed Jedi before that rather than the Separatists. It
Mm.
just feels, who
Wrong
gives a
place,
shit
wrong
about
time.
that? Yeah,
Yeah,
like he just killed
agreed.
a bunch, and you could make the argument that it's everything built up and it's just coming out at that moment. But I feel like it would be more haunting and more just what I want it to be if that same imagery had been used after he'd taken out some Jedi that ideally we and he had at one time cared about. I would have preferred that. Yeah, I'm cheating because my ideal scene is really a modified, tweaked up scene that we don't really have, to be fair. But yeah, I was just curious because I couldn't really choose one for Attack of the Clones, and I'm glad that at least here people found something to like or something
Yeah,
to love even.
Mm.
yeah.
But
Or
that was my number five. Your number fives would be episode one, correct?
yeah, yeah. For
Correct.
me, I don't know
Both.
about Callan.
I think it's the case for both of you. It's hard to
Correct.
keep
Phantom
track though.
Menace.
All right.
Yeah.
So moving on to number four, then the Phantom Menace for me. So we swapped
Favorite
these
prequel.
entries, the three of us. So this is kind of by default. I would not say that this is a better film than Revenge of the Sith. Uh, for a long time, I don't know that I would have argued it was better than Attack of the Clones. It was never quite a clear-cut case, which was like the worst one. It's just over time, I think it has to be Attack of the Clones. The reason why this one has kind of risen to the top, or at least not fallen as far as the others have in my mind. Uh, hard to explain. This one I think is the most heavily like rooted by just a nostalgia thing. This was 1999, right?
Mhm.
This was something I meant to bring up at some point in the previous time, but well, I'll build to that point. This was 1999. An awful lot of amazing movies came out in 1999. Um, one of them was The Matrix, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And there's a book that you all can read. I forget the title, but if you Google 1999, the greatest year in movies, it's something like that. And I forget who wrote it, but if you get it on Audible or perhaps other places, you can listen to it narrated by George Newbern, who was the voice of Superman in our favorite Justice League. So you can listen to that. And he's a great narrator of books, so and he sounds just like Superman. So there's that. But he was also in the voice of Theodore Rex, which is one of my favorite, just terrible movies, where Whoopi Goldberg has a genetically engineered dinosaur clone as her cop partner. Not made for children. This was not really made for children. Just an embarrassingly sad '90s movie. Absolutely
Mm,
incredible filmmaking. If you haven't
certainly
seen it, you haven't lived.
something.
But yeah, so that's George
By the way,
Newbern. But
Callan, none of what he said is exaggerating.
yeah,
I can believe it.
you've got to watch it. It's a classic. I mean, it's hard to believe adults made this for adults, but or made it period, especially for adults. But yeah, so 1999. I was at the beginning of that year, I wasn't even eight. I turned eight that year, but for much of that year, I was still seven. So I was very young. And The Matrix, I was allowed to watch. My parents didn't let me watch like R-rated things all the time. There was like, depending on how graphic the violence or sex or drug use was, I wasn't allowed to watch stuff for a couple of more years yet. At least not without heavy explanation. But The Matrix is not super violent. I mean,
Mm.
there's not a lot of blood, rather. There's a lot of fighting and whatnot, but there's not really that much gore or sex or drugs or whatever. Everything's kind of implied or whatever. But my parents let me watch it. Um, and so that movie really blew my mind. And then what would it be? The next year? Was it 2000 or 2001 that Fellowship of the Ring came out? So it was 2001, you said. That's right, Evan. You just looked off camera for a second. Yeah. So 2001, things like Fellowship of the Ring had rolled around. And so my point in mentioning that is like by 2000. 2002, or 2002, right? We're dealing with like two towers because there were consecutive
Yeah,
years like coming
1,
out.
2, and 3 for
So
both
Yeah.
films.
after a certain point, the prequels were not in contention for being my favorite movies. I mean, they were dealing with like, The Matrix was out. They were contending with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, which was still unveiling itself to the world. In 1999, we had things that may not have stood the test of time necessarily, but they were big deals at the time. I mean, you had The Sixth Sense, you had The Iron Giant, you had big flops like The Wild Wild West. You had movies like Sleepy Hollow, the Johnny Depp Tim Burton one, which, funnily enough, has an awful lot of prequel uh, sort of
Cast.
crossover. Ian
Yeah.
McDiarmid's in it, Christopher Lee's in it for a minute. Ray Park is actually the stunt guy playing the Headless Horseman in all the fight scenes. There's probably something I'm even missing right now. There's also a lot of Harry Potter crossover. Uncle Vernon's there, Rita Skeeter's there, other people. It was just a really fun year for movies. I'm not even at the Blair Witch Project, which I never really cared for, but that was a huge deal just in the pop culture. I mean, it was a big, huge year for movies, and it saw the release of like the first Star Wars since Return of the Jedi. So this was a thing. This was like, I mean, there was other movies. I can't even name them all. They're all in that book that I mentioned up front. But 1999 was a big year, and it was like this sort of hallowed ground. This wasn't just another movie. This was another Star Wars movie. This was like
Mm.
an event. And
Hmm.
I don't think we have those anymore. Even things like Avengers Endgame, which everyone saw,
Yeah, that's the kind
even
of thing
things
that
like
comes
Avatar,
closest. Yeah,
you know,
that's the kind of thing
Yeah.
that comes closest to
yeah,
this, but it has gone away in the way that you're
The,
referencing it.
the hype and the energy and the general
this
attention
was,
around it
Mm.
was
It felt like a piece of
you know
history.
yeah,
yeah,
something like I still remember to this day like people camping out in front of movie
yes,
theaters to watch
yeah.
like
I
Revenge
mean,
of the Sith.
and
I mean, people,
every scrap of that trailer, long before people had like YouTube, where like it was part of the culture to like nerdily like look at every detail. Every scrap of
yeah,
this was being looked at and thought over. And there's all these rumors. People, Star Trek fans, the equivalent for this was things like the Borg, because everyone knows, everyone knows that now. Like, resistance is futile, but for a long time it was just a phrase and kind of a like a meme on T-shirts. And if you didn't know what the Borg were, you didn't really know, but everyone kind of knew. This was like that. You saw like this weird, this kind of Asian inspired makeup on this queen somewhere. There were like these things coming out of the mist. There were aliens you'd never seen before. Then there was the voice of like Yoda, somebody you did know. And then at the end of you saw clearly like, here's Ian McDiarmid again, the Emperor. Again, it was never a secret. I don't know why we treated like he was always
yeah.
Palpatine. He was always going to be Palpatine. Um,
Even
but you would
like
see,
yeah, I was about to say
you
just
would
like EU note, like even like the original novels like
yeah.
make refer to him as being Palpatine. Like that
Yes,
was great.
he was always Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah. Was that
We did.
was it like small tangent? Was that ever like a legit mystery for you guys personally as you were because we were kids? Like, did you ever think?
Not
No, I mean,
particularly. I remember
I mean,
feeling
I
that.
know
I
I know
remember
they
not.
basically reveal it in Attack of the Clones, like when
Yeah,
he's
yeah, of
talking.
course. But I remember the first film, like I said before, it feels like really secondary to the point where you just don't think about it or care about it. But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
knew, like, of course he was going to be the
the
emperor.
way I
It's just
remember, like the
it's kind of
magazine.
strange when you have Ian like in McDermott if you go to the behind the scenes of Revenge of the Sith, he's like, oh yeah, I played the Emperor and Palpatine, but I never talked about it in public. It's like, I mean, did you
Yeah,
need to?
I was going to
Like,
say.
magazines
I mean,
used
like
to
no
say, if
disrespect to him, it's just a weird way of like, why did he
Yeah.
say
you,
that?
you, you know,
Odd.
when you're checking out of the grocery, and like there's the magazines in the aisle there.
Mm.
Like, I mean, those used to go out of their way to say, if you don't want spoilers about the reveal of the Emperor, skip to page blah. I mean, I don't know why we treated it this way. I think the theory was, okay, so you know that Darth Sidious becomes the Emperor, but maybe you don't know Palpatine is Darth Sidious, but
Right.
he was Emperor Palpatine. Like, I mean, it was
Right.
just it
I
was
mean,
silly.
well, like
But
to your point earlier, like in just Phantom Menace, like you can kind of, sort of, like make your own theories about that, like just based as it's presented. But even then,
yeah,
it's like I don't think what ruins it. What ruins it though, for me personally, with that and Phantom Menace is like that final shot when they're at Qui-Gon's, funeral, and
General, yeah.
Mason's like, who was destroyed, the master or the apprentice? And then they do that close like shot where everyone else is blurry, but like he's in frame. It's like, okay, like
It's so over the
I'm
top.
sorry, like
Even when he's just standing there doing
I
nothing,
wish
it's
they
like full
didn't do
ham.
that. I wish they
Well,
didn't do that. I wish they didn't draw attention to it. He should, like, him being there is not the problem. It's the way they frame that shot, the fact that it pulls onto him and then everyone goes blurry and they play that one little musical dun thing. It's like I'm sorry, like again, little side tangent. I wish they like if they even wanted to preserve anything, they shouldn't have done that. I'm
It's
just
very
saying.
tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it was just the experience of waiting for this thing to come out, and I had never seen like adults be waiting for like kids anticipate Christmas or like
Yeah.
what Santa's going to come bring the presents, and they anticipate their birthday or whatever.
Mm.
Um, like you were seeing the adults in your life going, "There's another Star Wars coming out," and it was just like Like, I mean, and I knew what Star Wars was. I'd seen all of them many times. It was one of the first live action things, something other than a cartoon or like, other than like maybe like Mary Poppins or other Disney things that I had paid attention to. I knew what Star Wars was. Um, I knew it well and I liked it. And it was also like some of it had scared me though. Not much of it, but the Emperor was scary to me. Like when I first was seeing that when I was like 3. I was
Mm.
really little and he's zapping Luke. I was like, oh shit, that's I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking. It's like the 3-year-old
Yeah.
equivalent, and I wasn't too keen on Yoda either. Yoda was creepy. I could take him, but he was a little bit, yeah, I will be.
Yeah, the
Like
you
what's
will
with
be is
him.
weirdly menacing that
Yeah,
moment, to be fair, as a child.
Yeah.
It's like,
you
hear
know.
me.
And then there were other things that I
Hear
just,
me.
not to get ahead of ourselves, but because we've still got to talk about the originals a little bit. Although there's less to say when things are just great, what hasn't already been said.
Mm.
But I mean, little creepy things like the fact that they had been inside that worm and had to fly out of it. I was, oh, that's creepy, and
Mm.
like all that stuff, and that all left an imprint on me. And I knew that the story was great or like a thing that a lot of people cherished somehow. You just kind of felt, oh, everyone knows this thing. This is like the Lion King or
Yeah.
Jurassic Park, which I didn't have a frame of reference for how Jurassic Park had basically just come into the world.
Mm.
That came out a couple years after I was born. I didn't realize how new and mind-boggling that was to people, but everyone knew
We
those
took a
things.
lot for
Lion King,
granted in that
Jurassic
era
Park.
as
Yeah.
children. We grew up in a pretty kind of a golden
Yeah.
age for media, really. In terms
Yes.
of everything
Yeah, yeah.
was coming into a groundswell of new technology, new ideas.
Yeah.
The industry hadn't been quite
Mhm.
as capitalized as it is now.
Hmm.
Obviously, it had been, but nowhere near to the same degree. Internet and social
Yeah.
media hadn't corrupted things in the way it does, so everything kind of felt a bit
That
more
was just
exciting and
that
novel in
that
a way
was
that it
just
just cannot
born.
do
Like
now.
the internet as even a sort of phantom of what we now think of it today, pun intended, had just kind of started in
Mm.
1999. Like
It
that
was
was sort
still
of the
just
birth of the
forums
digital age.
and
Yeah,
travel blogs and everything like that. It was
yeah.
basically
But
brand
it
new.
was this thing it was my first real awareness of being there for like a cultural event, and it was also in a pre 9/11 world, so
Mm.
that was which is obviously in a completely different sense, but something that made everyone stop and stare at the same thing for a long time.
Mm.
So this was different. It felt special, and it felt then you saw at the end of that trailer this guy with like horns on his head, and he pulled out a lightsaber, and there were two at the end of it, and you just thought, oh, okay. And there had always been this,
Ooh, a
like
double-sided lightsaber, isn't that novel?
but that was a big fucking deal.
No,
Like I mean,
I know, but it's
Oh,
just so
see
funny
that
and
how it used
Lucas
to
had
be.
always said, and Lucas had always said though that like because you would see him in press clippings saying, well, what you saw originally was like untrained kids and like broken down machine
Mm.
guys, and you had never really seen the Jedi in their heyday, and it really
Totally
felt
retcon
like,
later, by the way.
Mm.
It's
yeah,
just funny.
but it was just like the idea that, I mean, it felt like this guy was it felt like this could have maybe been the case, but it turned out not to be, or at least not in the same way as you wanted it to be.
Right.
But it could have been the case that you were talking to the next Tolkien, and he was sitting
Yeah.
about to. So you had the Hobbit. Get ready for the Lord of the Rings. That's kind of what it felt like, like that you were about to get that. Um, and it's the only movie I saw before my parents did. Um, I wasn't born when the originals hit theaters, but I saw this one before the other ones got to, because one of my mom's cousins. I always thought of her. She was closer in age to me in some way. She's like in between my birth and my mom's. So she's my mom's cousin, but she feels more like she's mine. She took me with her uh boyfriend at the time and on opening night and even in like the podunk nothing town that we I didn't even live in that town. I was visiting my grandma for the summer. But so I was just there and I wasn't around any of my childhood friends or my other family or anything like that, like my sister or anybody. So I went with them and it was just like even in a little town, the kind of parade like feel that you got from this. Like everybody was at there were people standing in the aisles that just like couldn't get a seat, and people like wigged out like when they saw the double lightsaber. You laugh at it, but I mean
Mm.
people were like,
No, no,
"Whoa!"
no, no.
Like, that was like
I
a
wasn't mocking at all. It's just funny to think about that back in the day when it's like, oh, it's double sided.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
The
funny to
and
think in
so
those terms.
Yeah,
and
the energy and
and
the
I
feeling, the hype, like none of that can ever be denied at any
Yeah,
point.
like
It was certainly a
Yoda
more
would show up, and,
optimistic
and
time.
people were like excited to see Yoda, even though he looked like that in the original version of that film. He's since been digitized, but that horrible puppet, I mean,
Mm.
the original Phantom Menace puppet, he like didn't look like Yoda, but people were still happy to see Yoda again, and you kept wanting it to be. It was like a movie that didn't really reveal its flaws to you the first time you saw it. People were so caught up in the moment, and I was young anyway. Like I don't want to act like I was sitting there with a monocle and ready to take notes of it.
To be fair, you
I
were
wasn't
born 90. Let's be real to
a
the
little bit,
viewers here.
but yeah, but it just the movie. I did know that the pod races were wrong. I knew that those took
Mm.
way too long, and I knew that I
They
wanted
did
something else
drag,
to
to
be
be honest,
happening
even for
instead.
children.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
was
then
7, so it says a lot that I was like, I would rather have something else than this. Like
Mm.
I'd never liked the pod races, never. It wasn't something I grew out of. They were never for me. But everything else, the way that the Jedi dressed compared to like everyone else, and the joke has since been made. Everybody in Star Wars wears robes. Yes, they do, but they don't all wear Jedi robes. Like
Mm.
there's a there's the look of Naboo of Theed, the look of nothing was everything was kind of similar. Like we had ships, but they weren't TIE fighters and X-wings.
Mm.
They weren't Star Destroyers. Everything was different, and he wanted to. It just felt like this is cool. Like it's the same world, but it's not the one that I grew up. I even thought of it at that point. It's not the one I knew yet,
Mm.
like from before, because I had seen the originals. And there was something about the experience of watching that even though it arguably kicks things off in the wrong direction, and in some sense can be blamed for dooming the other films that followed in its wake, I have a really I think a softer spot for it because of just that nostalgia of going into it and wanting it to and you had to sit with it for a while. That and the expanded universe that came out directly around that film, everything was
Mm.
to do with those characters. It was to do with those politicians, those Jedi Knights, those Padawans, those bounty hunters, the ones that lived during that time. Everything was circled around the Phantom Menace, and so it was like, okay, I'm ready. And I didn't really have my huge, I'm an expanded universe nerd awakening until KOTOR, which came out in 2003.
Mm.
But I was aware of like I didn't read like things like Thrawn yet, for example. That was old by the time I found it. And kind of new to me as a somebody who was already versed in a lot of the expanded universe by the time I got there. But everything I knew starting off was the original films and the expanded universe around specifically the Phantom Menace. So it was kind of the birth of me being aware of something outside of just the pure films themselves. I saw it before my dad did. I saw it before a lot of my friends did. My dad was always like an avid comic book collector for himself. And when I was a kid, he didn't buy me necessarily only comics, but he bought me a lot of figures and books. And so I got all those visual guides and references. And all those things made it seem like the movies had so much more going on than they really did. You'd get notes about, the stuff that Darth Maul's gloves were made out of, and there'd be a story attached to that,
Mm.
and it would be like, oh man, that's so cool. He got these from that, and Count
The
Dooku's
mul
boots, I think, are
the
covered
mul
in rancor hide, I think,
the
or something like
multimedia
that.
nature
You,
of the
you know what I
project
mean?
was a lot more novel and
Yeah,
Yeah,
exciting at that stage, and I think it was built,
absolutely.
yeah. And I was a
like I said
kid.
before,
I
a
was
hell of a lot.
tailor
It
made
enhances the
Yeah,
for it.
of
entire
course, we were
experience
the
know?
on,
audience,
yeah,
but it was also
so
Yeah,
many
made
avenues.
with a more, obviously it was made to make money. Of course it was. All things like this are, but it was made with more genuine passion behind it than I think most of the modern stuff is,
and then
and
the
with
other
more of
thing
a
is,
backdrop and like I said, a
Yeah,
and the other
single
thing is,
film framing
like
to work with.
care along with intention.
I
That's
Mm.
a big
my
difference.
my my parents were very wary about getting caught up in like the fad of like collecting things like Pokemon cards or
Mm.
whatever, like the other big fads that were out there at the time. And I simply never owned a Nintendo. I talked about that being a scar of my childhood. I was locked out of a lot of
Oh,
just what other people knew. Like I just didn't have one. And so a lot of like the cultural sort of zeitgeist, it wasn't for me. But this was the one I could engage with. I knew Star Wars. I didn't know things about like anime. I didn't like the other huge things. Not to knock those things. They just weren't a part of my world. Whether because my parents didn't support it, didn't buy it, didn't have access to it. The point is, I just didn't have it. Or some of the stuff I wasn't interested in. But it was just a lot of it, really. Like what was the other just you guys were there, everything that was big
Mm.
at the time. I was kind of like on the outskirts of a lot of it, but this one I could dive into. And over time I came to realize that I skipped vast portions of this movie, like the pod races. um Certainly some of the C-SPAN stuff that goes on in the political sort of spheres, but
oh yeah.
Great
and as a
negotiations, bro.
kid, yeah, I mean, and a lot of it, like I couldn't have even told you what they were saying. Is like you get to the point where Palpatine's making his accusations so that Padme can like level the charge against Chancellor Valorum or whatever, and at some point one of the other senators says something like, "Oh, this is a lie. You have to let us investigate." And then Terrence Stamp, who's an amazing actor who absolutely hated working on these movies, and I don't blame him, he had to sit there and say, will you defer your motion to await the findings of a political commission dispatched to investigate the, motions of your transgression? Like, I mean, like, there's some ridiculously
Yeah.
stupid line. Like, I mean, all of that filter. I didn't understand any of that, and I don't really feel like I was meant to. And you could say, well, that's the point. Every step of the way, Palpatine's saying bureaucrats, filthy bureaucrats, bureaucrats, and and I yeah, but that's
Truly.
and so but that's not really like deep though. And then when you look at the finished product, it's just like, how come we don't get more time with the Jedi? How come the movie isn't about like Anakin's training and it going wrong? How come the movie isn't about, the separation of like him and his mother? That's really kind of
Mm.
just a thing that happens. It's not about that. How come the movie isn't about the Jedi really being horrified at slavery going on in the galaxy and not doing anything about it? How come Obi-Wan doesn't do anything in this movie aside from
Right.
just be well played by Ewan McGregor? But he doesn't do anything. He hangs out in the background on the outskirts while Qui-Gon's chasing around the town.
Literally with
Obi-Wan
Tatooine.
does
he
nothing.
just
Like,
sits
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the,
I
he
mean,
sits
barely
in the
has any
jet.
presence in this movie
why
when he's
is
supposed
Jar Jar in it? So like there were all these problems with it.
you just
I
end the
don't
sentence
defend.
there.
Why is Jar Jar like
Yeah,
I
why
just
is Jar Jar?
I
Yeah.
yeah I don't I'm not I was never blind to any of these, but they came sharper into focus as I got older.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time trying to separate, just like with Revenge of the Sith, this from what I want it to be. This movie, I think of it more as what it could have been.
Mm.
And I would jump at the chance to redo it. Like if I had the opportunity. See, that's the difference. The sequels, I don't care. This one
Mm.
more than anything. And I think I would change the least amount of things with this. Attack of the Clones, I have to redo it all. Revenge of the Sith would
Stretch
change
it out.
depending on what I do
Yeah.
with Attack of the Clones. Um, the Phantom Menace, there's a lot of good bones here. I think they're almost all in need of reworking and retooling and reconfiguring and shaving down or building up.
Hmm.
But it's closest to like a new world, like a secondary world that I really
Mm.
still, even after what they did to it, even after what Lucas did to it, and
Right.
and what are we now, 26 years removed from its release, I still like this setting a lot, and it's I'm not usually about settings. That's the thing. I fell in love with this setting and everything. It was an apparatus, like a funnel for me to dive into another world,
Right.
Mm.
and I'll
Well,
never quite be able to like step out of it. I know I've been going on, but I'm just explaining why it's here and why
Yeah.
it's my kind of default favorite of the prequels, despite arguably certainly not being the greatest of them objectively.
right.
Um, and so much of it is boring and skippable, but I want to like it, and I want to
I'm
work on
I'm
it. I
right
want
there
to
with you
change
on
it.
Well,
I
it.
want to
I'm right there
rewrite
with
it.
you on it.
yeah, I actually like have
Yeah.
like I agree with a good portion of what you said. Like to me, the biggest strength, like the reason I think for me, the reason that it falls into the middle for me is because, well, Attack of the Clones definitely has gotten worse over the years. But for me, the reason this one sustains over that one is yes. How I said earlier that my biggest praise of Revenge of the Sith was the coherent narrative. Although I do view this as being less coherent than that, this is still recognizable to me as a film, which is a weird thing to say. Unlike Clones, where unlike Attack of the Clones, like that's just things happen. Whereas like with this is things happen because.
Yeah.
And again, very weird phrasing, but for me, that's definitely and also too, it's like, the plan, like you said, the planets, the ships, the setup. This is like, how we complained earlier about Force Awakens being a jumping off point done poorly. This is arguably, but you could say this is like a jumping off point, not done perfectly by any stretch, but done better. Like in terms
what it is
divide.
This movie is like, I think, blindingly flawed, but I think of it with something close to optimism, where that's just not the case with the sequels. I can see what this could have been. Those I don't even know what they were attempting to do, really.
And you said before, Matt, a bit of what both you're saying. The world expands from this film. There's a reason the EU is a thing, and yes, obviously there was large swaths of it beforehand, great swaths of it. But this era was the kind of benchmark. Once these prequels had come out, everything else was working off this as a starting point, either pre or post, and the passion that was thrown into it, from just the simple things like set decoration and prop creation and designs, concepts of the Senate and everything, all of that stuff. It was enhancing and enriching what had come before. It was stretching out the world, making it feel more lived in, more believable. The story that was told through it, deeply flawed, as we've said, but you could tell that everything had its place in mind. It didn't quite land properly, or at all in many cases, but it was there. None of that was present in the sequels, and that's glaringly obvious. To the point where even just simple basic things like they're not new ships, they're just TIE fighters and X-Wings, slightly remodeled so they can sell the toy a different way. This had new ship designs, new cultures, new species, new language. Everything was trying to be more. Failing a lot of the time, but trying.
Failing.
And also when we say failing, it's failing in like a critical level. It's not failing on an emotional level for much of it.
So here's an example.
Long and boring.
Let's give an example.
Long, but the exuberance and excitement behind it could have been captured. The Sith idea didn't go anywhere really, but could have been captured. And you see it in the year.
And I want to admit about the pod races that's a subjective thing. I know that some people like those, and I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong if you do. I never liked them. But let me give you an example of what I think is an objective flaw. The Jedi come to the council and report about what happened on Tatooine. They say, I faced a Dark Lord of the Sith out there. They're like, no, you didn't. That's a flaw. It's one thing for them to... If Qui-Gon had a reputation as being, he's the crazy Jedi. Now, he's not really. They say he's a maverick and he chafes at what the council says all the time. He's not nuts. Like, if a Jedi Master is coming to you and saying, I fought a guy out there who I think is a Sith Lord, and they're just like, we don't think so. And you're all sitting around here, just in this, even if there were no other Jedi in the galaxy, not one or two of you have gotten up off your keisters and gone with him back to Naboo they ordered him to go back to Naboo and to investigate the thing after he gave the report saying, here's what happened. Why are you sending him back alone then with just his Padawan if you don't trust his say? That's a flaw.
Count Dooku had a point in this context.
Well,
but shouldn't
too,
have done.
Well, that's the thing too. Like if Count Dooku were a thing from the start, you could have at least had him be like the bridge. Like, no, like my apprentice has a point.
Yeah, he could have been on the council making that point and bridging it to the second
conflict.
No, there's two things to that. And of course you're not suggesting otherwise, but so he clearly hadn't thought of Dooku in the first one, so we can't blame him for not being there. But your idea could still work if you just have a scene where when you do think of Dooku, he explains that that's part of what motivated him to do what he did. You could still make it work, even if he's not in the movie.
When people have taken the time to think about this, like, how can I make this work? Oh, I'll do that. Other people.
And those stories are all happy accidents. I love them dearly, but they kind of shouldn't have had to exist. You know what I mean? You want them to be in the movie. But yeah, anyway, I don't want to take up all the airspace. I've kind of said my bit about this movie, and I have a real schizophrenic relationship with it. Obviously, I don't call it a good movie, but it's the prequel I see the most promise in without just changing everything from like, without doing a complete overhaul, I guess is what I'm saying. But I would like for you guys to conclude on
Yeah.
this, or
I
because I've been
think
going
I
on this one.
Yeah, I think you make actually a pretty solid point in the sense of like the what it establishes being its biggest strength. Honestly, like to me, like where it really falls apart does come down to the structure, and again, that's why I have Revenge of the Sith
Mhm.
over this because
Yeah.
you have to do so much filtering, whereas with Revenge of the Sith, yes, it was the conclusion. It wasn't necessarily a well done conclusion to a well done saga, but at the same time, it at least tries its best to really be a capstone to this overall narrative, both from the EU and even in just the films itself, which makes it come off as more of a complete experience. Whereas to me, like it's very disconnected from not only arguably the original trilogy, but also the other prequels, that it really kind of stands out as like, again, we mentioned this before, there could easily be a movie in between this and Attack of the Clones, and because of that,
I feel like there's a way to combine the two of them into one
I
movie.
would
I
agree
think
with
that
that.
there's a
Like
way of
it just,
doing that.
I don't want
Yeah.
to say it does work against it in the sense of like theoretically from a pure narrative standpoint, it's the most unnecessary. But at the same time, I like it more than than Clones, because what it does on
Yeah.
its own merits, at least for the most part, stands the test of time more. And then even just from a purely entertainment standpoint, like the Duel of Fates, like there's a reason most people still consider that their favorite on-screen lightsaber duel, and it is entertaining as hell.
I mean, we talk
And I
about the
didn't
film as
even
an
really.
event. That end point
Yeah.
Yeah,
was an event in of itself. It's set up as
it
that. It
was.
was
Yeah,
very theatrical and almost
you know,
operatic in how it's presented.
The thing,
yeah,
I think the single biggest failing of this movie to me is that it does a poor job of establishing the Jedi and also
Mm.
the prophecy, which no one knew there was a
Midichlorians.
prophecy before
We
this
haven't
movie.
mentioned
Yes,
midichlorians.
yes.
oh yes,
Yeah,
yes,
well, see, I'm the least tolerant to those of our group. Because I just, in my head, I feel like I know what those were. I feel like Lucas wrote that they're young when they're taken. He's not as young as he's supposed to be. Why would they break their own rule?
Mm.
Let's say he's got extra who's he what's it's midichlorians. There you go.
yeah,
And I'm okay with that, even if you had made it more obvious that his potential is, well, just more potential than the others.
extraordinary. Yeah,
He doesn't really do anything that's awe-inspiring in the way that you would expect for them to react to the way for
right,
Qui-Gon to react to him the way he does when he sees him.
right.
And there
Well,
are in many ways I
that's
would change
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's also a problem with like the whole prequel trilogy. Like we're constantly
Yes.
told Anakin is extraordinary, but if you just go by what he does, he doesn't seem that compared to, for the most part, everyone else. Again, just purely going by the films, which is a big
I mean,
red
apart
Yes.
from
flag.
anything else, he loses to Obi-Wan, right? So I mean, just based on its own internal logic, we know why that happens. There's a lot of character and logical, footwork that's done to make that make sense. But if you just go by what you watch, he's a kid, he grows up to be strong Jedi, and then he loses to another strong Jedi. There is nothing that says he's the chosen one outside of everyone repeating he's the chosen one.
Can I say, just to kind of put a capstone to this, this isn't really the end of this discussion, because the three of us are going to embark on a series of sort of projects where we talk about how we would change the prequels if it was up to us. So
Mm.
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
like a little, if you've made it this deep into the discussion, there's a teaser for some of what we're going to work on later in
yeah,
this coming year.
yeah,
But sooner than you think, really.
Mm.
But
but
yeah,
yeah,
it's just there's so much we could say. I've obviously been talking nonstop about it because my ideas are just I haven't even said specifically what I would change, but I can't wait to do that with you guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is the movie
absolutely.
that I would still, even after all that's happened, even after ripping out my
After
heart
all
and
this
soul with
time.
the sequels and all the rest of it. Yeah, I still would like to remake this movie
It
and just make it better.
it was an
Absolutely.
era of
Yeah,
optimism. I think that period of our lives,
Yeah,
granted, we were children. That obviously, as I said,
we were
colored
children. Yeah.
everything. But
yeah,
even with
yeah.
that in mind,
I mean,
looking
this was
back on
before
the
the first Harry
technology,
Potter movie.
yeah,
It
exactly.
was post
Yeah.
book, but it was before the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the technology involved with this
This was
era
a long
is
time
everything.
ago.
I mean, we grew up from VHS, cassettes all the way up to what we
Mhm.
are now with live streaming. Like we've seen an evolution of technology that hasn't transitioned in quite the same way in at least a decade. With the sole exception, I think things like VR and stuff. It's not coming on in leaps and bounds the way it was back then, and that, along with all the different cultural aspects that were prevalent during the mid and late 90s and early 2000s, it was a different time where media could have been. It felt like a bit more sometimes, and particularly things like Star Wars. We've transitioned into a new period of I don't know, our culture.
Yes, it sucks to not be excited by or it sucks to just be like the joke of like I'm not like underwhelmed or overwhelmed, I'm just whelmed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a lot of stuff is just whelming now, you know.
And that being said, we
Things
are
don't
going
feel as
through, or
special.
just coming off the tail end of a golden age of television as well. We say all of that
Yeah.
amongst having so many
Yes,
different
that's
franchises
true.
and stories and shows coming out and being peak
We were just
television.
talking about the Penguin, right? We're
Yeah,
gonna get on that
beforehand. We'll
at
have to
some
do that at
point.
some
We'll talk
point. Yeah,
about
there's
that
so
together.
many
Yeah.
phenomenal works
Yeah.
coming out, but I mean, the attention economy is an issue. There's only so much you can watch, and people
Yeah.
are trying to print money left,
Yeah,
right, and
yeah.
centre these days. But anyway, we've come at last to the final three
Yeah.
of
Now this is where
So
I think
of these.
this is where I'm gonna
we
this is
all
where I'm
have
gonna
different
piss
rankings
off.
for this because I feel
Yeah,
like we might.
Yeah.
I'm gonna piss you off, Evan, because my number 3 is number 6, Return of the Jedi, and I know that this one, I know
No,
that this one is your
this one
movie,
is my
man.
favorite. This
Mine
one
is
is my
Yeah,
favorite.
and
mine is
I want
also
to preface
Return of
this
the
by
Jedi for
saying
number
though,
3, by the way.
yours
yeah,
too. Okay.
I want to
Well,
preface by saying is that although Return of the Jedi is my favorite in terms of personal enjoyment, but I can say with a straight face that in terms of structure, presentation, overall, filmmaking factor, I don't think it's the best. I think, well, I mean, should I
yeah,
say it? I mean, I think everyone knows what I'm going to say.
Yeah,
everyone
everyone knows what
knows.
you're going to say.
Yeah, I
No
think,
one came into
I
this
think,
questioning number 1 on this list.
well, you say that.
I would hope
I've
not, anyway.
You say
They've
that. I've
seen
heard
enough of
people
us at
make
this
arguments.
stage.
I've heard people make various arguments for all of these being potentially number 1, and I
Yeah.
think
Hey,
actually
those
you
are all
can do it.
fair, by the way. Like we're
I
not
think
we're
that
not
is fair. No,
disagreeing. Like
I think so.
it's fair. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fair
this one
to pick any of these. Yeah,
absolutely. So Return of the Jedi, personal favorite, but in terms of as a film, I think Empire Strikes Back is better. This is just the one I enjoy the most personally. So
this
You
one.
love the Ewoks. I mean, that's just, you can't not. That's the best part of all of the whole trilogy.
Hey, I do
Well,
love the Ewoks. That's not even my complaint, man. Like I mean,
I know,
like the
really
Ewok,
not as bad as a lot of
yeah,
people say.
I know, I'm
They're
only
the
kidding. It
Ewoks.
really isn't as bad.
Yeah,
It's done
no, it
the
really
Ewoks
isn't.
fine.
are the Ewoks are
Ewoks are
silly,
not
but I love them. They're silly, but I love what's silly
They've got
about them
heart.
is that they beat an entire legion of my
My
best
best
troops.
That's
Like,
the issue.
yeah, like that, if you take that line out, and it's fine. But this movie is funny. It's messy. It's just messy. Like the beginning of it is it's fun at Jabba's palace. It's a ton of fun. But what was this plan? Like I can't I will never understand that. Like Luke, just walk in there with your damn lightsaber. Don't stick it inside R2 and have this convoluted plot of sending them to barter with Jabba, and that doesn't work. So now he's a waiter, and you come in and force choke somebody and wind up fighting a Rancor with a
He
bone,
didn't
and then you
force
get the
choke them. He
sword as
didn't
you're about
force
to
choke
be
them. He
executed.
befuddled them.
Befuddled them.
We're reading the book that says so.
Befuddled them. Yeah, he
Oh,
choked
I
the
completely
shit out of them.
forgotten about that, by the way.
No,
We're just reading the Thrawn
no,
trilogy for obvious reasons. I had not realised he
befuddled.
tried to fix that.
Yeah.
He hath befuddled me with that one. But no, like so what I'm saying is the opening is a lot of fun, and I don't really care. But it's also like, when did Han become like a general? Like when did he become General Solo and important to the war effort with like his keen mind for strategy, and he cares, and he's
Between
a
New Hope and
leader of
Empire is
men?
the implication, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
they say
he
in
was getting ready to
places,
bounce at the beginning of Empire when like
Yeah, but
you
they
know
were
what I mean?
sorry to lose him is the main thing. I think they
yeah,
established it
A
reasonably well that
general,
he'd
Callan,
found his
Captain World Builder, Callan, like you, like
rebel
General
general, bear in
Solo.
mind. Rebel general.
It, it,
It's
yeah, it's just
threadbare, but
I don't
it
know.
gave just enough
It's
for me
threadbare.
personally.
What's Lando doing in there? Like you've got like all these points
Lando
converging.
just
Do
on a
they
guilt
talk
trip.
to
He's
each
like, oh
other?
shit, I have to repair this.
But
But
he's
yeah,
like,
but I completely agree. The plan is
he's
absurd.
like pulling down. It's so funny. Like I mean,
Yeah.
I don't get it. You know, and the technology might not have been there for this, but like Boba Fett going out the way he does, maybe they couldn't give him a proper like Django style kind of CGI and help from like the modern technology, making them more believable what they're capable of. But I was always like, man, and I wasn't even the biggest Boba Fett
Oh no,
fan.
I didn't
People
particularly
love
care
Boba
about him
Fett,
at all. He was
but I
cool,
was
and that
like,
was it. But they did him
he was
dirty. There's
cool,
no question about
but I
that.
was like,
it
that's
comes off
not,
as silly. Like I said,
Yeah,
yeah, it comes off as very silly. For me though,
but I kind of love it. I look on
yeah,
it with like a charming, like it's silly, but I love it. I don't resent it. It's just I can't put it above
yeah.
something like
You see,
Empire Strikes Back, you
yeah.
know?
No, again, like for me, it really comes down to a style thing. Like what I really enjoy about this film is that for me, like it combines like kind of the swashbuckling nature of New Hope and combines it with the emotional beats that were done so well
That's a
in
very good
Empire,
point.
and that's why to me it's the most tonally speaking, just based on the original trilogy, I would argue actually the most balanced because it's not necessarily going all one way or the other. And when they do shift, I think it does both of those elements very well. So to me, it's a matter of presentation and balance, and other things we'll get to more in a second. Again, as a film, I acknowledge it has a lot of flaws. It is messy, particularly in the beginning. It does,
Yeah.
I would say
The
it
then you know
there
there's
being
the
like, and I'll say this too, there being another Death Star is dumb.
Yeah, well, these are the things I'm about to make, because I completely agree. Tonally speaking, that's a really good point. It does the balance very well. It never feels like the silly aspects, which I don't feel are too silly, but there are a little bit of silly aspects.
well, I like
That
the silly stuff.
overpower the
I like
Right.
Ewok God
Yeah,
3PO. I like
yeah.
all that. That's
No,
all
I like that
fun,
as well.
you know.
It's fun, but and actually the swashbuckling element being mixed with the serious emotion aspect, I completely agree with you on it. And that's not the issue for me. The main problem with me is I would have kept that well-handled balance, and I'd have used a different plot because there is absolutely no connective tissue between the first third of that film and the last third, aside from the fact that we need to get Han back.
Yeah.
Well, there's even
That is
that is completely true, and and even with what they do in the last third, there's not a lot of consistency there because
yeah.
what do they accomplish down there? You could say they're taking out the shield generator, but what are they actually doing on screen? It's mostly being held up outside that corridor and being pinned down until they're able to get an opening. Like they don't. It's there's kind of stuck there, and the movie doesn't quite know what it wants to do with it. It knows what it wants to achieve in the end, but it doesn't quite get there. This movie also has the heinous sin of Tarzan. That is the that is the silliest thing
It's a bit
prequel. Like
much.
I
I
mean,
agree.
that is too much. Like I'll take the Ewoks. I'll take them with their sticks and stones and beating the best troops. I'll take the Ewoks. That's okay. I love 3PO telling the story.
Yeah, no, I like that in particular. It's a nice little bit of piece of the world, given form. It kind of plugs back into the whole natural idea of telling a story in the oral tradition. It's obviously what it's doing
Yeah,
for this
yeah.
tribal community. But it kind of with Luke watching it, Leia looking over and then kind of stepping out for a moment. That kind of human character quality of it kind of really makes it feel like a little piece of Star Wars as you're recounting. I mean, this is a story from the Empire, right? It's telling the Empire Strikes Back. It's just a nice little moment. But yeah,
But
what you said
you
before.
think about how special a moment that would have been to see in the theater before like the days of like VHS and watching it over and over
Yes, yeah,
again.
exactly.
I mean, that's a really, really clever touch and like an underrated bit of storytelling there. So again, this movie is full of a lot of silly things, a
Mm.
lot of silly things, and some things that are awesome but haven't aged well, like the speeder bike chase, for
Yes,
example. I mean,
yeah. I
as a
remember that
kid,
being
I
really cool
loved
as a
that.
kid. That talk about
And
you
then
talk
when you
about how
look
the
at it
pod
now.
racing goes on too long. That was a nicely balanced and timed scene. Given the
Right.
Yeah,
stakes involved and the
that
relevance to the
scene
plot.
was. I mean, I loved everything about that, from like the way that those troopers were dressed to the bikes themselves to the
Mm.
coolness of like with the lightsaber and like sending them spinning and everything.
Makes
It was
absolutely
like a
no
proper Jedi
sense. Those
adventure.
being the vehicles,
You
by
know.
the way, but
Oh yeah, like you're gonna kill
Well,
yourself.
yeah.
Like,
was
It
but
makes a lot
possible.
of sense for that environment.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, yeah. Again,
That
not the
aside,
point. It was awesome,
Matt,
right? But
Didn't you actually used to live near where they filmed that? Like, or am I
you
just
did,
I
didn't you? Yeah,
yes,
it was your back
yes, yeah.
garden, pretty much.
I'm back in the general area. I used to live as a uh, well, 10 to about 13-year-old. No, about 10 to 12 and a half, maybe. I moved, I think, around the time of Revenge of the Sith. But the I lived with my grandmother in the woods, in the California redwoods, so pretty much on Endor for
Hmm.
sure. Yeah.
did you have
Very
any like
nostalgic.
did you ever like see any Ewoks like walk by or some neighbors,
I think they called him the landlord, but he looked like one. But
But yeah,
uh
that's
yeah.
most of what I think we have to say about Return of the Jedi.
Well,
I do like it, and I completely get everything you say about the enjoyment factor. Evan, there is a lot to really enjoy about this, but it only really loses out to me because of I mean, the callbacks with the second Death Star to the New Hope,
right.
the disconnection between the first third and the second third.
Hey, but you know what though?
it's
Can I
plot
just say real
problems.
quick?
Yeah.
I want to let Evan conclude on this one because I know this is his like favorite film and he's
Mm.
got like a lot to say about the the stuff on the Death Star. As silly as it is having the second Death Star, it's awesome watching the Falcon go through the wreckage of all
Oh
that
yeah,
stuff though.
it's.
You know
I
what I
mean,
mean?
it's
I
all
mean that's
cool. Don't
like
get me wrong. I mean, as a
that is
kid, you're like,
awesome. Like
oh, that's
yeah.
so awesome. You know,
Space
as
battle
a kid, you're
is
Yeah.
not going. We've done the Death
glowing.
Star before.
Because
It's all fantastic. You don't even
Yeah.
question it.
I was always more interested in like the sort of magic-y Jedi side of things, but
Yeah.
when it comes to like the space stuff, the space battle stuff, that is like peak, right? Like that to me beats out the Death Star trench from the first movie every time. I love that. Like watching the Falcon be the Falcon, like
See,
in the midst of all that.
And also
So
just
great.
the
The Death
sheer
Star
volume
run.
of ships and all the fleet coming, the rebellion and the empire. Like, yeah, it's
It's awesome. I
definitely
mean, that was what gave me the love of sci-fi in the first place. That I know Star Wars is obviously science fantasy rather than science fiction, but with my limited exposure and awareness of it at that age, that was the thing that kind of sparked it. I was like, starships are cool. You know, fleet battles are awesome. You know, navies are brilliant. All that kind of stuff. That came from that. So I absolutely get that on that level. I do think
Oh,
personally,
Admiral
and
Akbar's fault, huh? It's a trap.
It's a
oh
trap.
gosh.
He was your guiding
But
light as a child. Yeah.
not quite, but the vibe of the rebellion and the empire it was
It's
cool to
actually a
see on
shame.
screen.
It is actually a shame that's what he's remembered for
I
because
know, right? He's got some great
he's got a
material
lot more
in the
layers to
EU.
him.
Yeah,
I'm just saying it's like
but
it's funny, but it's like when you think about like him as a whole, it's like really
yeah.
like I don't
But
know.
visually, in terms of like the aesthetic and the action and the fun of the scene, I mean, you were talking again about the balance aspect to you, Evan. It's really nicely played off against the seriousness of not that the battle isn't serious, obviously, but it's just action oriented. It's pure. This is spectacle kind of thing, and tension in the backline of the main drama between the Emperor and Luke. But it never. Neither side of it outstayed its welcome. It flips between the two very
Mhm.
very well. But to your point, Matt, I do prefer the Death Star, the trench run in the first one. I think that
How dare you?
was more engaging for its own sake. You know, the latter part is the latter part in Return is kind of set dressing and fun and adventure and cool sci-fi stuff, but it wasn't connected to the story by design. So that's why the New Hope won over for me on that one. But Evan, do you want to talk about Luke
Whatevs,
and the
man.
Emperor,
Like,
because obviously
Yeah,
that's the
I'm
real
well,
thing that elevates this
well, yeah,
entire
we've
film.
we've
yeah.
we've gone over like our favorite scenes, at various points, from each film. Like to me, like my favorite scene in this actually encapsulates why it's my favorite film. And actually, well, my favorite scene is actually Luke and Vader on Endor right before they go up to see the Emperor when they're just on that little balcony when it's just the two of them. The I mean, it's like it's almost hard for me to put it into words because the sheer emotional impact of that sequence, the setting, the fact that there's almost no music, the
Mm.
back and forth that they have, and the fact that it's very clearly an inverse of their dynamic previously on Bespin, the fact that Luke is, insisting that like, no, I'm not going to try and kill you. I see the good in you. I know what you're feeling. I know you have this conflict. Come with me, and the fact that he's extending his hand, to his father, despite the fact that they had just despite the fact that he lost that hand to his father, previously. He's not actually doing that in the scene, obviously. I'm speaking metaphorically, but to me, that's actually not only my favorite scene in this movie. If we're just talking films, that's actually my favorite scene out of the entire saga
Mm.
personally. And a lot of it just comes down to the fact that every little aspect from a filmmaking perspective is just pulled off so beautifully. Again, like the fact that they're in the forest, it's dark out, it's just the two of them, and the fact that it's really the first time they're ever speaking to each other as equals or near equals. It's the classic father and son dynamic. The fact that one of them has had to grow up to this point, you follow Luke's adventure, and the fact that even though you have his mentors pushing him in a certain direction, he's still holding true to his own beliefs and what he wants to do. And it shows the fact that he's not going to be a Jedi like they were or like his father was. He's going to be a Jedi in his own way. And the fact that he the conflict that you can witness in the dialogue from Vader is just so excellently pulled off, in my opinion. And again, that leads into the sequences with the Emperor, Vader, and Luke, which those scenes are honestly the best parts of this movie
Yeah,
for
I was
me.
gonna say
Yeah,
like
they
that's
hold it
my
up.
favorite.
If you take those out, this film is indisputably the worst of the three. Not in like it's a bad film way, but just in terms of like its significance. I
Right.
mean, both within the saga and as a pop culture item. You know.
That is what like saves this movie for me because the
Mm,
emotional beats. First of all, the fight itself is fantastic in my opinion. Like,
mm,
again, it's not. I would still say the fight in Empire is better, but this one's still great. I actually like the setting, the Emperor's throne
mm.
for the
Well,
conflict.
it's
It makes for a
iconic.
lot of yeah, it makes for a lot of very interesting visual cues, and also, yes, this is Ian's first. Well, not about to say retcon because he wasn't technically in Empire when it originally came out. That was somebody else. They edited him into that later. Again, that's his own thing. But for all intents and purposes, this is the Emperor, his first outing as the Emperor. And we brought before, like Matt was saying earlier when we were kids, he was scary, like
Mm.
This
legitimately. But
guy, like, no
what's
wait,
great though is
yeah,
he's not
this every
scary.
scene.
Yeah,
Every scene he's in is perfect in this
Yeah,
movie.
terrifying.
Every
it is.
single scene, like
Yeah,
from his appearance when he shows up on the shuttle and he's coming out with his cane and like Vader bows his lines when he said he's like you don't have to do that, like even though you do
You
have to do
do.
that and you do
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like you get all of that just from the way he says it. It's like this guy expects absolute obedience. It's like
Yeah.
later in the preface to the scene you mentioned when they're on Endor when Vader comes, it's like I sense my son down there's strange that I have not. It's like there's a kind of
Mm.
like a
But
what does
I
that
love again.
mean? Or like
I love that though because it's the first
yeah.
indication of like well it's several fold. For the one thing you have Vader and Luke's connection, but it also feeds into what ultimately becomes Palpatine's downfall because it shows that for all his power in the dark side, if there's something that he just fundamentally cannot understand, like a connection between a father and a son, he can't interpret it. He's more powerful than them, but that doesn't necessarily matter if he himself is just something he fundamentally can't wrap his mind around, which of course leads into, his ultimate like demise. Like the reason he was killed is because the idea of, and again, it's so well done. Like the reason he dies is because, well, the idea of Vader willingly sacrificing his life to save his son was something he fundamentally could not understand, which ended up being his downfall. And I love how that's like set up in that sequence, and the fact that it all
The whole
sort of
thing. Yeah,
cascades into it is just brilliant. Like, so
everything about it.
I can't gush about those scenes enough. I
No,
could
well,
go
I mean,
on
no,
forever.
no one can. That's the
I
main
think
thing. They're
Yeah,
heralded as like peak. I mean, examples of fiction in cinema. I mean, there's a reason
yeah,
it's a pop culture hit in the way it is, and it resonates with people. These are very pure ideas in terms of how simple the kind of fundamental power of it
well
lies behind it.
okay,
They're
yeah.
playing with them really cleverly, and the nuance of the interpersonal aspects of it, particularly with Vader and Luke, and like you say, the Emperor's misunderstanding of it is layered and textured really wonderfully and connected to the rest of the
it's
trilogy. But this is
Right.
good v evil. This is understanding empathy over dominance. This is all of these ideas being woven perfectly into not just a
Mhm,
cinematic experience, but visual like fight. Like you're seeing
mhm.
the argument play out on screen. It's
I mean,
very very
Yeah,
yeah,
powerful.
and
I
it
really
also
like
it also
the
oh,
fight itself,
yeah.
but sorry, I love the build up to it with all the temptation because
Yes.
the Emperor does best Luke for a while. Luke gives in. Luke
Mm.
loses what it is to be a hero or a Jedi for a while. He almost goes too far. I mean, he goes too far, but he's able to pull back. But the Emperor is like everything about the whole interaction. Take away the prequels. You
Mm.
don't need to know his past. You don't need to know it. You know this guy has never, ever lost before. Never. He always has gotten what he wants in the end. So it's
Mhm.
when Luke tells him no, the look on his face, it's not just like an inability to understand good. It's like, holy shit, I've never fucking lost before. Like,
Mm.
and it's kind of like that's where like the anger comes from. Like, I'm
Mhm.
gonna fry your ass because it's not
That's
just
right.
about like killing you. It's I want you to suffer because
Mm.
you checkmated me. I don't get to win this time. I don't know that feeling. You
Mhm.
know that that's new to him. It's so perfectly done.
And
Yeah, and it's
You
purely
like
on the
mentioned
it's
the
like
actual fight.
even in the earlier sequence, like when he's
Yeah.
like with the lightsaber, it's like he obviously knew that Vader was gonna step in and block the blow from the get-go. Like
yeah,
he's
he's
calculated
always
this
in
all down
control.
to like the most minute detail up until that point, and the fact that he's literally just reveling in it at every turn. I mean, it's amazing. And what's great too is he's still like take away the lightning. That's not even the most threatening thing about him. It's like what he says and how he's able to pull the strings that really comes off as, the most intimidating for me personally, and I believe you guys feel the same way about him
Oh
in
yeah.
that scene. Lightning's almost an afterthought, but also too the fact that like again, take away everything. Imagine you're seeing this for the first
Yeah,
time
we haven't
in
seen a
the
Jedi use
80s.
lightning before at this point.
We
That's
never
just
see
cool on that level. There's a
Yeah, the
tiny
fact
that
that
was
like,
cool
oh,
too.
you
there.
can do that, like that's
But
like
Yeah,
what
you could do that. Yeah.
the other part as well, the deeper part for me on the Luke side of the spectrum is the conflict and confusion of what he's supposed to do as well. Particularly, obviously, as an adult, there's a separation of the action and the emotion and the intention behind it, so it's a bit easier. But for a child, it's like, well, if you can't strike him down, how are you going to beat him? Is that idea, and where is this going? The fact that he can attack, but he has to make sure he does it from a place of calm and consideration and care. That is very nicely represented, both by Hamill's acting and by the nature of the direction with the shot as he turns around and he's playing the trick, but also you can see him centering himself in it. There's a lot of internal work being shown visually through the various different cinematic techniques they use. It plays so perfectly. And a great build up as well. It's timed and paced, that sequence. We mentioned about how it cuts to the action outside and stuff for breaks. It's so perfectly paced, going from the start to finish.
Yeah, even from like a visual perspective, the fact that they're talking like there's a sequence where the space battle starts and then it cuts back to them, and you could actually see like little twinkling in the view screen that Luke's looking at. So when the Emperor's saying like, "Oh, your fleet is like a trap," and you could actually see that happening from his perspective. Just little things like that. It's very smart filmmaking.
Well, that's what it's about. Like that is what it's about, because the scene on Endor, Luke already turned his back on Vader, while he had his lightsaber out. He had Luke's lightsaber out. He didn't have any defense. He could have killed him. The danger is not really, oh, Luke's gonna die. The danger is Luke turns into Vader. Like that's the biggest danger, and that is what the Emperor wants. And the whole thing is like arranged such that you have a front row seat to me nuking your friends one by one, and also the ones down there are not safe either. It's perfectly done. I think the one weakness of the entire thing, it's not the scene, it's more like the saga as it was, is um Leia and her being his sister is sort of the crux of the temptation after a point, and you just don't really have enough time with them in the movies to really buy them as close brother and sister. I mean, it's so clearly not the case that was the case in the first movie.
Particularly not the
So
second.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
It's no
Like
secret that was never intended, and I agree with you. The sibling dynamic between them, like I'm glad the EU really fleshed that out. Like there's a lot of
because
stories where
that's
you buy
because that's
that.
the
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
that's the bit where Luke really flies off the handle, is when Vader starts, so you have a twin sister, like, and he's
The
that's when
pacing of that
he's
line as well. Well,
yeah,
perhaps
yeah,
she will.
yeah. See,
That delivery is
it's
perfect.
amazing. The only thing that would make it perfect is if they had had a close bond as brother and sister up
Yeah,
until he told her, "Hey, we're brother and sister."
yeah,
Like, you know what I
exactly.
mean?
And that's something they
So
could have spent if they just retweaked the first third of the film. Again, this is kind of like
sure.
a lesser version of the Rogue One issue. They did great stuff with the first third, and it's great on its own. But because it's not got anything to do with the second part, aside from making Han available, I mean, the whole of the first third of the film is let's get Han back. So that's just not really necessary. That
It's
could be an
messy.
entire
It's fun, but it's messy.
Yeah.
I would restructure
So you could have
this,
had some of that time shown with them.
Yeah.
Just the fact that if you take away the mystery of what's happening in the first, you open up with them having some bonding moments. How are we going to be able to pull this off? We've been playing this for so long. All that kind of stuff. Just showing them having some breathing moments beforehand. It would have helped.
If I were to restructure, I would have had an opening between them specifically.
Yeah.
See, every scene there in itself, without like those added things that would have made it better in the run up as in a saga sense. I think it's the greatest set piece in the entire original trilogy. As a movie, though, I don't have a single flaw with Empire myself, aside from in retrospect, there, yes. But and again, that's only in retrospect. When I
Mm.
first saw that,
Right.
there's no problem. Um, and there's just a classic feel to the first one, which I'd like to pivot into. But like this business on the Death Star is, I mean,
Yeah. For
I
me,
think pretty
I
perfect. It's the
Mm.
yeah,
best stuff in the original trilogy, you
yeah.
know.
I acknowledge that structurally it's not the best movie, but like I said, what really the emotional moments combined with the balance of like tonal is what really carries this one for me,
Yeah.
and why it's personally my favorite out of all the theatrical releases. So
And
that's
I kept trying to mention it, but I kept interrupting by accident. But the actual fight between Luke and Vader's fun and cool and all, and pretty dark and dangerous and scary in itself. But everyone loves the music cue, like when he flies
Mm.
off the handle and he's like attacking that
Mhm.
sort of like choral sort of
Slowly
like
building
sound.
up.
Like,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
very,
that's
very
that's
cool.
you know that's one of the, and I think for a long time it wasn't like available as like something you could buy on like a CD. It's available now and long
Mm.
since has been, but there was a long period of time where if you wanted to hear that, you kind of had to like listen to it in the movie or find some weird fan creation somewhere. But that's a classic bit. But anyway, so the next one, number two on my list is number four. A New Hope, originally just Star Wars. Um, I think that this is a perfect movie. I don't have a the only thing is I like Empire better. Yeah, that's pretty much
Yeah.
it. This
Yeah.
is a
Well, I mean,
classic
what can
tale,
we really
you know.
what can we really say? Like this is number three for me. Number three.
There are there are obviously things that have
Yeah,
not aged perfectly. There's the odd line of dialogue that's poorly delivered or kind of silly.
Mm.
It's a little hokey in spots. It was famously, kind
Saved in
of
the editing, yeah.
panned. It saved in editing, but also kind of
living in
critically
everything.
panned by like the educated sort of like viewer
Mhm.
or whatever. They were like, this is for kids and stupid. But it'll do well because it's flashy and new and ambitious and everything.
Yeah.
And it is those things. It's also something a lot deeper than that. It's really great. Alec Guinness, we already said it. He hated playing Ben Kenobi.
But he did it
He's
well.
great in the role. He did it well.
Even
I
when he's
love I
phoning
love
it in,
how
he's kicking everyone else's ass.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I love how he like when someone asked him, "Why did you do this?" and he literally says like, "Well, I always wanted to play a wizard in a movie." I'm like, "That was your reason?" I'm like, "Okay."
It'll
Actually,
do.
no, just I mean, Alec Guinness is incredible. Like we're not lambasting
Mm.
him at all, but
In the
yeah.
in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, at some point Gary Oldman says the line like, "I've crossed oceans of time to be with you," and Gary Oldman said he saw that in the script and he wanted to say that line. That's
Mm.
why he did it. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
little things,
It can be very small. The
but
little pieces of art that
yeah,
shine
Yeah.
out to us.
But like
yeah,
This
literally
one is
every
second for me on the list, by the way.
yeah.
And I agree with you, Matt, that it is basically a perfect film in its own right. The reason it loses
yeah.
out to
The
me
only
isn't even its own fault. It's just it came first. So what they
yeah,
built
Exactly.
on with Empire, the world, the setting, the feel of everything, the fact that this is a high stakes situation between real factions, all that kind of stuff
you
came
might
after it. So
Every
you might not have
yeah,
a
every shot is iconic
photographic.
pretty much.
Yeah, you might not have a
Mm,
photographic memory, but you start the beginning of any scene, you know how it ends, you know the whole thing like by
yeah,
heart, you know where it's
it
going. Like
Yeah.
it's
just
just one of those things.
even without growing up
Even
with
down to
it,
like the
that
little mouse
works.
droid, that cleans up
Yeah,
going by like as they're moving their way through.
yeah.
That one
It's
stormtrooper who bangs his head, who they then made a thing in the clones and everything.
Yeah.
I
It's
love that.
all
It's one of
that
my
stuff,
favorite errors in any film ever. It's just the clunk that it
Mhm.
puts in. But yeah, everything is iconic in it. Like you say,
By
every
the way,
single scene you can
I
play and you
love
can
at
remember it.
the death of Ben Kenobi is like to me like that's like the peak of the movie. Like I love
Mm.
that whole. See, that's the thing about the Death Star trench run. I didn't mean to really talk shit. I was making fun of you when you
No,
were
no,
like,
of course.
I love that. I love it, but to me, the best stuff is the stuff on the Death Star. Like that whole
For
bit, like
sure.
it's kind of like the middle chunk of the movie is the most fun. That combined with the just the classic watching the twin suns set and the
Oh,
music there and
Mhm.
binary
Oh,
all that
sunset
stuff.
theme. The binary sunset theme and how it connects to the Force theme overall with the drawing the lightsaber from
mm,
the snow in on Hoth. That music. We
yeah.
talked about it when we talked about the Sith of Star Wars situation. That calls to a certain piece of me that it's almost like
Yeah,
it's going to sound way over the top, but like a religious reverence. So you just feel like
yeah,
that just chimes with you. When
Yeah.
it always does, but when you're particularly in the mood of like feeling that Star Wars vibe, of picking up a book or playing a game or whatever it is, it truly is powerful. One of the most powerful pieces for me, in my life, there's no question.
Absolutely.
See,
I
and
think
that
that's
movie,
probably my favorite scene, honestly, in this movie. That's
yeah,
hard though, because like I
it's
said,
hard to choose.
everything
Like,
in this movie is iconic. Like it really
I
is.
think
Like
for me, it's like the death of Ben Kenobi is aside from it's the only thing that is like on par. There's many scenes that are amazing, but it's between those two, the twin sunset and the death of Ben Kenobi, because I love when he dies, and like Luke's like no, and he's like shooting at them. I love how the door closes on Vader as he's like walking
Walking
toward them.
towards it,
It's like
yeah.
yeah, there's and Vader wasn't quite sure what happened there. He disappeared, and he's like stepping on the on the cloak. He's like, what the hell happened there? Like that is what I mean when I say that there were all these questions that you thought you were going to get an amazing answer to in the prequels, and they don't go
Duh.
anywhere. Like,
uh,
and then when you do finally get an answer of Force Ghost, it's the most disappointing thing ever, in my opinion. In my opinion, if you like it, fine for you, but I despise that what they are, or just how they get there. It's the little moments like that, the way Alec Guinness talked of the past, which he despised the dialogue in this movie, but he delivered the hell out of it. When he would talk about what your father was or what the Clone Wars was or this or that, you got like this real sense of a history baked into this setting. And it would have never gone anywhere if this hadn't been like the biggest thing ever, you know. And it's incredible work. It really is. George wrote it, he directed it. It was famously saved in the editing. Um, I don't believe every word that comes out of his mouth. I doubt some of his decisions. I disagree with a lot of his takes on some of his own work. Who the hell am I to do it? I consume the product. Art is a cyclical thing.
right.
It's I have my quibbles with him, but he led his team to like a damn perfect movie with that first one, and I'm sure that a lot of it was very, 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 very hard won and genuine effort because he had like heart trouble, I think, as a result of working on that first movie, and I think that that's part of why he uh pushed for other people to direct the following
It was
ones.
not a stressless process. I mean, the whole thing was a step away from disaster pretty much throughout the whole process. Apart from
It was
anything
a
else, the cost
challenge at
Yeah.
every point.
the
Yeah,
lack
like
of
well, like
expectations. Everyone was thinking, "Oh,
right.
this is going to be a flop." Even people in it were like, "This is ridiculous,
Yeah,
cheesy."
no one
It was going
thought
to
it
be
was
good.
gonna work.
Yeah,
Like that's it
and
took him so it was hard for him to get support for this. I mean, it's truly a
Hmm.
lightning in a it's like the definition of like a lightning in a bottle moment. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a
You
project.
got like you've got Carrie Fisher kind of doing a faux British accent in some of the earlier scenes, but the rest of it, she's awesome. She's great as like Leia. She just
Mhm.
bursts onto the scene. Harrison Ford, amazing. Like every line he says is really funny. Or I
it
mean,
it's something we probably haven't spoken about the prequels, but it is perfectly cast.
Yeah.
The whole cast were perfect for the roles. To be fair,
yeah,
You can't imagine anybody else, and it's amazing
yeah.
like
and
the amount
even
of people. Like, did you know like fun movie fact? Like freaking Al Pacino was actually approached to potentially play Han Solo. Like I love
it's
Al Pacino.
funny. Yeah,
Do not
yeah.
get me wrong. I love Al Pacino, but like I can't really
It's really
see
funny
that.
too, and also
He's not.
because they did not want him for the Godfather. They said he's going to
Yeah,
fuck up this picture, and he's the Godfather. But like or
incredible.
the but I mean, the suits are never they don't know. It's all
Right.
happy accidents, really.
Hmm.
I mean, just the decision. I mean, they could have just used David Prowse wholesale. Perfect body, not the best voice for the character.
Hmm.
You got James Earl Jones, may rest in peace. I mean, amazing. Yeah, they equally created that character together. Just
Peter
fantastic.
Cushing
Peter
as
Cushing, as I was just
Hmm.
going to say, as Tarkin. I don't care about Tarkin on a deep character level. I don't go to bed thinking about Tarkin ever. Amazing performance
But the
though.
presence,
Like
yeah,
I mean, he
exactly.
he
The
he
performance
but
was
owns
he's
the
fantastic.
stage when he's on there.
he's in
Yeah,
one he's in one film, but like he leaves such an impact. I mean, and so much of that is just down to Cushing's performance. I mean, he could
yeah,
literally do. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Peter Cushing could play like a freaking janitor at a school, and it would be compelling because it's
Absolutely.
just Peter Cushing.
Yeah, I mean, he is the
So
Empire as well. He is our
yeah,
lens to what the Empire represents outside of the mystical side with Vader and everything. So it's a very important
hmm
role to get right. Something we mentioned about the sequels.
I mean, even just
All of their
the
Imperial officers are
droids
just
too, like
cartoon
R2
people.
and
It
yeah,
fits the tone
C3PO.
of the film. And yeah,
right. And
R2 and C3PO. There is so much that is. It's hard to. I mean, chicken or egg situation. It's hard to guess how much of it was iconic from the start and how much was made iconic by the success of Star Wars as a whole. But pretty much every aspect of Star Wars, everyone knows it. It
There's
hits
something,
that pop culture craze in a way that few
yeah.
things ever do.
well, if you
Ever
think,
did,
and even then, it's like I mean, you ask your average person, like, name a few, like, what are some famous robots in fiction? A good time, I imagine they would mention either R2 or C3PO. I mean, aside from,
Yep.
honestly, I mean, I know that's a weird thing, but when you really think about it, like, the only other quote unquote like robot characters who I would argue reached anything, I guess, I mean, Transformers, obviously, Optimus Prime, Megatron, and all that, but that's kind of like its own thing
But
behind it.
but
So,
even stuff like that, your
or
mum will
like
know what C3PO and R2D2 are,
exactly.
but they won't know what Transformers. Aside from the name Transformers, they won't know necessarily about Optimus Prime in the same way.
Yeah, they
Star
won't know
Wars
which ones are the
is
Decepticons or
exactly.
yeah.
Star Wars
level,
is at this full. It
Yeah.
doesn't get more pop culture than Star Wars, and it kind of built the I don't know, conception about it, of how people approach
And even
that kind of media.
yeah, and even just the way like Anthony Daniels like walks when he's in the suit,
Yes.
it became
And it kind of is
just
like a limitation of the gear he's in, but it works so well. And he
yeah.
was sort of like, I think he was a dancer, no? Like something like that. Like he like did ballet, or there's a kind of grace he has. And there's something about 3PO's face that is somehow he's talked about it, how like he was drawn to that design because it's expressive despite having a very neutral,
Yeah, I mean, it has no
face.
emotion to it.
No.
But just
Yeah.
the sort of head tweaks get you all
Yeah.
Yeah.
used to
He's like
It's
surprised
charming
to a
watching him get his oil bath, on
yeah.
Tatooine and things like that.
yeah,
All these pointless scenes that don't need to be there, but they all do something.
They
They
all
really
add to
do.
the world
And
and the story. Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
yeah,
Speaking
And then
of adding to
just
the world and
important.
the story, do you want
Yeah.
to transition into number one? For
yeah,
most
yeah,
people,
Yeah.
because
whatever.
That's
my number one, of course, is Empire Strikes Back.
Likewise.
my number two, but from a filmmaking perspective, number one.
Yeah,
as
yeah,
a-
directed by the late great Irvin Kershner. I can't think of a scene in this that I have any kind of quibbles with. I mean, I think it's a perfect movie.
Pretty
It's
flawless.
I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it's like I guess I
I
get
mean, the one
the
thing
Luke and Leia kiss, but that's only
which is in retrospect.
And
Yeah,
retrospect,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not the film's fault.
it,
no.
I think it's always. I think this is not. There's a couple things, and these are things that I didn't think of until I'd seen the movie like 10,000 times, so they don't really matter to me. Um, I'd have to be looking at it again. I think at some point I was wondering why do they have to like when they're leaving Hoth, why do they have to like what can't they just like fly off in any direction? Doesn't it feels to me like they're like confronting the Empire when they could just kind of go off in any direction, rather than what they end up doing. Then there's the scene with all the bounty hunters and on board and Vader's like no disintegrations when he's
Yeah,
talking to Boba
which
Fett.
goes basically
And then
nowhere.
well, no, but it's no, that's not even my problem with it. That's fine. Like that's fine. That means that guy's badass and he'll kill him first if you don't instruct him otherwise. But then when they're like hiding, they're still hiding out. They haven't found the Millennium Falcon. The Falcon's still out in like the asteroid field. The TIE bombers are out there just firing bombs like left and right. It's like okay, like do you really not want any disintegrations? I mean, because if he would have succeeded there, Vader been
Maybe
pissed, right? But these are
maybe
like
they were stun bombs.
Yeah.
okay, sure. Yeah, but so again,
EMPs.
I'm reaching with these. Like when I'm
Yeah,
looking for
exactly.
flaws here, like they
I
don't
can't think of
matter,
anything particularly substantial at all. I mean,
No, I mean
it's not just one of the main things about for me, and I speak to this about Star Wars and most of the things that I really love about it. It's not just a pretty flawless film. It reaches into subject matter and kind of the exploration of personal developments and life choice and stuff. Everything on Dagobah. But also how it plays with the rest of the characters as well on a more human, less Jedi mystical level. This film, it can educate you a bit as you grow up with it. This is something that you can take and use as a lens for how you perceive, philosophy and life moving forward. That is high art, and to have it be fun and exciting and a bit campy every now and then, but not ever to the point where it's ever tonally damaging. It ticks all the boxes.
Right.
To have Yoda introduced the way he is,
yes,
and then
have all of his
him be
weight and
revealed.
gravitas. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
He's like,
Yeah.
like what film can do that?
Yeah, he's like
well.
he's playing with like Luke's trying to have his fish stick or whatever that stupid thing is that he's eating, and he's like whacking R2, and he's like, I will help you not.
Every motion though, I mean, we talk about every scene being iconic from A New Hope. Every motion of that film is like perfectly executed. Like there's no wasted
Yeah.
movement. Everything, all the sound cues, the music build-ups. I mean, the music. I mean, we talked about the
Oh
prequels,
my
which
gosh, yes.
the prequels did the mundane music. Like think about the I always use the example of the Droid Federation, Trade
Yeah.
Federation. Sorry, the droid marching
The
theme.
Phantom Menace is my favorite
Yeah,
ambient soundtrack.
that
It's so
is
easy to just listen to it and zone out.
absurdly good music for what is essentially just a
Yeah.
brief marching shot of things that don't really matter
Yeah.
for the whole story. You know, it does mundane better than the originals, but the original peak music is just transcendent for me. It really is.
Yes.
No matter what you're doing, no matter what you're
Absolutely.
thinking, it will put you back in that world, and you will feel good about it.
Mhm. And the fact that like each like set piece has its own unique track helps to highlight
Yes.
the uniqueness of each. And that's another thing too, like the settings in this movie. There's so much variance. I mean, you have Snow Planet of Hoth, the asteroid belt, Dagobah, Cloud City on Bespin. It's like these are the fact that they made each individual place not only feel unique, but we also spend enough time with each of them to get like a real sense of like we're not just careening through things like in Revenge of the Sith. Like no, these are actual places and actual important things to the overall narrative happen here, which is just brilliant. It's not an easy thing for any film to pull off.
Not at all, and it all feels lived in as well. That's the main thing. From particularly Hoth, when they start open with Hoth and like the hangar and the repairing of the ships and just moving around, everything feels real in a way that it rarely taps into in any other aspect of the films for Star Wars.
Before I forget to mention it, because I'm getting like tired brain, but I want to give Mark Hamill his props. I mean, for Luke, forever, for everything, right? But particularly for this movie, he spends an awful lot of this movie alone on his set with puppets and droids and snakes and plants and stuff. I mean, he talked about the fact that for like months it was just him on the call sheet with like like nobody there and um, that is and just it can be so you think this stuff also it's hard to even make it work in a book when somebody's alone and talking out loud and he's sitting there and he's like, I don't know, I just feel weird. He's talking to R2
Talking
and
to
he makes
R2,
that work.
perfect
He makes it work,
cinematic tool that we
Yeah.
have in the books as well. But when he's talking to R2 and is getting the non-responses that we know what they're saying, genius.
It's natural.
It's and you get the idea that like R2 is talking back to him like, oh, what do you think? Like we're being watched, and he pulls a gun on Yoda there. It's so good. And you go, you'd probably do that if you were him, like if you were in that swamp or whatever. And at the same time, Yoda's like, that's not the Jedi way, but I'll let that one pass. Let's see what else he does when I do this. Well, that's not the Jedi way. What is he gonna do? And it's fine. Like I can't teach him, like he's too impatient, and just the way. I mean, Frank Oz. I mean, he went from that
Oh,
goofy Muppet
Jesus Christ!
to
Yeah, I mean the delivery of these lines and
Jedi Master.
Yeah, I don't think
And
it's been done
and you
since. Can
buy
you think
it
of a
at every
single example where it's been this kind of impact has been reached from puppetry? I mean, don't get me wrong, they've come on leaps and bounds in so many ways on the simple
Frank Oz is like
scale
he's
of
a
it, but
unique, he's a singular talent because he's a film director as well. He's gone on. I mean, he's a all arounder. He's like a triple threat. He's got it all. And he's still kicking. Knock on wood here. But I don't know. Like that movie has just got so much going for it before you ever even get to Bespin, and that's like the stuff that like is in your. I mean, you think about how much goes on Hoth, like with like the walkers
absolutely.
attacking.
A surprising amount happens
it's
before the battle
battle.
even starts as well. I remember when we did the Wampa Cave scene analysis, Evan. Even before you get to the battle, there is so much time spent on that planet, just feeling out the characters and the world. And this is what the Rebel Alliance feels like, and this is the threat of the Empire. They go to the extra mile to make it feel lived in and real, and it really sells the world. Better than any of the other films for me. But also, just a note, given how, I mean, talk about pop culture, revolutionary the finale was of this film, like how much drama and effort went into making that final third so climactic and fantastic. It doesn't feel in any way weighted towards the end. The middle and start of this are just as strong and powerful for me as the latter third.
It never loses steam.
Very tricky.
No,
it's perfectly balanced from start to finish.
Yeah, at every turn. And the fact again, like it's also it's worth pointing out too, like this is a we talked about earlier about like how things like Last Jedi are just like depressing. Like you can do dark. Well, no, but like for real, like you can do like because this is objectively a darker story, much more so than New Hope. Even though quite a bit of serious things happen there, obviously. But
Yeah.
at the same time, like
Planet gets blown
they
up
don't
and
let
his uncle and aunt
Yeah.
get burned to
yeah,
death. Yeah, yeah. I
seriously.
mean, it's pretty
It never
gritty.
feels
Yeah,
like it though, does it? It
That's
always, it's because of the pace. It moves on so quickly. It's like, oh yeah, one
yeah,
of the worst things
that's
that ever happened did happen in that film.
yeah, like that's some heavy things, but where this film really succeeds in that is it doesn't allow the heaviness of the situation to clash with, not only the more optimistic elements in general, but also the feeling that, hey, this isn't gonna this is a story where it's not just gonna be all gloom from the
Mm.
get-go,
This too shall
And
pass. It's kind of that leaning into that
yes,
heroism
exactly.
journey.
And even
yeah.
as much as like they as our main characters lose in this film, they also win in a lot of ways. Like, the evolution of, like, from a character's
Oh,
perspective too, that directly leads into, the stuff that goes on in
yeah.
Return of the Jedi. Like, none of that could happen
Mm.
unless these things
I
went
mean,
forward. I mean, sorry.
Lando's not around very much, but he goes from like fakey guy to like somebody you want to be on the team pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like very charismatic performance. You want to like the guy. You also you hate him for betraying the friends you already know, but then you
You
find
also
out he
get
doesn't
it
really
though.
want to be doing it.
Yeah.
And if you
Mhm.
you know damn well if you were in the corridor with Vader,
Yeah.
you'd just be doing what Vader said. You know,
And also, but also he has
it's so good.
that challenge as well. Is that wasn't the deal? I tried to help my friends as much as
Mhm.
I could, and now you're reneging on even
Yeah,
Yeah.
that, giving the classic return line. I'm altering the
like
deal.
altering the
Reneging
deal, like
on
one of the
alter it
iconic
further.
lines.
And he
That
immediately
moment though.
goes
Yeah,
to fix it to the best of his abilities,
Yeah,
even though he
exactly.
knows what it's
Yeah.
going to cost him in the end, because he's gonna make himself and his city an enemy of the Empire. But he realizes,
again,
no, like, this is
if he
worth it
gets
for my
that far, he's
and
gonna
his
get
cause.
choked by Chewie.
Yeah.
But it's like the speaking about all of that, because this is one of those movies. Like, what can we say that hasn't been said? The answer is
Exactly.
nothing. But I mean, it is just like every scene you could talk about. When with the first time watching it, I was pretty young. I can't really remember firmly in my mind exactly what I was thinking, but it was like mind blowing to me when they walk into the dining room and Vader was
Oh
there. Like
yeah.
that was
Oh
like
yeah,
it, and the fact that you can't shoot him, like, or you can try,
Yeah,
it's not
and
going to
Han
work.
does as well. He shoots first.
'Cause
I
you
love
didn't know
that.
that. Yeah,
yep.
It's like straight
yeah,
away, just
He immediately goes
yeah.
for it.
reactions. I
Because
love it.
you didn't know that, like, it isn't baked into your mind that, oh, Jedi just blocked those or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
he did it with his hand, and he'd never seen anybody try to shoot him before yet.
Yeah,
It's the movie where his theme comes, the Imperial March. I mean,
Mm.
it's
yeah,
it's the movie that shows the Executor. You thought the Star Destroyers were big. Look at this thing. I mean,
Mm.
it's so
yeah.
so that
And even
movie. Everything about that movie. Harrison Ford's chemistry with Carrie Fisher in that is like off
Fantastic.
the
Yeah,
and
charts.
particularly the age difference involved. That was really well done.
Yeah,
you see,
yeah.
that's how you do romance in Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
it's
The iconic line of "I love you," and just like I know.
yeah. The hints we get to
That
Vader's
the ad lib line, yeah,
Yeah,
the
famously
hints,
ad
the
lib
hints
line.
when
greatest ad
we
lib.
yeah, the hints when we get to Vader's past too, like not only from Yoda talking about, Anakin's fall, but also like even just like little things, like he's in his chamber and you see
Yeah,
the
his
helmet
chamber, you
coming
Mm.
see
down,
his head.
a shot
Yeah.
of like the back, and you see the scar, and you're like, what?
You could write an essay on every single scene in this film.
He's
You
just
really
choking
could.
people every time they bring him bad
Yeah,
news, or Admiral Ozzel. Like somebody tells him bad news, and Admiral Ozzel brought us out too early. If I'll deal with that right
but
now, I'm going to call that motherfucker. Like,
Mm.
he's just done with him. It's
it also
apology
yeah,
accepted, Captain
Captain
Nita.
Nita. Oh
Like,
God,
yeah,
so
yeah,
many
it's like
iconic lines.
it's so good, so good.
yeah.
I mean, one of the great villains of all time.
But even that
Um,
too, going back to like the helmet sequence, that's our first. Also, I think that something else I think a lot of people sometimes forget is that's our first indication that he's human. Which, if you
yeah,
just go
That's
by New
true.
Hope,
Yeah, that is
you
true.
don't
the first proof of it.
necessarily
Yeah,
know that with absolute certainty. I mean, yes, 2 arms, 2 legs, all that, but like technically speaking, you didn't know, at
Yeah,
that point in the film that
that is a very
obviously
good
him
point.
being
Yeah.
Luke's father and all that, but like that's quite literally our first look at the humanity underneath that, which if you just go by the films, and again, that's great setup to obviously what happens later with the big reveal, with him and Luke. But again, it goes back to like the storytelling, like the subtlety in so much of the storytelling with this, with the everything from like the set pieces to the dialogue, and the fact that it all comes to a satisfying, crescendo. And again, even though things end up so negatively, like again, structurally speaking, like
I haven't
this is
even
cinema.
watched this
This is cinema in
movie
its
in
purest form,
several
like for real.
years, and it's just like
Likewise.
baked into,
Yeah,
like, you know what I
I
mean?
was
Like,
about to
it's
say,
Exactly.
playing
yeah,
over
I've
in
not
my
watched
head right
any
now.
Star Wars film for 10 years, probably.
Yeah,
And you could
And
this
recount it
movie
at
is just
every turn.
in
because and I'm thinking about like how cool, like Cloud City looks in my head, and I haven't really thought about that recently.
And
Just
the
like,
ambient
all this
music as they're
stuff,
flying
it's
towards it, and the
Oh
simple
yeah,
things
when I
like
was
we read reading the
yeah.
spoiler trailer, you get the moment when it's like, no, again, I don't have a pilot. I'm trying to get, and, just
Yep.
the in-world little beats of conversation are so good.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to go to Cloud City. I'm like, a city in the clouds, that's
Hell yeah.
awesome. Can we? Do they have
Well,
those? Like, you know?
I did and I didn't because I associated it with how scary like Luke's situation is. You know what
Mm,
I mean? Like you think of like the I forgot to mention like all of it, we talked about this already. It's a dark film. Even Yoda's kind of creepy, because he's like he's a harsh taskmaster and he's like you will be, like and all that
mm,
stuff. He lives on a creepy ass swampy planet, and so even when you're with the good guys, you're kind of like not too comfortable in this
yeah, there's
movie.
danger
And then
here.
you go there, it scared the shit out of me. Like when they froze Han, I was like, oh my God,
Oh
like that.
yeah,
There was
no, yeah,
something about that. Like as a little kid,
the whining kind
that's the
of
scariest
like
thing.
the
Like
the
It goes,
the,
that
arm goes
disturbed
in
me.
the
deep up,
smoke,
Yeah,
and
and
then
yeah, absolutely. The
they
whole
push it back, and it just clang like
yeah,
yeah, that
it
like
is.
more so than the
perfect set direction
as
and
much or more
soundtrack
so
for
than
that.
the Emperor himself, that scared me like to death as a little
Oh
kid.
yeah,
As like a 3 or 4 year old, that was so like I could like oh my God. But I didn't really like my dad had to say, he's still alive, they'll in the next movie you'll see what happens, but I mean he had to kind of intervene because I was not okay with that.
right.
Um, and it's been so long, like as you grow up, you grow out of that kind of reaction to anything really,
Mm,
so
Mhm.
I don't remember other experiences like that too well, but I remember that, very,
Right.
very well,
Yep.
vividly,
Yeah.
you know.
And that leads actually to like to the fight itself, which is just dripping with atmosphere at every turn. I mean, the
mm.
Bespin carbon chamber when you see the beginning, the fact that like you have Vader atop the stairs at the beginning, and then you see Luke walk up to him. I mean, the fact that Luke's the first to light his
Light his
saber.
lightsaber, failed the
Yeah,
Yes.
test, failed it right there.
Yeah,
It's like,
instantly.
every
it's so
single
good.
piece of the just set design as well, but everything about this is I keep using the same word, but it is all just iconic. Like every
Yeah.
aspect of
Perfect.
this is
You know,
perfectly executed, and from the music to the
th- th-
sound
this
design to the choices of fighting options, just things like blasting the hose and getting the smoke in his face. Just clever little. I'm going to try and
Mhm.
scramble my way out of this
desperation
situation.
moves,
Yes.
really.
Desperation,
Yeah.
exactly, because oh my god, I'm
Yeah.
panicking, and it perfectly blends what he's doing with the emotional experience of the viewer,
Mhm.
because they're thinking, what is he going to do as well? How does he get out of this? He's
Yeah.
clearly outmatched.
But yeah.
All
But
to be
that's
capped
but
off
then
by
yeah.
the most famous twist
Yeah.
of Inviction ever.
Course. Just before we get to that though, like to your point, Callan, like yes, it's desperation, but also what I like in that scene is that you can also see how far he's come since the beginning because
Yes,
he's
yeah,
Oh, for sure.
literally
absolutely,
his
yeah.
hand and the saber comes to his hand, whereas at the beginning of the movie he couldn't even get it out of the ice, and the fact that he can do that just instantly. It's amazing. It's like again subtlety, visual storytelling. I love it. Like this with like
Beautiful.
sequences.
Yeah.
Also,
The
by the way, to your point, Matt, too, the scene that scared the shit out of me from this movie was when Luke's like going through the corridor and you don't hear anything, and then you
Yeah.
instantly have Vader like come
Yeah.
out and like
Yeah.
that
Jump
scares
scare,
the
yeah.
crap
He's
A
out
like
of me.
he's
properly done
fucking
jump
huge and
scare.
like he comes out of
Yeah.
nowhere and he's like
Oh
pounding on
my
him. Yeah.
god,
And
That, yeah.
that
just
killed me as a
I mean,
kid.
everyone always remembers the rasping of his respirator, but this was the peak, that level of presence for me, when he's standing in the dark and just the silhouette against the black. It's so powerfully
And
visually strong,
what's fun about that
effective.
is because you were talking about the growth of Luke and how to start off with Vader's kind of unimpressed, like
Mm,
because he's wondering like maybe you're not that strong or whatever, and then he tries to freeze him and he thinks he's talking to a frozen block, and then he realizes he's up in the rafters, or he's oh okay,
impressive.
and then so he gets
Most impressive.
picked off the thing by Luke, right? You still are scared shitless of him, just like you then look at like Yoda like revealing what's underneath Palpatine's dress, like
Pantsing you
over
over
his
the
desk.
desk, yeah.
Yeah, you cannot take him seriously from that. You know what I mean? You can't. This Luke can get a few hits in and still feel like he's accomplished nothing. Like
Mm.
he's still like at the
Well,
got the ass
well,
end of
He's
this.
got that
yeah,
juggernaut kind of vibe of Vader. You can't
Yeah,
absolutely.
stop him. He's
And
unstoppable.
the scene where he hits him on the shoulder, and that's like the first time you ever hear Vader
he
actually
gets
like
mad.
roar out
Yeah,
in pain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
that actually like you could tell that actually got to him, and that's when he
yeah.
stops playing around and cuts off his hand. Which, by the way, I mean, seeing your protagonist get their hand chopped off.
That was another moment.
It becomes a bit old hat eventually because every single Skywalker has it happen to them. But by this point,
Sure.
that's pretty unique.
Well, that was the first time. That was the first time that you saw it happen.
Yeah, that's brutal. I mean, that's intense.
Yeah.
They don't shy away from it.
We
too.
talked about Hamill's performance as well, but
how
his
dirty
reaction,
and grungy Luke looks during all that. He's all sweaty and like, you know, like his hair's a mess, and he just looks in a bad way.
Yeah,
like, I mean,
he's not standing on a perfect stage where they're, oh, look how wonderfully set design and iconic, everything's clean. No, he's crawling over
you
a
compare
railing
that to the way that like the previous film ended, you know what I mean, with everything's perfect and sort of 70s hair and everything like that. I mean, it's such a different
what they do with the sequels in terms of the platforming of how they show all of these things as well. Like he's crawling over a railing and clinging desperately to a piece of like infrastructure and just sort of like, well, what do I do now? I'm just here, and having to be forced to have this conversation. He's got nothing. He's just like, this is the end. And then the reveal.
One of the biggest revelations in all of cinema. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, what else is
perfect.
it?
I use the word. I can't help but use the word perfect. And this isn't to say that it needs to be your favorite movie. It's just you can't argue with the decisions they made when they made it. You know, it's so good. I think this reminds me of like the one other thing that I never quite understood. How like the chute that he falls down, you know, like
I always envision like the Force is what he funnels it down to, because basically if you don't factor in the Force, he just commits suicide.
I'm almost like, what even is it? Because it like opens and he's out. Is this how they get rid of trash, or like, what is this?
Ventilation or trash something.
It's sort of like the ray shield thing that Darth Maul got separated from conveniently from Qui-Gon so he could duel him. It's kind of like that, but when you're looking at things like that to say this is a flawed movie, it's flawless pretty much. You're like, those are real nitpicks.
And even with that in the place, he did fall a massive distance. So like Vader can't exactly do everything. He's like, oh well, he's gone, you know.
And that's the thing. He does it because the one thing he can do, he cannot win, but he's got the spiritual victory of at least being able to go out on his own terms or not joining the Empire. He really, I mean, it's such a long shot that he survives any of it, but is able to, even though he lives through that he's able to telepathically call for help. I mean, there's no guarantee he's getting out of this at all. It's just he's not trying to join the Empire. You know, it's a perfect thing. And I will never forget, it's one of my favorite Simpsons jokes is it's in the past, like in the 80s when Marge and Homer go to the movie for a date, and you remember like how it used to be like the lines out the ass for the theater to go see these, and after years of waiting, and Homer comes out, wow, who knew like Darth Vader was Luke's father, and everybody's like because he spoiled it. It's one of my favorite old Simpsons jokes. You know, he just ruined like Empire Strikes Back for everyone.
Yeah. But even like you know, going on from that too, like the fact that like he's hanging from there, and you know, we get the call back because like when Ben's like, if you do this, I can't interfere at all, and he initially tries to call to Ben and nothing's happening, but then him, you know, calling Leia, which is obviously our first little hint of, I mean, after the fact, of course, but her connection to the Force too. But the fact that it's her, and the fact that, you know, I mean, them being able to rescue him, but the fact that he's still so, you know, shell shocked by everything, understandably, is just, again, it's fantastic.
I can. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. It was the
no. I was just gonna say it's fantastic. I think it's, you know, again, from a writing perspective, because he went there to save them, but they end up saving him, which is a nice
for sure.
Juxtaposition. So that's what I was saying.
The thing I like, the thing about the Leia thing, I can buy that in that movie they thought maybe she had the Force. It's whether or not she was his sister that it doesn't feel like they had that baked until either so late in the process they couldn't change anything about what they showed before, or I think more likely they thought of it between that film and the final one. But because they do talk about, they have that great bit where he leaves and Yoda and Ben Kenobi's like, that boy is our last hope, and it's like, no, there's another. It's like, you didn't know who that was at the time, you know. And I can buy that maybe that was always supposed to be Leia. It's just the logic of why.
It wouldn't make sense for it to be anyone else.
I think Lucas has actually stated that like from the get-go he always imagined that Luke would have a sibling. It's just who that was always kind of.
And I can even accept that. I can buy that much. It's just you just wouldn't have had them kiss twice, and especially not the second time the way they do. That just wouldn't fly. But
But I also, yeah,
But
but like,
anyway, this movie is what can you say? It
It's
doesn't need
pretty
to be your
perfect.
yeah,
favorite. It's all a question of
it's
taste. But this one,
incredible.
I love it. I feel like I grew into it because I was afraid of it as a little kid as well. There are a few movies like that for me, from different genres and walks of life, really. But this one is. There's nothing could ever happen that'll make me not like Empire or any of the
Absolutely.
originals, despite the like warts and all. But this one, it doesn't have any warts as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned. It's
exactly.
perfect, perfect.
Clean. Hmm.
Deserves its spot among history, and yeah, and hopefully it
We
always
didn't even
will.
talk about poor 3PO getting blasted to pieces. That
Oh
was another
yeah, well
fun
there's
little
so much to talk about. I
subplot.
mean, we
I
barely
know,
touched
right?
Dagobah,
Like,
and all that
Yeah,
stuff. There's
yeah.
you could
go
literally write
on.
an essay on every single scene of this film, and it wouldn't be extraneous and over the top for the most part.
Yeah, but we've been here for like,
A while,
long enough for you to watch the entire saga, I think.
Yeah,
But
certainly long enough.
yeah,
play this as you're going, you know.
yeah.
But yeah, so that has been our Fanalysis, this light kind of discussion on each of the films, and we've
Light
ranked them.
discussion.
Like just
For us, light, it wasn't quite 2 hours
Yeah.
per.
This episode wasn't for the particularly sane among you. If you made it
No,
this
it
far,
was not.
congratulations.
yeah,
Yeah, do it in installments. Go take a
much
break between.
appreciated.
Yeah. These has
Yeah.
been our ranking of the Star Wars films.
Mhm.
I hope you enjoyed. There is more content to come, not just Star Wars, but certainly Star
Yeah,
Wars included.
Yeah,
We are
absolutely.
excited about Star Wars right now, and that's
Yeah.
the first time for a long time for me, certainly. So yeah, I'm looking forward to all of it. Hope you are well wherever you are. Hope you enjoyed. Look forward to what's coming next. I'm Callan, and I still have an outro.
even after all these hours, he didn't think of an outro. Can you believe that?
Yeah,
Thanks for
you know.
watching, guys. See you next time.
Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.